Out of nowhere, gates leading to other worlds appeared all over the earth. These dungeons already contain walking monsters and countless treasures. People looking for new opportunities and dreams began to dive into these dungeons. Making your way through the dungeons was not easy, but there was one adventurer named John. When John once again made his way into a new dungeon, he was met by the monster Bakhmut. The guy just laughed because this time there was only one monster. The monster hovering in the sky thought that he would soon be able to destroy the gate, and when that happened, he would leave this terrifying place. To which the guy replied that he should stop his monologues and say that he would quickly put it out now. To which the monster only replied that the guy was crazy, and he added that it looked like he would be able to enjoy this battle. The monster said that he would make sure that not even ashes remained of the guy. Well, suddenly, without even starting the fight, the monster flew into the wall and was shocked by this. The guy stood calmly and told him not to dare look down on him. He also thought that the monster was restricting his movements. When John saw the blazing fire in front of him, he was surprised. To which the monster did not understand how it happened that he was a god, but he lost to a pathetic man. At one time, an inept adventurer, John rose to the top of this world. After John finished with the monster, he decided to go to the next dungeon. At the same time, special powers, later called skills, awakened in some people, and only a small number of the population possessed skills. Sometime after the incident, an organization was created for those who wanted to try their luck in the dungeon, which is now called the Adventurers Guild. Everyone must have skills if they want to challenge the harsh dungeons. There is not a single person who would dare to become an adventurer without having some skills. When the guy approached the reception, he was asked if he really wanted to become an adventurer, to which the guy replied that he agreed and asked to register him. There was a girl standing next to him, and then John asked again if she was really sure that she wanted to become an adventurer without any skills. It was clear from the girl's eyes that she was happy because she couldn't wait to start working together. John thought that he couldn't even imagine that there would be someone as crazy as he at the reception desk. But suddenly someone pushed John and his girlfriend and asked at the reception desk that two incompetents were going to become adventurers. The man said that this was pure suicide and said to allow him to personally demonstrate to the newcomers how everything was set up there. Then the woman at the reception agreed with the man and said that in that case, she would give the two of them to a man named Tom. Adventurers are divided into ranks. The so-called middle or rank includes many veterinarians. Tom said that in that case he would be happy to keep the guy and girl up to date as he did from a middle rank. A girl named Jessica asked the guy about the fact that he also did not have any skills. Jack said that they were making a lot of money, and although he didn't have the skills, he also wanted to make his dream come true. When adventurers defeat dungeon monsters, they drop magic stones and various items. Magic stones are quite valuable. Even the lowest rank stone can cost a lot of money. Jack said that he had reasons why he simply had to make a lot of money, no matter what. Because he lives with his 15-year-old sister, and their parents are missing, and now Jack is paying for his sister's education. Their life could not be called rich, but the guy was very happy. Every time the boy came home, he loudly announced his presence and called his sister to come to him. When his sister didn't come, he would look into her room and ask if she was sleeping. One day, seeing his sister with no signs of life, the boy became very scared. Taking her to the doctor, he learned that his sister had awakened a special skill that was devouring her body. It was a rare case of the disease, the first in Japan. The only cure was a new drug from the USA. This medicine was too expensive for John. Jessica noted that adventurers were people who followed their dreams and asked if he was looking forward to something similar. The guy laughed and agreed with the girl. Tom led them into a room where the man asked if they were the newbies he had written about in the chat. Many looked down on those who failed to awaken the skills, considering them incompetent. A young man from the crowd greeted the newcomers and noted that they would learn a lot from watching their elders. A confused Jessica greeted everyone. John remained calm and did not worry. Tom suggested that they go to the dungeon immediately, promising to explain everything along the way. Confused, Jessica asked to wait. John wanted the men to explain everything to them beforehand. The guy thought about the word that was troubling him. He tried to understand what exactly he saw in front of him, because he did not understand anything. Jack's status in the guild showed a lack of skills, which was explained by the presence of hidden talent. The mechanism of the prohibition restriction worked simply. John planned to level up and use the skill points he gained. His goal is to restore magic from a past life. He was essentially a reincarnator. In his past life, he achieved the heights of magic, receiving the title of a lone archmage. But having mastered magic, he did not experience the same joy as in this life. John's achievements in his past life were nothing compared to his sister's talents. The amount needed for the medicine was beyond his means, even with a lifetime of hard work. So John decided to become an adventurer to make some quick money, although even high-ranking adventurers would have a hard time accumulating such a sum in a short period of time. But the prohibitive restriction made this impossible. The guy was determined to earn money for treatment. As he entered the dungeon, he thought about his sister waiting for him. Tom explained that the lower-ranked dungeons are the easiest. He also advised the guy and the girl to watch his actions closely. Jessica noticed John's thoughtfulness and asked if everything was okay. The boy thought that, as he expected, his new comrades had no intention of teaching them, but it was still better than threats. When he said that Jessica liked it here, she happily exclaimed that she had always dreamed of becoming an adventurer. John advised her to watch carefully and learn. The girl blushed and agreed. Their conversation was interrupted by Tom's cry for them to run. After they moved away, a monster collapsed next to them. Tom came up and asked if everything was okay. Jessica replied that, fortunately, the column collapsed just in time. The gates in the dungeon began to open, and Tom announced that the boss would appear soon. The first condition is met. They reached the boss room without taking damage. The second condition was met. They brought in 2 newcomers. The third condition is met. Among them, there is a person with an awakened skill. It's time to summon an additional boss. This meant that the path of retreat was cut off. A frightened Jessica asked John if Tom and his comrades could defeat the monster. John replied that all they could do was believe in their comrades. When Tom approached the monster, it quickly dealt with him. Such sweeping attacks, when the difference in strength is obvious, are easy to counterattack. Tom rushed to save his comrades, thinking that he did not know if his plan would work, but he had to try. It all seemed incomprehensible. Was this really all they were capable of? When John stepped forward, everyone looked at him in surprise. John said that he had a plan to defeat the boss and asked everyone to follow his instructions. Omnipotent hidden skills of forbidden restriction. There was a special reason for this restriction. In exchange for being able to use magic without Ohm, all of the spells from his past life were sealed. Perhaps when John removes the limitations placed on him, he will be able to surpass his former self. After John explained the plan of action to everyone, a storm of indignation erupted. Tom was surprised by John's movements and asked if he was really incompetent. Everyone started yelling at John for lying to them. When a huge monster appeared before them, John asked if their main goal was to destroy it. John asked for some time to himself. Tom promised to do his best. While Tom was fighting the monster, his comrades stood in complete amazement. Tom asked how much time John needed. John replied that he would need 3 minutes if possible. John had already encountered mentors in his past life. The other monsters in this dungeon were not of the same level. If they had fought them with normal tactics, John's team would have lost long ago. John said he had only one way to defeat the mentor. The guy asked Jessica if she could help him. The girl asked again in surprise, her eyes widening, after which she added that he couldn't, and she would never hurt this monster. Then John put his hand on her shoulder and asked if this was what she had dreamed about. The girl hesitated, not knowing how to answer. The guy explained that he needed the girl's help to defeat the cop, and asked for her assistance. The girl gathered her strength and finally made up her mind. Jessica asked what she should do. The guy said he didn't have time to explain, and he just had to sit still. John added so that the girl would not be angry with him later. Then the guy put his hand under her clothes. The girl got very scared and asked what he was doing. Although it definitely looked like harassment, it was actually the guy's secret plan. Minotaurs are weak to magical attacks, but John couldn't inflict a mortal wound with his magic himself. He only had low-level skills, so they lacked power. To defeat this cop, they had to attack him with a powerful spell. At that moment, due to the forbidden restriction, John could not use any of his spells. That's why the guy decided to use Jessica's magic. Since it was quite simple, he needed to gain control over the girl's magic chain. Although it could still be considered sexual harassment, the girl retreated in fear and asked him to stop. When the guy walked away, she looked at her hands and was very shocked. John asked Jessica if she felt some kind of force building inside her body. The girl asked in fear what John had just done. The guy explained that he simply took the necessary measures so that she could use magic. The girl reminded that she had no skills. John reassured her that everything was fine and that she had a talent for magic. He added that this is why he relies on her. When Tom could no longer stand, he called John and said that he could not stand any longer. The girl was afraid that the monster would kill them, but John asked her to calm down and repeat after him. Then everything would work. The guy added that, although this language is unfamiliar to Jessica, it will be a little difficult for her, but he will try to explain it briefly. Then the girl began to blaze with a bright fire. Despite her lack of combat experience, she maintained amazing concentration in this difficult situation. John asked the girl to point her hands towards the Minotaur. After this, John cast the spell Fireball Crimson. Jessica repeated after the guy, pointing her hands towards the monster. After these words, the monster was instantly incinerated. The girl looked at this with admiration. The guy said he couldn't have achieved this without Jessica's help. The girl was embarrassed and thanked John. Level increased, title Archmage Reincarnation received. After defeating the Minotaur, John and everyone left the dungeon and called an ambulance. Fortunately, everyone was in stable condition, although they were seriously injured. John had no excuse for what he put Tom and his friends through. Deep in the dungeon lies its core. If this core is destroyed, the dungeon will collapse. Usually the core is destroyed after the dungeon is captured, but in some cases, such as to create a training ground for adventurers, it is left intact. It appears that this core was created using technology from another world. After John and Jessica finished in the dungeon, they returned to the Adventurers Guild. After that, they will receive their guild cards and wait for analysis and records. A young man approached John and Jessica and thanked them for waiting. He introduced himself as Bob, a member of the General Affairs Department of the Adventurers Guild. He approached them to ask a few questions about the additional boss that had appeared. After Bob handed them the cards, he asked them to take questions. John wondered if Jessica would keep her promise. That John helped her use magic. It was important to him because it could become a big problem, especially when people started asking him about what happened. After all, the guy had to start earning money as soon as possible. The girl agreed with him and promised not to tell anyone. Jessica apologized to the guy and said that she was ashamed to ask for such a thing after what he told her. The girl asked to be taken as a student, but in response she heard a refusal and was very upset. The girl understood that the guy could not take her as a student. John explained that he was refusing not because it was a hassle, or because of her reaction at the time. The guy said that he felt like the girl wasn't cut out to be an adventurer. John stated that he did not want to irresponsibly teach her magic and send her to certain death. To which the girl replied that she was sorry, but perhaps the guy was right. The young man asked again. It turns out that after Tom's group, the monster was already on the verge of death, and Jessica dealt the final blow to the weakened Minotaur. John confirmed that everything was correct, since they had no skills. The man asked Jessica what she was doing while Tom's group was fighting the Mentor. The girl replied in confusion that she had simply watched their battle, and when the man was on the verge of death, she and John had dealt the final blow. John said they decided it was the only thing they could do. The man noted that the boy and the girl delivered the last blow together, which is why it is registered to Jessica. After this, the man confirmed that the two of them had indeed managed to defeat the cop without any skills, and thanked them for their cooperation. He then handed out 2 envelopes and said that this was their reward for defeating the Mentor. Taking the envelopes, they thanked the man, and John thought about the amount of money that was inside. When he opened the envelope, there was a sum of money in it much larger than he expected. The man explained that this was how much it cost to defeat the brand. The guild rules stated that 75% of the reward went to the person who dealt the final blow. Jessica thanked the man again, confused. Everything was fair. This was done so that the entire reward did not go to the person who dealt the final blow. Thus, the guild leader encourages not only those who have attacking skills. The man said that if he and the girl were in a clan, the reward would be divided equally, and suggested that they think about joining a clan. He added that the guild leader has high hopes for them, to which the guy laughed, saying that they were incompetent and would do their best. So John earned half the amount on his first day working for the Adventurers Guild. But suddenly John decided to give the entire amount to Jessica. The girl said that she could not accept such an amount, because she had done nothing. The guy explained that without her help, he wouldn't have been able to do anything either, so he asked her to keep the envelope. The girl wanted to say something, but the guy interrupted her, saying that if the two of them didn't need him, then she could just burn him. But suddenly the girl attacked the guy and said that there was no way she could burn such a large sum. Then the guy said that she should keep the whole amount for herself. After this, the guy and the girl exchanged contacts and went their separate ways. He thought about how he hadn't fought like this for a long time, and it seemed like his feelings hadn't dulled. The guy was shocked that he actually received a large sum for defeating some cop. The guy thought it was time to have lunch, but suddenly the guy remembered his sister and thought that she would have to wait a little longer, since he would soon earn the required amount. The guy remembered that he had leveled up and seemed to have earned skill points. The boy reached level 10 and could now summon a controlling fairy. When the boy pressed the button to summon the fairy, everything around him turned to dust. A suitcase fell on the guy's table, and a little fairy flew out of it. Before the guy could say anything, sparkling dust began to fly all over his house. Suddenly the fairy started yelling at him because the guy had missed training for 20 years. Suddenly the guy pushed her away a little and didn't understand why the little fairy was so mad. He asked her to wait a little and told her to explain who she was before scolding him. Then the fairy thought for a moment and decided to tell. She was created by John in a past life as a controller of forbidden restrictions. The fairy had only one very important goal for Jack. When the boy asked what it was exactly, the fairy said that its purpose was to make him stronger. That's why the fairy was disappointed that the guy had been idle for 20 years. The guy thought about the fact that he didn't understand how he created her in his past life for 20 years. Then the fairy said that apparently the guy was missing some of his memories. After the fairy spoke about the empty memory, the guy thought about it and realized that it was impossible. But suddenly the guy said that he remembered, unexpectedly even for himself. Then the fairy looked thoughtfully at the guy and asked if he had an idea. The boy said he didn't remember the moment of his death, but he remembered that he was affected by some kind of illness. The fairy said that she could tell him that she was born after his death. The guy thought about her words and thought that it seemed like his reincarnation was not accidental. The fairy said that there was simply no point in thinking about it. The guy thought about the fact that apparently the fairy cannot tell him about this, since, perhaps, the past he limited the range of what she can talk about. And he also thought that the fairy was right, since thinking about all this in these circumstances was simply pointless. The boy asked the fairy what she meant when she said she wanted to make him stronger. The fairy said that by updating the forbidden restrictions, the guy can become stronger even faster. The guy asked if this was any different from gaining skills through exchanging points. The fairy said that gaining skills was nowhere near that. Suddenly the fairy did something and a new system called item exchange was added. The guy was very surprised at what the fairy could do. The fairy said that with her help, the guy would be able to get any item that he ever owned in his past life. The guy asked if he could move the items that were in the storage box. The storage box is a spatial storage that the boy created in his past life as an archmage. The fairy said that at the time the guy was an avid collector and he had a lot of rare things that he could return. The guy was even more surprised, saying that it was incredible. The fairy said that everything is not so simple, since there are certain conditions for the exchange. The guy got a little angry and said that every good story has its downsides. The fairy warned that if the boy complained, she would not allow him to use this system. The boy apologized to the fairy, and then she showed him everything that belonged to him in his past life. Friend, the guy thought about the fact that the thing he was thinking about was also there. After looking at the pictures for a bit, he found what he was looking for. It was an all-powerful elixir that instantly relieves all diseases and injuries. The guy thought that he really should earn that big sum of money that he was thinking about all the time. The fairy noticed that this seemed to motivate the boy a little. The fairy said that she had news for the guy, and he asked her to tell him. The fairy said that during his battle with the mentor, she thought that the guy could easily become stronger, overcoming difficulties on his way. That's why the fairy put a buff on him, thanks to which he will receive twice as much experience when defeating a superior enemy. The boy asked the fairy how it works. He thought that if the fairy was telling the truth, then his path would be much easier. The guy said he would use the forbidden restrictions at full capacity. The fairy was delighted, noting his fighting spirit. The guy remembered that he hadn't even asked her name, and decided to ask her what her name was. The fairy replied that she did not know, since he had created her and had to come up with a name for her. John warned the fairy not to complain or cry if she didn't like something. The boy named the fairy sphere and she said it was a nice name. The guy noted that the fairy seemed to like the name, to which she responded that they needed to focus on making it stronger. The fairy set her own rules: prepare a bath, desserts, and ice cream every day. The guy objected that all this required money, to which the fairy replied that she controlled the forbidden restrictions, and, if he did not agree, she could forbid him from using it. Then the guy got indignant and asked if that was the fee for using it. The fairy said that she was glad that the guy understood everything, and he would need to start doing these things from the next day. Before going to bed, the guy thought that this fairy had fallen on him out of the blue. After looking at his rating, John thought he was too weak. But for him, it will be even better, because he will be able to change this and become an archmage. He will also be able to reach a much higher rank than his current one, but within reasonable limits. With the help of the Adventurers Guild, he will join a raid in a higher rank dungeon. A man approached John, asked his name and introduced himself. His name was Oliver. There was a girl with the man. She also introduced herself. Her name was Emma. Oliver said that they were one person short of making the group complete, and so John practically saved them. Two guys were talking about John, and he overheard it. John said he could make up for his lack of skills. The guy introduced himself as Sam and told John not to overexert himself so much, since there were 3 adventurers in the group with a similar rank to John. Then Sam's acquaintances noted that he himself was of low rank. The girl standing nearby was eavesdropping on their conversation when Tom noticed her and thought that she was the same age as his sister. From the loudspeakers, we heard sounds that since everyone was gathered, it was time to go to another dungeon. John noticed the guy next to him. The entire team present in the dungeon fought tirelessly. Someone advised John to stay behind as this place was very dangerous. But John stood behind and wondered when would be the best time to join the fight. Then the monster approached one of the fighting girls. John noticed that the monster was calling on magic, and this ogre was going to use fire breath on her, and it seemed like the girl noticed it. At that moment, John attacked the monster with all his anger. The girl said, "Didn't they tell him to stay behind?" John replied that he simply couldn't ignore a child who was oblivious to an approaching attack. The girl asked in surprise what the guy was talking about. The guy thought he had managed to stop the monster from using fire breathing. The guy decided to use his new weapon. Last night, the guy decided he wanted to make the most of his skill points. But there was one problem. The guy was only level 10 and had 9 points at his disposal, and the first skills he could get were Fireball. When purchasing, the corresponding skill tree is displayed on the screen, and the guy must first choose one of them. Fireball is good for mid to long range combat, but on the other hand, Buff has no such limitations. If something happens, it will be more useful at close range. Any skill acquired through Forbidden Restriction does not consume Ohm. This means that John will be able to use the enhancement anywhere and anytime. Such a skill will obviously be extremely useful. He decided to look at his skill tree. For a guy, the new skill was pretty good. The right branch was more suited to close combat, and since skill points weren't infinite, the guy decided to focus on the first close combat. He told John that for his own safety, he should step back. Then John said that even an extra like him had something to offer. At that moment, the system notified the guy that he had received double experience for defeating a strong opponent, and his level had been increased. Everyone standing nearby was amazed at John's strength and could not believe that he had dealt with a monster. Catherine couldn't believe her eyes and asked where exactly he was an extra. John thought that compared to the Minotaur, 2 levels for a win was the best he could expect. At that moment, a girl came up to him and asked how the guy could be so strong. Then John replied that he had only received the skill yesterday and was trying to catch his breath after the fight. Catherine, hearing this, seriously told the guy to warn her about something like this in advance. At first he remained silent, but then he realized that the girl was right. Catherine kept saying that if something happened to him, it would be too late. Then John once again apologized for this and said that it would not happen again. Then the girl began to turn away and clearly wanted to say something last, but she was a little nervous. Gathering all her confidence into a fist, she thanked John for saving her life. The other warriors at this time were discussing that they did not expect the guy to be so strong, and realized that now they would have to divide the spoils equally. Then one of them, looking at John, said that since he was so strong, they would be able to clear the dungeon much faster, and the other warrior apologized to the guy for being rude to him. Then John told the guys to forgive him too for not warning everyone in advance. Although in fact the guy didn't tell them precisely because, having learned the truth, they might reject his application to join. However, in reality, their raid went relatively smoothly. And then, shortly after they defeated the boss, the experience points doubled. This is why John was able to increase his level to 17. And now the team was getting ready to return and was discussing how smoothly everything went. One of the guys told John that his abilities exceeded all his expectations. Then the guy replied that it was not true and his contribution was much greater. Then they boldly decided to return to the guild, since they had finished clearing the dungeon. Suddenly he noticed that his chest was pierced from behind with a knife, and he did not understand what had happened. It turned out to be a guy who was a member of their team, and he mercilessly pulled out the dagger after the blow. Everyone started shouting what he was doing and why. Then the guy with a crazy smile on his face said that he was most likely committing murder. And then he also added that his partner should not make such a terrible face, but rather, like before, smile. At that moment, one of them attacked this psychopath and began to attack. Everyone was told not to interfere, and people stood there not knowing what to do. Sam said that he would not calm down until he killed him with his own hands. Catherine started shouting that now was not the time for such speeches. At that moment, John came out and said that he also had things that he would never give up. Then the other man said that it was still not worth it for that guy to risk his life alone. John said that from a logical point of view this is true, but the world is full of illogical things. Catherine said it was stupid, and the guy understood what she was getting at. Then the guy on their team turned around and thanked them. After that, taking his sword more firmly, he told the team to leave that psycho to him. John started talking about Sam at this time. He thought the guy's weapon looked pretty dangerous. For every person killed, 5 points were added to his attack, and his knife was now significantly more powerful than it had been originally. The psychopath at this point asked the guy if he really thought he could beat him. He fought off the attacks and reasoned that his strength should have been enough to break through Sam's defense. At that moment, the guy realized that all this time the psycho had been hiding his rank, and it was much higher than everyone could think. Sam asked if the guy used a longsword and added that it was effective against monsters. The guy kept saying that he was pretty slow against people. The psychopath asked if the guy really expected to kill him with such force. The guy held the bottle of potion in his hand and remembered how his partner gave it to him. After that, the partner told the guy to consider it a birthday present and read the effect later. He asked if the potion was expensive. Then the partner replied that it was expensive, but this was his way of expressing his gratitude. The guy smiled and said he was happy, after which he thanked him. The partner added that he should use this potion in extreme cases, and said that being an adventurer is difficult. After these memories, the boy began to quickly drink the potion and hoped that it would save him. Sam ran up to him and asked him if he thought it was a good time to get his health back. At this time, the guy got to his feet and began to prepare for the attack with renewed vigor. Jumping high into the air, he began to attack Sam. However, the guy immediately realized that it was useless, because he did not see him. Sam started shouting that he was a fool for daring to compete with him. Jessica held the sword in her hand with furious eyes, saying that she couldn't watch this. The girl with a surprised face was perplexed as to how he had dodged. Sam asked her with a smirk, "What? Hadn't she been warned not to interfere?" The young girl looked at the guy with fear. Sam pinned Jessica to the floor, telling her he would have to start with her. Sam had already swung at the girl, but then John appeared and stopped him with his sword. He was surprised that this young man was able to stop him. John asked the guy if he could get rid of Sam. This guy gave his consent for John to defeat him. John told Sam that it was now his turn to deal with him. Sam asked why the guy was getting on his nerves. As John was throwing him back, the guy asked him if he thought some extra could beat him. Then John just grinned and said that he didn't scare him one bit. The psycho started crawling towards the guy and saying that he had only recently received his skill, so there was no point in bragging about it. John understood perfectly well that now was not the time to stand on ceremony. Sam stood up at that moment and shouted for the guy to know his place, because he was nothing but just an extra. However, John was able to deflect his blow, and then the boy noted that he had a keen eye. Then John said that whoever was carrying it didn't pose that much of a threat. The psychopath became even more angry and frowning said that he clearly posed a threat. He really liked the guy's attitude, because he could get a bonus for killing John. Then, while the psycho continued to attack the guy, he only said that he should have explained everything in simpler language. After these words, John also added that the guy's speed did not pose a threat to him. And so they were face to face and sword to sword, deflecting each other's attacks. The girl was surprised that the guy really turned out to be so strong. Sam was shocked that the guy managed to block the blow, and he realized that he had caught up with him. John's ball handling and defensive performance were a level above that of the average rookie. Sam began to feel this terrible feeling that suppressed his faith in victory. Namely, he felt its superior, boundless power. John, with a frightening face, asked the guy again what he called him, and then answered his own question. Sam was thinking at this point that he was obviously superior to him in terms of characteristics, but the guy still overwhelmed him. At that moment, John approached the girl, adjusted her hair, and told her to be a good girl. After that, he instantly pierced the psychopath with his weapon. The guy began to say that this step was the most obvious, because it was the most vile plan worthy of a coward like him. Sam started screaming that it wasn't over yet and tried to use his skills. John just laughed at the fact that the guy couldn't use them anymore, and then said that the game was over. The psycho started asking the guy what he did, and John just laughed in response. After that, I started to think that skills and spells are similar, because they require The guy hit the vulnerable point of the mana channel in Sam's body. That's why he couldn't use his skills. The guy started saying that he couldn't win with his speed, and now he can't use his skills either. Sam said he never thought the guy would corner him. After that, he started laughing loudly, and saying that he would share some interesting information with John. The guy asked the psychopath about this information with an arrogant look. Sam told the guy to kill him with this dagger, because he gets stronger every time someone is killed with it. The dagger becomes stronger from killing people. But everyone hides this fact so that the adventurers don't start killing each other. Hearing this, the girl realized that the guy really was a psycho. He began to say that he was giving the dagger to John, and suggested that they try to kill him first. After this, the devil guy will know what it's like to take someone's life. Then John asked if that was the sting that made the guy kill people left and right. Sam asked to quickly kill him with this knife and end it all. Then John said that he even sympathized a little with the guy. Some of his feelings were quite understandable to the guy, and it seemed he couldn't escape this damn desire to become stronger. If it weren't for the ban on restrictions for his sister's sake, John would have become the same as this psycho. In his past life, he saw many people who had to choose a path that would make them stronger. At this point, Sam started shouting that the guy didn't know anything about him, because everything John said irritated him. He simply asked to kill him, but John had no intention of doing so. Hearing this, the psycho asked why, because he himself said that he understood part of his feelings. Moreover, John thought that he and this guy were similar, and after saying this, Sam began to ask to kill him even more. John said that if he did that, something inside him would die, so the guy wasn't going to kill him. Then Sam started rolling a ball out of his mouth and said that John was very naive. It was a smoke bomb that exploded, and now everything was shrouded in a veil of smoke. The psycho started shouting that he would make the guy give up this naivety and took the dagger in his hands. He decided to be the trigger for this and kill himself. Then John said that before he died, he should atone for his sins and hit Sam. At that moment, the girl said that she didn't think they looked alike. Until the very end, the boy's desire to save his life remained unshakable, and he even thought about saving him. Hearing this, John smiled and asked if she was worried about him. Then she became embarrassed and immediately shouted that it was completely logical, and stuttered a little. She started saying that at that moment the guy scared her a little. When John put his hand on her head, he asked for forgiveness for it, and then thanked her. When the girl, looking away, also thanked the guy for saving her. After this incident, Sam was arrested. The guy in the room cried and thanked John. He said that he was only alive thanks to him, and therefore did not know how to properly express his gratitude. When Sam suddenly attacked him, a little more and he would have hit vital organs. Thanks to the fact that the battle with the psycho ended rather quickly, he was able to avoid death. John believed that the case could be considered closed. And so, that evening in the hospital, he told the girl that there was only black coffee in the machine. She told the guy not to mistake her for a child and took the bottle away. When John tasted it, he could see on her face that she definitely didn't like the taste. Then he asked what the girl wanted to ask him. Then she looked away a little, and then said that she wanted to know the secret of his strength. Hearing this, John said that he was interested in why the girl was working as an adventurer at such a young age. Suddenly she stood up and shouted whether it really mattered now, and then said that she was a high school student. Then John looked at her and said that it turned out that she was older than Sarah. The girl, confused, asked again who it was, and the guy answered that it was his little sister. After that, Catherine smiled because she was surprised to learn that he had a little sister. Then she said that he was very reliable and reasonable, like a real older brother. John looked askance at the girl and then asked if it was a compliment. Catherine replied that she was amazed by his fighting prowess and instant adaptation. Then sipping his black coffee, John thanked the girl. That's why Catherine wanted John to share his secret power. She looked at him with an angelic gaze, and then John told her to stop because he would dream about it later. Suddenly the girl drooped, and then said in a quiet voice that she would never stop. Catherine told the guy to show her his true strength, because she was sure that there was some secret in it. Then John realized that he needed to tell her in simple words that he was not going to do this. The girl told the guy that he was greedy, and calmly took the can of coffee. After this, Catherine also told him that no girl would want to date such a cold guy. She also called the guy a man with a sister complex, which clearly offended John. Suddenly, Catherine asked if she could look at the guy's hand, and then, at that very second, his wound was covered with a bandage. Then John realized that this girl was too carefree, and this would definitely not confuse him. At that moment, Catherine saw his smile and was struck by how wide it was. John replied that she had clearly imagined it, and the most that could have been on his face was a small grin. Then the girl replied that this was to be expected, since such a sweet high school girl was courting the guy. The guy thought she was saying something like that, but she had a smile on her face that almost reached her ears. Catherine took the phone and told the guy to give her his contact information, because she still had a lot of questions for him. John agreed and said that if that was all it was, he would be happy to help at any time. Hearing this, the girl said that next time they should go to the dungeon together. John said that they could only go if he had time and finished his coffee. The girl only noted that if he says so, it means he is not ready to help her at any time. When they parted, the girl said that next time she wanted to meet his little sister. John waved to her one last time and smiled. When the guy came home, it was already dark outside. John calmly took a shower and thought that he would definitely cure his little sister as soon as he could. Suddenly, a small explosion occurred right above his phone. It didn't harm the guy, but it scared him. A small creature appeared right in front of him and began to talk. She was clearly unhappy with his daily schedule and made it clear. She continued to shout that because of all the sawing, John had only prepared a bath, and the guy stood there in bewilderment. He realized that he had completely forgotten about everything and the little creature continued to threaten the guy. Hearing these threats, John began to ask for forgiveness and say that he would definitely prepare everything tomorrow. Then this little girl said he was hopeless and forgave him for the last time. As John began to dry his head with a towel, she continued to say that the guy was nothing but trouble. And after that, she said that the generous fairy had great news for the guy. She started to tell me that she had added the key to the secret dungeon to the item exchange. Hearing this, John began to talk about this dungeon in surprise. The fairy said that this is the key to a super difficult solo dungeon. The guy thought it sounded interesting and decided to look into it a little. There were actually a lot of different ranks in this dungeon, and one of them had some kind of discount. The fairy explained that this was fuel to make the guy want to buy more and more things. John, listening to her, said that the girl was really used to this world. The fairy replied that it was useless to praise her, and suggested that she quickly use the key and increase her level. The guy understood perfectly well that he needed to level up, but even with the discount, the dungeon cost $1 million. John also reasoned that he could afford it. Considering how much he would earn, however, in the secret dungeon, the monsters were much stronger than usual. Therefore, John could get more experience for the forbidden restriction from them, and with the buff, the guy could get even more benefit. John would have to go there alone, so the difficulty would be quite high. In other words, the greater the risk, the greater the reward, so the guy was interested. The fairy thought that he was scared and began to laugh at him. Then John explained that for now, he would save money to buy the keys to the dungeon for $5 million. The girl noted that he is a truly interesting person. The guy decided to ask if the forbidden restriction was really useful. And then he said that his legacy in his past life was so great. John knew he had his past self to thank and began to gain rank. The system showed the guy that he had used the key to the secret dungeon. A dark door appeared in front of him, emitting an ominous aura. The fairy asked if the boy was really going to go there right now, since he had just recently returned from the dungeon. John said he wasn't going to waste a second. The girl was pleased that the guy had finally gotten a taste for it, and she smiled sarcastically. After seeing the dungeon for a bit, the guy said that everything in it looked as usual. Then the fairy said that he spoke like a real lone archmage. The guy began to thank the sphere, because thanks to it, he would become stronger in the blink of an eye. The girl replied that he would thank her only when he returned unharmed. Then, with a smile on his face, John said that if he died, he would no longer be able to do this. The fairy, hearing this, asked if the guy was going to die right now, And then she also added that he should buy her ice cream when he returned. John smiled confidently and said that he understood everything. At this time, there was a little girl in the hospital ward. It was John's younger sister who decided to wash her hands after her cough. Suddenly there was a crash, and the nurses ran into her room looking frightened. They shouted for someone to call a doctor quickly, because the girl was getting worse. While lifting her up, the sisters tried to ask if everything was okay, but the girl did not answer. At this time, John was thinking that this forest was different from any he had ever seen, and he knew he had to be on the lookout for any signs of monsters. Suddenly, on one of the trees, he saw a lennox fruit. In his past life, he could not even imagine that they would grow here. These fruits are used in alchemy, but they are not rare, so John saw no point in stopping to collect them. However, if there are lennox fruits growing here, then there is also one fast monster. Since he was fast, John could get more experience from him. By pressing the button on the system, the guy decided to try to catch him. When he saw this monster, he realized that he was not wrong in his theory. John was glad that he wouldn't have to stop to make a profit. While he was running after her, he realized that in his current state, he wouldn't be able to keep up with this turbo rat, and he had to come up with something. Suddenly, a fairy jumped out and asked him what he thought about using the Itzania. John was surprised that the sphere could appear even in dungeons, but he continued to run. The fairy explained that she could not appear in ordinary dungeons. However, this is a secret dungeon, prepared especially for the guy. She asked if the guy really thought that she, as the manager of the forbidden restriction, couldn't get in here. Sphere explained her visit by saying that she was worried about John and decided that she had to help. Then the guy began to think that if his memory serves him right, Itzania is a carnivorous plant. The fairy explained that they try to eat everything that catches their eye. All the guy had to do was point the turbo rat at them and they would do all the work for him. After hearing all this, John decided that he had to try to do it. And so, after some time, John continued to run and thought that soon they would lose this monster. Suddenly, the fairy said that the Insensians were living right ahead and they should move forward. Suddenly, the monster ran out of fuel because there was no way to eat lennox fruits to replenish his strength. And now the beast was almost in John's hands, and the guy thought that everything was perfect. However, right above them was the incense, which had already opened its mouth. The fairy, seeing this, began to shout at the boy to be careful. But the monster closed its mouth along with the little animal and John. A moment later, the boy was able to get out of the monster's mouth and began to shake off his clothes. Sphere awkwardly asked if the guy was okay, but she was very worried. John wanted to take a break, but the monsters around him were against it, which made the guy very upset. The fairy said that they should change tactics and retreat. The guy, calmly fighting the monsters, said that there was no need for this. And all because John believed that now everything was completely different. And so John began to gather all his strength for the attack. He decided to use a technique called the Crimson Lotus Fireball. After he dealt with the monsters, looking at the statistics, the guy realized that he had reached level 20. The fairy told him that helping the boy turned out to be quite a difficult task. John replied that it seemed to him that the girl was only screaming somewhere behind his back. Then the sphere got completely angry and asked the guy again about what he had said. When the boy replied that he hadn't said anything, the fairy smiled and said that she hadn't heard anything either. Hearing this, John just smiled and thought that she was very loud. They've made a lot of progress since their first encounter with Turbo Rat. The fairy decided to ask who else was capable of something like this. After that, she also told the guy to make sure he collected all the dropped items. John decided to ask her if she thought there were a lot of rare quality items in the inventory. The fairy only replied that it was all perfectly logical. And then she added that there are quite a lot of chances of rare items dropping in secret dungeons. After that, they decided to take a look at the lizards, which could easily be sold and earn several million. Hearing this, John was shocked at how much this thing cost. He was shocked because if he continued to go into these dungeons, he would become a millionaire in no time. And then he finally decided that next time he would just have to go to a dungeon of a higher rank. Then the fairy said that the guy had better not forget that there was a huge difference between these ranks. Suddenly, a dark aura overtook them, and John realized that they had no time to relax and chat. The fairy shouted that this was the boss of this secret dungeon. The recommended level for fighting this monster was as much as 150. Of course, he was very tall, but John said the monster would make a great handicap. The sphere began to scream that they had already reached their goal, and that it was not worth taking such risks. John said that defeating this monster would be the shortest way to help his little sister. And then he also added that the Naga is nothing more than a source of experience. The monster's skin has a special feature that can absorb magic, and these creatures are known as the sworn enemies of magicians. John understood that everything would be fine as long as he could use physical attacks. Attacking the monster with his sword, he realized that he was unable to cut through her thick skin. After the monster's attack, the ground began to melt and the fairy panicked even more. John realized that she could melt anything, so if he touched her, the guy would die immediately. And then he realized that if he was hit by any of the monster's attacks, he would most likely die. With a smile on his face, John said that he hadn't been this nervous in a long time and began his attacks. Thanks to the forbidden restriction, he could store and retrieve items from a separate dimension. At that moment, the fairy said that the guy had almost completely mastered part of the forbidden limitation that she had taught him. John, however, tried his best to deal with the Naga, although it was very risky. He thought that given the difference in their characteristics, the guy wouldn't even be able to hurt her. The fairy saw the monster approaching and began to shout to John that she was coming. The guy repelled the attack, but the monster was able to break his axe. John realized that it looked like any weapon he had would do nothing. After this, a dangerous plan came into his head, which he decided to put into action. The guy started using a sonic boom, aiming straight at the snake's mouth. This was followed by a technique called the Crimson Lotus Fireball. The monster was not afraid of magic, and this would only replenish his strength. However, the guy had a plan, which was that there should be a limit to the amount of magic a monster could absorb. If the guy can overcome him, she'll be in trouble. John knew that since the forbidden restriction allowed him to use the spell, then he would use it. The guy began to furiously attack the monster with his fireballs without stopping. John knew that using so many spells in such a short period of time would put a lot of strain on his body. However, he also understood that this pain was nothing compared to what his little sister was experiencing. And so, after some time, out of breath, the guy began to think that, most likely, he had surpassed the monster. The fairy shouted to the guy that he could handle it, and there was only a little time left. And now, finally, John was able to defeat this terrible monster. His level was immediately increased, but the guy felt terrible. He also received the poisoned blade that belonged to that monster, and seeing it, he even smiled. The fairy began to ask if the guy was okay, to which he replied that everything was fine, but only a miracle saved him. After that, the sphere praised the guy for his excellent work, and smiled. She said that John could rest, because he had defeated the boss, which meant that he would soon be automatically teleported outside. However, at this moment John had already lost consciousness and did not hear her. The fairy decided to help the guy, but she entered the wrong coordinates, and they returned to the wrong house. Suddenly she heard footsteps, and realized that someone was coming. After apologizing to the guy 1,000 times, she disappeared so that no one would see her. At that moment, Jessie came out of the corner and looked at the guy in surprise. Realizing it was John, she cried out in horror and turned pale. After some time, John woke up in bed, but the apartment was not his. Jessie was rushing around the room and was glad that the guy had finally woken up. And then she said that she was very worried. John, collecting his thoughts, realized that this was the girl's room. She said that she was walking down the street and saw a guy lying unconscious and decided to take him away. Then he sat down on the bed and said that the girl had saved his life, after which he thanked her. Jessie started saying that she didn't need thanks, because the most important thing was that he was okay. After that, she asked why the guy was unconscious in that place. John decided that it was not worth mentioning about the secret dungeon, and told about going to a high-ranking dungeon alone. Hearing this, Jessie exclaimed in surprise, and then said that she was glad that the guy was still alive. John once again thanked the girl for saving him, and for taking him in. She also said that there have been many incidents involving awakened people lately. After that, she pointed to where the guy's things were and said that his phone was broken. Jessie, standing at the door, asked if the guy was hungry, because she had cooked porridge. John asked in surprise if he could eat. And the girl, of course, allowed it. After this, Jessie also said that she never paid the guy for saving her in that dungeon. The guy started getting out of bed and saying that he told her not to worry about it. After that, she happily ran away, saying that she would bring the porridge right away. John smiled and thought that this girl was very kind. Suddenly, the guy noticed items of clothing sticking out of the closet and immediately closed his eyes. The girl saw that the guy was looking at her closet and decided to take a look at what was there. After that, Jessie asked, embarrassed, if he had seen what was there. John became embarrassed, and then the girl realized that the guy had managed to notice this item of clothing. After she began to confirm what he saw, the guy finally agreed with her. And now Jessie was sitting there and was completely broken by what had happened, and the guy didn't know how to apologize. After this, the girl said that it was her own fault that she had not cleaned up well. After some time, the girl handed the guy coffee and told him to eat it before it got cold. She also asked to forget about what happened and just eat. John just thought that, of course, he wouldn't be able to tell her this, but such a memory would settle in his head for a long time. After this, the guy thanked for the food and began his meal. After trying the porridge, the guy realized how delicate its taste was. Jessie only replied that the secret ingredient was ginger, and when she was sick as a child, she often asked her mother to make this porridge. While eating the porridge, John said that it turned out to be the girl's family's secret recipe. And after that, the guy asked if she lived separately from her parents. Jessie replied that her parents died in a monster attack 7 years ago. As she said this, a picture of her father being torn away from her mother and shoved into the monster's mouth immediately flashed in her mind. John, noticing her downcast gaze, realized that he had stirred up unpleasant memories. The girl replied that it happened a long time ago and she was no longer worried about it. The guy then asked if that was the reason she wanted to become an adventurer. Jessie replied that perhaps, but she wanted as many people as possible to avoid the same fate. However, besides this, she wanted to become one since childhood, to be amazing and cool. Smiling, the girl said that this was why she tried to force the guy to take her as a student. Jessie knew that for her own sake, she wanted to give it her all. John realized that the girl would definitely continue to try to become an adventurer, no matter what difficulties she faced along the way. Instead of acting in her own self-interest, she tried to act based on her convictions. After that, John began to thank the girl, but she did not understand what the guy was doing. He began to say that he had said that she was not fit to be an adventurer that time, and he wished he could take those words back now. After this, John asked her if she would like to become his student. Jessie was simply stunned with shock and did not understand what the guy meant. Then John said that the most important thing for an adventurer is not strength or talent, but courage. And since the girl was so brave, the guy wanted to help her. He also said that he was busy at the moment, so it would take him some time before he could start training her. After these words, Jessie began to thank the guy and bow to him. She started crying and said that if the guy was really happy with someone like her, then she would really like to become his student. John also said that he would definitely make a first-class sorceress out of her. In the end, the girl thanked the guy for everything he said and did for her. She also added with a smile that she was looking forward to the start of their work together. So, after some time, John reasoned that he ended up getting a lot of different things. The guy decided to sell one thing that he didn't need. He decided to leave the rest of the items and use them. John also thought that the weapon he used to fight the monster was already broken, and he was lucky that he got a rare item. Suddenly, a fairy appeared next to him and asked what she looked like with a huge ice cream. After that, looking at his statistics, the sphere added that there is a long way to go, but the guy's growth rate amazes her. She also praised him for the way he distributes his skill points. John smiled sweetly and thanked her, and then asked how much he would get for selling the loot. When he saw the price tag, the guy realized that his goal of 500 million was already very close. Suddenly, John's phone rang, and the boy was surprised at how quickly it was fixed. Suddenly, he saw that his sister's doctor was calling him, and he gently picked up the phone. He began to excitedly greet and say his name. The man on the phone said that they had finally reached him because the girl's recent condition had suddenly worsened. At this rate, the doctor was afraid she had very little time left. He also thought it would be better if the guy was next to her while she was still conscious. Then John asked to give the phone to his little sister. When she had the phone, the guy started saying that it was her older brother, and then asked if she could talk to him now. The girl said with a heavy sigh and a hoarse voice that she could, and the guy understood how hard it was for her. The little girl started calling for her brother, and her condition was worse than ever. At that moment, John said that he had found a way to cure her. Then the doctor intervened and said that it was not worth making rash decisions. The girl didn't care what the doctor said, and she only said hopefully that she would wait for her brother. John thanked his sister and said that there was only a little bit left. After that, he asked the fairy if she thought he could earn the entire amount if he cleared the highest-ranked secret dungeon. The sphere replied that it was possible, but it would most likely look like suicide. John just said that he had to do it and started looking for the secret dungeon with the highest rank. He didn't think at all that it would be difficult to challenge the highest-ranked dungeon with average stats. The fairy shouted that the guy would never be able to clear this dungeon, and that he shouldn't take such risks. After that, she asked if the guy would go there. When he said that he naturally had to do this, the sphere said that it would help him in any way it could. John thanked the little girl for her care, and together they went into this secret dungeon. When they were inside this dungeon, it looked very frightening and incomprehensible. The fairy began to say that the guy would clear the dungeon by going through 5 floors of the tower and defeating the boss on the last floor. Hearing this, John realized that they had a long job ahead of them. The sphere also said that there were safe areas in the tower where the monsters would not be able to detect him. However, first John will have to defeat the White Lion of Nia. Now the guy was at level 70, and to defeat the monster he needed level 320. Hearing this, John began to think, but the fairy asked if the guy would be able to defeat him. He then replied that it was just one high-ranking monster, and he would be able to defeat it even with his eyes closed. John realized that he first needed to defeat the monsters and get rare drops. At that moment, Leo jumped right at the guy and began to roar loudly. John hoped they would fight at close range, and all because he used his precious skill points to unlock this particular skill. He had a spell that caused a significant increase in physical abilities, and while it was in effect, the person was covered in highly concentrated mana. John knew that because of the forbidden limitation, he would be able to use it for 0 OM. In short, the guy could use it without restrictions, despite its current characteristics. However, he shouldn't overtax his body with continuous use of magic. Suddenly, a special quest appeared in front of him, which surprised John very much. At that moment, a fairy jumped out and said that special quests were a chance for rapid growth. Trying to read the quest, the guy tried to understand how to complete it. It was a little different from the call he knew. A familiar would greatly enhance John's fighting potential. In the end, It turned out that the guy had to tame this lion for himself. John was sad that he would have to change his strategy, but there was nothing he could do. In a matter of seconds, he used his strength and put the lion on the ground. However, Leo had used wind armor, and it wouldn't be that easy to deal damage. The fairy started shouting at the guy that now was not the time to talk about anything and play the fool. John told her not to worry, because in order to subdue this beast, he had to show him how big the difference in their strength was. The sphere only said that the boy was fighting a high-ranking monster, and then asked if he thought it was impossible. John then replied that the beasts had quite fearsome attacks, but the sequence of their attacks was quite simple. Besides, it seemed to the guy that with the help of this beast, he would be able to clear this dungeon much faster. John realized that he had to make the beast his own for sure. After this, the guy approached the animal's face and asked for forgiveness one last time. It turned out that during this time, the guy had tracked the sequence, and so the monster now knew everything in advance. After numerous attacks, John asked the lion again if he heard him. When the lion began to attack again, John used all his strength and began to hit the beast in the face with all his speed. The boy tried his best to make the lion bow down before him. And so, after some time, the fairy was surprised that the guy actually managed to defeat a high-ranking monster. John told the lion that he had better listen to him this time and lie down. Sphere was shocked that the monster obeyed him so easily. Since the guy was able to tame the beast, the quest was completed, and the guy received summoning magic for it. John was surprised that after fixing the monster, he received experience and loot. Then the fairy explained that the guy had turned the enemy from the dungeon into his familiar, so the reward was well deserved. She also noted that he had completed a special quest that was much more difficult than simply defeating a monster. At this point, John noticed that he had gained 50 levels. After this, he asked the sphere if it knew what was on each floor of the tower. When she answered in the affirmative, John turned to her with a smile and said that he was counting on her help. The fairy became embarrassed and declared that she refused to take on such responsibility. John was surprised, and then the sphere asked him to ask for help properly. He called her the sweetest and most angelic fairy and began to beg for support. The sphere reported that hordes of second-tier undead were roaming the first floor. Their numbers and combined power make this place more dangerous than a normal Tier 3 dungeon. John then wondered which spell would be most useful on this floor. After seeing some of the spells, the fairy asked the boy if they seemed too complicated. She recommended against using some of them, considering them ineffective. John countered that all the spells he had unlocked were irreplaceable and would help turn enemies into experience. Sphere asked again in surprise, not believing his words. John urged her to trust him and get comfortable. Taking one last look at the tower, he decided it was time to enter. Suddenly, the sphere remembered that it had forgotten to tell him something important. Once he enters the dungeon, he will not be able to leave until he reaches the core on the top floor. When John stated that he didn't care, the sphere noted that he really wasn't afraid for his life. John replied that this was not so, but he was much more afraid for his sister's life than for his own. Hearing this, the sphere began to mock him using unflattering words, but the boy did not react. He saw the seals on the door and realized that they were now locked inside. At that moment, the fairy warned him to be careful, as the undead were approaching right towards them. Then John decided that before the battle began, he needed to use his new spell. The spell was called Concealment and allowed him to completely hide his location. Now that the boy was completely hidden, he was able to calmly summon his new pet. John ordered him to run across the entire floor so that all the undead would target him. The guy reasoned that the undead themselves are quite powerful monsters, but since they are dead, they lack any intelligence. Therefore, the monsters will pursue the beast until its death. After the beast ran past the monsters, John ordered it to run to the center and wait. Fisher mused that the Petrify spell was rather difficult to cast. She thought its value for money was terrible. However, now that all the undead had gathered in one place, the boy only needed to cast this spell on his sword. After that, he began to enchant the undead, and a bright light illuminated the entire floor of the tower. At that moment, the fairy realized that by adding holy enchantment to the demonic sword, the boy gained the ability to use holy magic. In just a couple of minutes, John was done with the undead, and declared the extermination complete. After that, he stroked his lion and said that he had done a great job. The fairy was shocked that the guy actually dealt with the monsters in just a couple of minutes. Then John asked her if she believed in him, and the fairy began to scream that she still needed to be convinced of it by seeing everything with her own eyes. At that moment, the system doubled the guy's level, which surprised him greatly. He also got a lot of different items of a fairly high rank, which also made the guy happy. Then John decided to ask if this would be enough to earn 500 million, and the sphere began to calculate. After calculating, it turned out that all the things sold would cost even more than this amount, and then John decided to finish. Then the fairy reminded him that she had warned the boy that they would not be able to leave this tower until he had overcome the island on each floor and reached the top floor. Then John pointed his finger up and asked her to look up. Looking up, she saw an ordinary ceiling and couldn't understand what the guy was getting at. The fairy became angry and began to shout at him to get to the point. John said that this ceiling does not have seals like on the walls and doors. This meant that they could break through it and easily reach the top floor. The fairy started shouting that it was a waste of time in a high-ranking dungeon and asked the guy to be patient. John said that now that he had collected enough money to save his sister, he no longer needed this place. And so they found themselves on the very top floor, where the boss, who controlled all the undead in this tower, was waiting for them. The sphere began to tell the boy that in his current state he would not be able to defeat the monster. But she understood that common sense did not apply to him. So she decided not to stop him and let him hurry to save his little sister. Then John turned around with a smile and thanked the sphere. The guy was sure that since it was the Grim Reaper, he would use ghost magic. So he decided to use one of his forbidden spells. John was convinced that with its help he would be able to completely suppress the monster. He was also glad that he had finally found a shortcut to the top floor. The sphere told the guy to be careful, because the monster could attack them at any moment. John replied that with this equipment, he could afford to relax his vigilance. The guy understood perfectly well that in order to defeat the boss in his current state, he simply had to prevent him from using his techniques. At this point, John began to use the perception block, and his entire body became covered in a dull green color. Using ghostly magic, the Reaper causes the undead to attack his enemies. However, if the boy uses the perception block, the undead will consider him to be an undead as well, making the Reaper's magic completely useless. In his past life, John fought the Grim Reapers many times. That's why the guy knew all his actions in advance. John began using the Magic Eye of Wisdom in its first form. He was glad that he had finally reached the skill tree, which had been his strong point in the past. The Magic Eye of Wisdom was one of the highest ranked magic eyes, but he could only use it in its first form. This first form allowed him to see the opponent's mana. However, since the monster often disappeared without a trace, it was extremely difficult to hit. John knew that if he could see the enemy's mana, he would be able to determine his location. At that moment, the guy aimed as hard as he could and began to launch his attack at the monster. John was able to hit him, but most likely this attack did not cause much damage to the boss. In this case, the guy decided that he needed to beat the monster again and again until it died. Even with his current weak status, John was able to counter the enemy's techniques using the first form of the Magic Eye of Wisdom. The guy forgot to take into account one important thing: the huge difference between his past self and his present self. The enemy exploited his emotional vulnerability, which he did not have in the past. John struggled to get out and screamed his sister's name. And again a new blow followed after the illusionary magic. He understood perfectly well that he could not dodge the enemy's attacks in such a state. The guy started to get very angry and think about what to do. John remembered the moments with his little sister and realized that he couldn't die here. In one of her memories, my sister said that she had learned a minute of one waltz and smiled happily. Then John stroked her head and said that she was a good girl. The girl's life flashed before her eyes, and her little sister completely lost hope. The little girl understood that they were truly happy then. At that moment, my little sister was saying that she was playing the piano better and better every day. John didn't know if his body had really given up, and tears were welling up in his eyes. At that moment, the guy began to remember the past and said that he did not want to die. John couldn't figure out what this was all about, because the system was asking if he wanted to remove the forbidden restrictions. At this time, a system appeared in front of him, and the fairy asked if this thing had always been above his head. The guy understood perfectly well that all this was done in order not to lose his little sister. John shouted that he would do anything for this. At that moment, he fought the monster with all his might, and sparks flew in all directions. He really wanted to get back to his little sister as quickly as possible. The guy was so angry that he swore he would smash the entire dungeon to pieces. John prayed to the gods that he would get everything done in time. At this point, the nurse shouted at the girl to hold on and said that she would call her brother now. The nurse screamed at the top of her lungs and begged the boy to come here as soon as possible. She couldn't understand what he was doing at such an hour, and John was running as fast as he could at that moment. He knew he was running as fast as he could and hoped he would make it. At that moment, the nurse was holding the girl's hand and thinking about her. The woman realized that her condition was rapidly deteriorating. After that, she thought that at least they would let her leave in peace. At that moment, John burst into the office and shouted her name loudly. Then the doctor said that the girl was already unconscious. After that, he asked to stay with her until the very end, and John at that moment was glad that he had made it. The guy walked towards her bed, and the doctor said that he could still feel the warmth of her body. Then John picked up the girl and began to say that he had made it. The doctor started shouting about what the guy was doing because he started to take off his mask. However, John began to pour the elixir obtained after the battle and use it on his sister. After he applied it, he began to look with hope that the baby would wake up. Suddenly she opened her eyes but was still very weak. The doctors, seeing this, could not understand what was happening and were shocked. Opening her eyes fully, the little sister said her brother's name. After that, John hugged the girl tightly because he was incredibly happy that he had made it. And that same night, the doctor said that at the moment his sister was in perfect health and had no problems. He also thought that it was safe to say that there would be no relapse. Therefore, the doctors decided together that the girl could be discharged tomorrow, which made John very happy. However, the man still could not believe that she had gotten rid of an incurable disease by taking just one dose of medicine. Then John explained that it was a magical drug called an elixir that he found in the dungeon. This surprised the doctor very much, because something similar was found in the dungeon. After this, the man also asked whether such places were really extremely mysterious. The very next day, John was leaving the hospital with his little sister. The girl was glad that the air outside was very fresh. Then John smiled and said that the girl seemed to be doing well. Then the little girl replied that it even seemed to her that all this pain was not real. Suddenly, John started calling for a taxi, and then the girl said that she didn't want to ride in it. She decided that since she had already recovered, she wanted to walk home. John then asked her if she knew that their house was quite far from here, and asked if she was sure of her decision, since she had recently recovered. The girl replied that everything was fine, and if something happened, John would simply carry her on his back. John smiled and asked if he could talk the girl out of it, knowing that she would still do it her way. When the boy said that they would go on foot, the girl became even happier and grabbed her brother's hand tightly. As they walked, John asked the girl what she wanted for dinner. The little girl replied that she wanted her brother to cook his curry for her. John said that she didn't have to worry about money, and that she could choose whatever she wanted. The girl replied that that was not the issue at all, and that she just wanted to eat the food her brother had prepared. John smiled and said that then they would need to stop by the supermarket. The girl exclaimed joyfully that she would need to buy some pudding. And so, after some time, they came home, and the little sister screamed that she hadn't been home for a long time. Suddenly, she saw a light burning from one of the rooms, and thought about it. John, seeing this, suddenly remembered that there was a sphere there. He moved sharply towards his sister and shouted at her not to enter the room. However, the girl had already managed to enter and saw the fairy relaxing in the bathroom. She said that the fast food of this world is just wonderful, and she is becoming addicted to it. The girl came closer and asked in surprise if it was a fairy. Sphere, unsuspecting, said that she was glad that the girl had recovered. After this, the sphere also asked not to call her a fairy anymore, since her name is a sphere. She also said that she had helped John countless times. At that moment, the little girl turned around and realized that it was all true. She leaned towards the sphere and thanked it with all her heart for taking care of her older brother. Then the sphere said that, unlike John, the girl is a very well-mannered person. The little girl laughed shyly, and a blush appeared on her face. John watched what was happening and thought that perhaps it was for the best. Then John looked at the ingredients and realized it was time to make the curry. After a while, everyone was sitting at the table and wishing each other bon appetit. The girl was delighted when she tried the curry prepared by John. She was glad to finally eat her brother's curry after a long time. John told her that his efforts had paid off. The girl exclaimed that she felt alive again, surprising her brother. The fairy said that the girl almost died, and it is not surprising that she feels alive. The girl smiled and said that the sphere was absolutely right. John heard this and could not understand how the fairy dared to say such a thing, but he was reassured by the fact that his little sister was laughing. At that moment, an urgent statement was announced on TV, and John looked at it in surprise. The TV presenter reported that a huge dungeon had appeared in the metro area, and the Adventurers Guild declared that it was a top-ranking dungeon. At this point, my sister said that more and more dungeons have been appearing lately. John reasoned that this was a high-ranking dungeon, and it would take a long time to clear it. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of him, and John looked at it in surprise. It turned out that the system had given him a quest, exactly the same as last time. Sphere said that quests with a time limit should not exist. But this quest is important because it is called compensation for removing the limit. John realized that he would now have to complete this quest, since during the last fight, he had removed all restrictions. The little girl, seeing her brother's anxious face, awkwardly asked what was going on. At this point, John realized that his little sister couldn't see anything, and apologized for possibly saying something strange. After this, John suggested continuing the meal, and the girl awkwardly agreed. That evening, John sat on the sofa and thought about how even the Great Sphere didn't know what was going on. The fairy felt that it was highly likely due to John's transformation in the battle with the Grim Reaper. This did not surprise the sphere at all, since it controlled prohibitions and restrictions. Then the fairy cried out that this was the first time she had heard of the forbidden release, and clarified that only John could know what was happening. John was upset by this, but he expressed his guess. The sphere looked at the guy in surprise and asked if he had an idea. The system showed that the quest was very difficult, and John was convinced of his words. John said he was absolutely certain it was due to his transformation in the battle with the Grim Reaper. He added that most likely the lifting of restrictions was a protective function of the prohibitive restriction. John pointed out that it was supposed to go off when his life was in danger. For the spell to work, he requires an equivalent amount of energy. But during the battle with the Grim Reaper, when he removed the restrictions, he did not need to pay compensation. The fairy listened to all this and did not understand what was happening. John explained that this meant that in exchange for being saved in the battle with the Grim Reaper, he must pay compensation under any circumstances. Sphere realized that this is why the quest is called compensation for removing the restriction. John added that there was still a lot he didn't understand. Suddenly, the fairy screamed and asked if the guy had called it a deferred payment. She added that if John did not pay, that is, did not complete this urgent quest, he would most likely die. The sphere screamed in alarm that they needed to hurry, and most likely this was the same dungeon that was talked about on TV. John said he agreed, but he didn't like it. He realized that his adventures as an adventurer continued. In the morning, the little sister got ready and, saying goodbye to her brother, said that she was going to school. John saw her off with a smile and wished her a good day. Then he decided to go to the office to discuss some business. At the office, the girl asked John if he was sure he wanted to take the exam to advance to the highest level. The guy answered with confidence in his eyes that he was completely ready for this. When the girls walked away, they discussed how, from time to time, unprofessional people come here and ask to pass exams that are not suitable for them in order to get promoted. John heard their conversation perfectly well but said nothing. The Crystal Mines is a large, high-ranking dungeon that suddenly appeared in the metro area. Due to being run by the Adventurers Guild, this dungeon is a normal dungeon rather than a secret one. However, to do this, John will need to increase his own rank because he has only been to the secret dungeons, and his rank clearly indicates a lack of achievements. To pass the exam for a high rank, he will have to pass the measurement of characteristics, as well as a practical exam. John, realizing what he needed, touched the glowing ball to measure the characteristics. Seeing the level 240, the girl was shocked because she did not understand how this person could reach such a level. When John saw her shock, he asked what happened, but the girl replied that everything was fine. She said she would call John when the practical exam began, and he calmly walked outside. Suddenly he heard shouts and thought that there was a quarrel going on somewhere. The boy told the man that he was not the only one responsible for their failure to clear the dungeon. The man said that they screwed up precisely because the boy's skill was useless. The guy replied that he could accept that he would only get a small portion of the spoils, but he would not take the blame for the clan's failure. The man replied that they were unable to clear the dungeon only because of his short-sightedness. He also said the guy was just trying to shift the blame by punching the ground. While swinging at the boy, the man continued to shout that it was no wonder the child was expelled. At that moment, John blocked the man's blow, thereby saving the boy. The man asked arrogantly who he was. John replied that he was just an adventurer passing by. Then the man said that strangers should not interfere in other people's affairs. At that moment, the loudspeakers announced that a high-ranking adventurer needed to go to the reception. As he left, he said he would just pretend nothing had happened and advised the boys to consider themselves lucky. Then he turned angrily and noted that it would not last long. The kid began to apologize to John for having to intervene. The guy asked what happened between them, but the boy immediately panicked. He explained that the man was the leader of the Red Dragon clan, of which he was a member. The boy's name was Pete, and when he was with the team, they didn't want to clear a high-level dungeon. However, they ran into a trap in which everyone died except Frank, that is the man, and Pete. The blame should have fallen on Frank, since he is the leader of the team, but the man tried to blame everything on the baby. After hearing all this, John said that the boy's story sounded terrible. At that moment, they started calling him, and he began to say goodbye to the boy. Pete suddenly shouted that the practical exam was a demonstration fight against high-ranking adventurers. He began to warn that the man was indeed dangerous, and every time he acted as an examiner, his opponents suffered terrible injuries. Then John said that everything was fine, and although you wouldn't know it from looking at him, he was quite strong. The kid just looked at John with concern as he said goodbye. After some time, John was in the examination hall, and Frank, seeing him, laughed loudly. He warned the boy not to think that he would be able to get out of here unharmed. However, John responded without hesitation that he was also glad that the man had become his opponent, which confused him. He then added that with such a terrible person he could not hold back. And then the loudspeakers announced that the practical exam was beginning. At that very moment, Frank rushed at John and told him to try not to die from one blow. When the boy dodged, he saw that the man had split the ground with his bare hands. John realized that the man had very high characteristics for a high rank. When the guy started to move away, Frank put his hands out and shouted that he wasn't leaving. At this point, the man began to use gravity, which greatly surprised John, as he could no longer control his movements. The man swung at the guy who was flying straight at him and screamed that it was the end. However, John was able to dodge the blow again and stand firmly on his feet. Frank started to say that the guy had dodged it pretty well, but he was just lucky. John said that this attraction skill suits the man's physical characteristics well. Frank began to say that the guy was very smart, and if he hadn't been so impudent, the man would have invited him to his clan. However, according to the man, because of the guy's insolence, his career as an adventurer will end today. John continued to stand there and reasoned that the man had a large amount of mana, as expected from a high rank. After more techniques, Frank said that the guy's strength could become a big problem for his clan in the future. And then he added that he was very lucky to destroy the guy in the initial stages. Then John took a fighting stance and said that the man's luck was about to run out. Frank just laughed and said he would see how long the boy could maintain his insolence. At that moment, John felt a very strong heaviness in his body and could not understand what to do. After another reception, the guy began to reason that the man uses his skills well, and in addition, he has first-class power. John realized he would have to use his wisdom eye to block Frank's technique, and his man again began to use the power of attraction and call the guy to him. At that moment, John put his hand forward and began to use all his strength. Frank was shocked that the guy was able to break his gravity. He immediately realized that the guy was truly an unusual and competent person. Suddenly, John started to walk away and the man started yelling at him that their match wasn't over yet. Then the guy turned around and asked if the man had heard the announcer. Frank was angry and didn't understand what was going on, so he started yelling that he didn't care and they weren't finished yet. John then said that he came here to become a high-ranking adventurer, and he only cared about passing the practical exam. At this point, the man became even more angry and started shouting at the guy not to joke with him. Frank slammed his fists on the ground and said that he would get to the boy one day. And then he also shouted that they would definitely finish their fight. At this time, the girl handed John a gold card and congratulated him on his promotion to the highest rank. While the guy was thanking him for his concern, Pete came up and asked how everything went. Then John said that he somehow managed and was glad that the exam was quite short. The boy let out a calm breath and said that he had seen enough adventurers who had successfully suffered terrible injuries in that short time. And then he also praised the guy for not having a single scratch on him. Then John said that he felt he was strong enough to be considered a high-ranking adventurer. Then Pete said that Frank was famous for his stubbornness and might come after the guy. Eventually, the boy told John to contact him if he had any problems. John walked down the street, thinking that he was now of high rank, but still didn't know how to join the clan. He knew he could always ask old friends about it. Suddenly, John saw a monster nearby. A crowd of people immediately started running towards the guy, shouting that they would soon be killed. Roma was telling or starting to tell people that monsters had broken out of the gate and all people were asked to evacuate immediately. John only became angry when he heard this because he had just started making plans. The guy understood that he would feel uneasy if he ignored what was happening and people died. After a short search, John found the monster. He was tired and wanted to deal with it as soon as possible so he could continue his business. At this time, one of the men was in an authorized viewing room with monitors. He was surprised that John was so weak, but somehow managed to reach a high level in a short period of time. Watching John, the man realized that the guy was incompetent and lacking in skills, but had significantly exceeded his limits. He decided to simply report this to the guild leadership for now. At this time, another guy was holding a sword in his hands and was amazed at the strength of the enemy. At that moment, the man who was on his side helped him deal with this enemy. This clan continued to fight, and one of them began to use the powers of a wind cannon. After that, the guy turned around and said to give him the boss. The clan immediately said that they couldn't stand this guy, but he was the strongest of them all. Then the guy started telling the monster that the snake had no chance against him. The fight continued, and the clan divided itself into enemies that were of a suitable level. At this time, John was sitting on the roof of one of the buildings and simply watching the fight. He was unsure, but if he intervened right now, he would be accused of stealing the boy's loot. John understood that the guy was only one rank below him, so he decided to trust him. This guy thought that if he defeated the monster, he would immediately be promoted to a high rank and would not have to take the exam. After that, he smiled and said that becoming an adventurer would be easy. John watched the guy and realized that he was just talking. He clearly didn't notice that the boss had been building up his strength all this time. At that moment, the monster broke free from the trap and looked straight at the guy. At this point, John realized that the guy really wasn't using his brain and started to approach them. At that moment, the guy screamed in fear and asked the monster not to come near him. The boss was getting closer and closer and his mouth was opening wider and wider. At that moment, John stood between the monster and the guy and pulled out his sword. He took out the boss with one hit and the guys didn't ask if he saved him. Later, the leader of the crowd said that John was able to defeat everyone with one blow. The guy realized that in the end it would look like he had stolen their loot, and he decided to quickly get out of there before they started yelling at him. The men of the clan still couldn't figure out what was wrong with this adventurer, John. It was clear to everyone that the guy was on a whole new level. At this point, one girl was happy that she had managed to take some great photos. She looked at her phone and admired John's skill with the sword. Besides, John was also handsome, so the girl was lucky to take these pictures. She sat in the cafe and continued to think about John's rank. The girl even thought that perhaps the guy had not yet joined the clan and tried to find him in the database. It turned out that it was indeed John, and he was still incompetent despite his incredible strength. The girl realized that all this could be quite interesting, and it made her happy. In the evening, when John returned home, he immediately heard his sister scream. He started saying that it was quite rude to use a smartphone while eating. Then his sister showed him the phone screen and told him to be sure to look at it. John picked up the phone and began to examine what was on it. To his surprise, it was himself on the video. His sister told him that the man in the video was John and asked if the guy was really that strong. John replied that it was indeed him, but he did not understand who could have photographed him. Then the sister asked if he knew Sarah. The girl explained that despite her fame, she was super strong. John immediately understood what was going on and looked thoughtfully at the fairy. Sphere said she offended the guy by calling him cool, and it seems he became quite popular. The sister started shouting that now her brother would also become a real celebrity. As soon as John noticed a bunch of notifications on his phone, he realized that the video had already been circulated. My sister said it was obvious because Sarah herself posted it. John decided to contact the site to have them remove the video. The guy understood that if people started spreading personal information, the jokes would be bad. At that point, the sister said that they needed to force Sarah to delete the video, and John just thanked the Almighty for such an understanding sister. Sphera supported the idea and said that large companies usually move slowly. She added that she was well versed in the matter because she had recently been collecting information from all over the internet. The sister said that the fairy was hardworking, but John thought that the sphere was just killing time. The guy suggested creating an account and contacting Sarah. The sister suggested that Sarah might not read the message because of the many notifications. John agreed with his sister. Suddenly the guy received a message, and the girl said that the worries were in vain because Sarah had already answered. My sister suggested skipping school tomorrow and going with my brother. John said that he understood the girl's feelings, but she shouldn't skip school. However, the guy was still bothered by the fact that Sarah responded too quickly, as if she was waiting for his message. The next day, John approached the Adventurers Guild. Suddenly a girl grabbed him by the sleeve and asked him to follow her. John obeyed calmly, and they went up in the elevator. In one of the offices, the girl took off her hat and said that she was glad to meet John. The guy decided to immediately ask what kind of room it was. Sarah explained that it was a regular conference room, and added that if John had a high rank, he could use it at any time. Then she sat down on a chair, and said that because of her fame, she would not be able to have a heart-to-heart talk with him in front of everyone. John immediately understood why the girl brought him here. The guy decided to get down to business and asked if Sarah could delete the video. She replied that she had already deleted the post and showed it on her phone. Seeing this, John said that he felt much better, and thanked the girl. Sarah said there was no need to thank her because it was nothing special. She did delete the video, but asked the guy if it seemed too wasteful given the amount of feedback he was getting. Sarah asked John if he dreamed of becoming famous. John sat down calmly on the chair and said that his views were completely different. Sarah realized that John definitely didn't want to stand out, but she wasn't going to insist. The girl just decided to ask if the guy would agree to continue working together. John asked the girl again in surprise, because he didn't understand what they were talking about. Sarah began to explain that John was strong after all, and that fact alone drew attention to him. John asked in surprise if Sarah had known before that he was incompetent. The girl then said that she posted the video either after she was looking for information about John. She began to boast that being famous was extremely useful, and also talk about how she planned to invite a guy with an unusual speech. John then asked if she had started the video to tell him about it. Sarah just said that she never does anything without a reason. She really wanted to create a group or even create a whole clan with her boyfriend. Then John asked where the girl got such a wild desire. Sarah simply responded that if she could attract the attention of people outside of social media, her popularity would certainly increase. After these words, John realized that there was nothing more important for the girl than being famous. Sarah winked and said he had hit the nail on the head. John began to discuss that he couldn't do without a clan, since he wanted to conquer a huge dungeon. After some discussion, the guy said that he was ready to consider their joint work, taking into account some conditions. John said he was interested in starting his own clan, which surprised Sarah. The girl only asked if the guy could not contain his stormy interest when such a cute girl was in front of him. After that, Sarah said that it would be difficult to create a clan with a person she knew nothing about, and suggested that she tell about herself. John said that he needed to clear a dungeon, and that's what he needed a clan for. Then Sarah asked if the guy was talking about the crystal mines, and John realized that she knew. Sarah thought that if John couldn't find the clan, he would try to clear the dungeon himself. She then suggested that they join forces. At this point, John said to wait a little, as he had other conditions. He would like the girl to promise not to post about him on social media without his permission. Sarah looked up and said she knew about it. She then added that she agreed with this condition. John said that that was all, and if the girl kept her promise, then he could also set his own conditions. Sarah extended her hand and said that in that case she looked forward to working together. John looked at her in surprise, as she made a decision very quickly. Then the girl said that it was she who asked him to come here, and she felt that the guy had a bad impression of her. John calmly replied that his impressions were indeed not the best. Hearing this, Sarah said that this is why she wants to build a trusting relationship between them. John shook the girl's hand and asked if she could fulfill one more request. Then he handed over the piece of paper and said that he really wanted the girl to give an autograph to his little sister. Sarah opened the marker and said with a smile that he was a very good older brother. When the girl signed the paper and put on her cap, she said that to create a clan they needed to find 5 more people. John thought about it and decided to ask Sarah about her plans. The girl said with a smile that she had no one. Sarah started to say that everyone wanted to get close to her only because of her popularity. John said that he understood everything, and then he decided to invite his people himself. Sarah closed the door and called out to him to contact her when he was ready to continue. And now, at home, John's little sister was screaming with delight, having received an autograph from Sarah herself. The guy said he thought the girls would be pleased to receive it. John's little sister said that she loved her brother very much, and he became embarrassed. At that moment, the fairy appeared in front of John and laughed at him again. After some time, John's colleague replied that his wounds had not yet healed, and he would not be able to work as an adventurer in the near future. The girls he talked to said they could join their guild. There was only one person left, and John remembered the boy he had helped recently and decided to invite him. At this time, the little sister asked her brother about what they had talked about with Sarah. When John said that Sarah wanted to work together, the girl exclaimed in surprise and joy. Then John said he made her promise not to be popular. My sister said that they apparently got along well in private. The girl then said that she also wanted to meet Sarah alone, and John said that she might have such an opportunity. The little girl raised her hands up in delight and screamed that she was very happy about it. John knew he would do everything he could to ensure his sister could meet Sarah. However, given his current power level, he had trouble dealing with the dungeon boss. John realized that he needed to become even stronger. He also understood that this way of life would become his concept. At night, he decided to go to level up, and the fairy said that John was very hardworking. John said that during the day he has to work on creating a clan so he can only level up at night. The sphere understood that John was busy, but there was nothing to be done. His life was in danger. The sphere also warned John not to relax just because he managed to clear a high-ranking dungeon. Opening the ominous door, John said that he knew about it and was not going to relax. It was clear from the door that there were many strong monsters behind it. Upon entering the door, John immediately summoned his white Nemean lion. He gained experience for every monster he killed with his summons, and was thus able to level up more effectively. Apparently, the local monsters also loved to fight. It was thanks to this that John was able to increase his level, but much faster. The guy defeated monsters all night long, but did not give up. He did all this until only the boss remained. The main monster immediately threw Leo away from himself and touched himself. Then John looked at the animal and realized that it was time for him to rest. The guy said that the animal did everything it could, and so he decided to deal with the monster himself. After this, John turned to the boss and said that he had little time, so he would finish everything with one blow. At that very second, all the guy's power whirled around the terrible monster and tore it apart. The system immediately said that John had received the Club of Kings from this boss, and John breathed a sigh of relief. The power of one of the spells amazed the guy, but it seemed he was not yet strong enough to withstand its rebound. However, for now he is satisfied with this option, so he has come to terms with it. I'm already back, and was surprised that this time I found myself in the kitchen, and not in the backyard, as was the case last time. The sphere at that moment said that it was all because his coordinates in the dungeon had changed, and a lot of unnecessary things. He realized that the only dungeon he had been in was really the only one where he had moved around so much, and that was why he had ended up in the courtyard. He left his phone number and saw a message from a boy who said he wanted to know more details about the clan. Then the sphere said that if the guy managed to get this boy, he would become the 5th person needed to create the clan. John said that the boy had been to the crystal mines before, and if he could recruit him, he would be useful to them. After some time, they were already sitting and drinking tea in one of the establishments. The boy said he would be glad if John would let him join. Michael lifted his cup of tea to his mouth and asked if John had recruited the rest of the team. To this, John replied that besides him, the team had a couple of high-ranking adventurers and one adventurer of lower ranks. Michael was surprised because the difference in rank was big and asked if John knew these people, to which John replied that they only knew him, but he didn't think they knew each other. Michael replied that there would be 3 high-ranking adventurers with him, and they would attract a lot of attention. Then, becoming serious, he continued that sooner or later Frank would try to deal with them. Remembering the man, John looked closely at Michael and asked if he was sure about this, to which Michael replied that after the last meeting, Frank contacted him and asked him to tell him everything he knew about his interlocutor. And then he exclaimed that he hadn't told him anything. John, with a cup of tea, replied that he had really thought he would cause them a lot of trouble, and he added that this had been happening since he was his opponent in the promotion exam. But their squabbles don't concern Michael, because he is in no way responsible for it. Exhaling and raising the cup to his mouth, Michael thanked John. After all, he didn't want anyone else to go through this, and he also wants to be useful to the clan that John will lead. Michael admitted that he was fascinated by the guy's personality, which surprised him greatly. Placing his hands on his knees and bowing his head, he asked to be allowed to join his clan. John smiled, extended his hand and said that he couldn't wait to start working together. Michael shook John's hand in return and admitted that he couldn't wait for this moment. Walking on the roof, John thought that he had collected the necessary number of people to create a clan. Thinking and becoming serious, he thought that all that was left was to clear the dungeon. John remembered that for a high-ranking dungeon, the gates were emitting a large amount of mana, and Jessica and Catherine are not strong enough to go there yet. Remembering the girls, he decided that given the time to train them, they were barely making it. With anticipation, he decided that he would have to use a lot of unconventional methods. The next morning, the guy couldn't believe that he would be able to meet her so quickly. The girl turned around and shyly thanked her brother. John decided that now was the time, so he wrote to her. The girl was delighted that she had such a good brother. They slowly approached the tall building where the Adventurers Guild was located. Strangers looked at John walking and thought that he really did look like the guy from the video. The girl fell a little behind her brother and turned around, feeling that someone was looking at them intently. As John entered the elevator, he thought that although the video had not been online for long, people were already beginning to recognize it. Having climbed to the required floor, they approached a door behind which someone was already standing. Sarah, looking at John and her sister who was hiding behind him, was glad to see them. At this, the guy chuckled and noted that she got here first. Sarah smiled and looked at them, confirming this. At this time, the girl covered her mouth with her hands and exclaimed in surprise that she saw Sarah and that in life, she was much more beautiful. The girl was surprised that this cutie was there and assumed that she was his sister. Clutching her brother's hand, the girl was shocked when Sarah called her cutie. Lowering her glasses slightly, the girl was glad that Kitty was happy. The girl continued to look at Sarah in shock, because she couldn't believe that she remembered her name. The girl remarked that John must have fun having such an energetic sister, to which he laughed and said that she was a big fan of his. Michael appeared behind the guy and greeted everyone. John turned around and looked at him and noticed that he was punctual. And then he noticed Catherine, who also came up, to which the girl replied that she couldn't help but come because the guy invited her so politely. Jessica was the last to arrive and thanked John for his work. Afterwards, she said that she really hoped she hadn't kept them waiting. As the crowd looked at her, John told her not to worry, because they had just arrived themselves. Jessica breathed a sigh of relief because she'd been very worried about this. Then John said that since everyone was here, they needed to start their meeting by introducing themselves. They decided to start clockwise so as not to miss anyone. Then Kitty introduced herself and said that she was not an adventurer, but simply decided to keep her older brother company. At this point, Catherine asked John if this was the sister he was talking about. Everyone unanimously said that it was nice to meet the girl and noted her politeness. After that, Jessica introduced herself and said that she was a low-ranking adventurer, but she would give it her all. Next, Catherine introduced herself, saying that she was of a slightly higher rank and was good with a bow. After the girls, Michael introduced himself and said that he had support skills and would cover for them. At that moment, Sarah realized that she was the last one and panicked a little. At that moment, the girls said they were wondering who she looked like. Then Sarah took off her cap and said that perhaps someone knew her. After that, she introduced herself with a smile on her face and charm in her eyes. Everyone was shocked to see the real Sarah standing right in front of them. At this point, Catherine asked if Sarah had posted the video with John. Then the guy decided to discuss everything that happened. Then John told everyone what had happened in all the details, about how the girl accidentally ended up on the video, and how they contacted each other and created this plan, and also that their goal is to conquer the crystal mines. Upon hearing about these mines, Jessica said that this was the same dungeon that was recently discovered. John clarified that this was a huge, high-ranking dungeon, so entry was only open to clans. Upon hearing about the difficulty of the dungeon, Catherine said that it was too much of a challenge for her and Jessica. Jessica said with alarm that it was indeed very dangerous. John then said that this was why the clan's first priority would be to train them. Catherine said that there was no way they could become strong enough to fight equally in a high-ranking dungeon. Then Sarah came closer to the girls and said that, in her opinion, this could be achieved quite quickly. And then she clarified that John was able to achieve considerable success, jumping from a low rank straight to a high one. The girl was sure that everyone could become stronger literally in the blink of an eye. Then Catherine thoughtfully said that speed was completely unimportant, because it was simply impossible. John then said that Sarah was right, and they would all quickly become strong enough to compete with the high-ranking dungeon monsters. And then he also clarified that he could say with confidence that with his skill, this was entirely possible. Jessica was surprised to hear this, because the guy said he had no skills. John then apologized for not saying anything, but he did have a skill that only he could see. After that, sitting at the table, the guy began to talk about his hidden skill. Everyone was shocked that the guy had something like this all this time, which meant he couldn't be considered an ordinary incompetent. Jessica, watching the others, was surprised that everyone was taking the news so calmly. At this point, Kitty asked her brother about the skill in surprise. Then Jessica saw that the girl was surprised too, and realized that at least she was not alone. John looked at his little sister and asked her for forgiveness for not telling him earlier. The little girl then asked if the boy had used this hidden skill to heal her. As they spoke, Jessica only realized that Kitty's surprise was not as strong as hers. The girl began to understand that, apparently, it was because of his skill that she was able to use such amazing magic. At this point, Sarah began to ask John what kind of ability this was. The guy then replied that his skill allowed him to learn abilities from any skill group. Sarah laughed really hard and said that was the best skill ever. John then said that despite his strength, he has his weaknesses, and yet his hidden skill is indeed extremely useful. Then Catherine said that she didn't quite understand, but she knew from the beginning that the guy was quite strong. Michael, watching the girl's words, realized that she was incompetent. Then John said that it was precisely because the incompetent lacked skills that they were unable to use magic. Jessica asked the guy again in surprise, not understanding how this was different. John replied that magic was not what she thought it was. He explained that skills are actually a form of magic, but only the competent can use magic properly. John also said that Jessica had already used magic at least once. The girl confirmed this, but added that the guy made it so that she could use magic. John replied that he had just pushed her a little, and the spell had been strong enough. Michael continued to be surprised and said that it was all quite powerful. At this point, John said that such enormous power should be enough. That's why the guy was going to force Jessica to study magic. The girl heard this and said that she would do everything possible. After that, everyone asked about Catherine. John said he would give her a deeper understanding of his skill. He also added that all high-level adventurers should have a deeper understanding of all the nuances in their own skills. Sarah noted that John was right in that skills can change depending on how they are used. So John wanted Catherine to deepen her knowledge of her skill, and said that they would raise her level. The girl just said in surprise that the guy's skill was really very unique. At this point, Sarah stood up from her chair and said that she could help too, because she could be useful when it came to advice on how to use skills. When the girl thanked her enthusiastically, John thought she got a different reaction. And after some time, the guy said that this is how they plan to make them stronger. After this, John asked Jessica if she was free now, because he would like to teach her the basics of magic right away. Then my sister and Catherine were surprised and asked to be present at this lesson too. John just smiled and said he didn't mind their presence. And Sarah and Michael said they were interested too, but they had some things to do today. As they parted ways, they decided to discuss their clan's future plans in a group chat. And so John and the girls entered his apartment. The sphere, eating sweet sticks, was surprised that guests had come to visit them. The girls were very surprised because they did not understand who she was. John then explained that the sphere was part of his hidden skill, and his sister noted that her name was Sphere. The girls were shocked by this, because they didn't think that the hidden skill also had a fairy. Sphere Rising laughed and said that the girls were promising, because they were able to easily appreciate all her beauty. Then John said that he was going to teach Jessica magic, so he asked not to interfere with them. The sphere began to shout that, of course, she would not interfere, and asked the guy to know his place. After some time, John, turning to Jessica, said that they had already overcome the first step towards her being able to use magic. After the girl's embarrassed reaction, the guy asked her not to react like that, because it causes misunderstanding. Then Jessica, still embarrassed, asked for forgiveness. John began to say that he had interfered with her magic circuit that time, to allow mana to flow through her unhindered. And from that moment on, the girl had to learn to independently make mana flow through her body. Jessica simply replied that she still didn't understand anything, and asked to explain how it was. Then John said that this was why he wanted to give her the opportunity to understand the sensations of mana step by step. Extending his hand to the girl, the guy said that now, just like then with the Minotaur, he was stimulating her mana. By maintaining this state, the girl would be able to comprehend the sensation of mana. Jessica then asked if that meant she would fire that spell or something like that again. John Leaf said that it was not so, and then apologized, because he would have to touch her back again. At this moment, the other girls froze in shock and did not understand what was happening. Catherine started screaming that this was sexual harassment. John immediately began to explain that in order to stimulate mana, he needed to touch her skin near her mana vessel. Sphere, observing this, realized that it seemed that John still didn't like his sister. After that, everyone started asking Jessica about what she was feeling. Shakarova's girl began to say that everything was happening the same way as last time, when her body was warm. Catherine thought that this actually sounded like what it felt like to use the skill. John began to explain that her body felt warm because he was stimulating her mana. Jessica asked not to talk about anything so sinister. Then the guy said that this was the easiest and fastest way to learn. The girl closed her eyes and said that she understood. For a magician, this quality is simply necessary, and in addition to everything, the girl has excellent control over her energy. John understood that at this rate the girl would become stronger, And now Jessica was almost at her limit and she looked completely concentrated. Then John said to imagine her adding an equal and opposite force to her energy. At this point, the girl got confused and couldn't do anything, so she started asking for forgiveness. Then the guy said that she had worked hard and was doing well for her first time. After that, John gave her some medicine and told her to drink it, and then she would feel better. Jessica drank the elixir and was surprised at how amazingly it worked, because she was full of energy. Then John said that this was one of the parts of his skill. Then John told Jessica to try again, which surprised her greatly. The guy noted that such training is quite effective for learning magic. Jessica then asked if she would have to repeat the whole procedure over and over again. When John replied that this was exactly the case, his sister called her brother a real monster. Then the guy said that it seemed quite normal to him, and in any case, he would say that it should be much easier this way. At that moment, the girls screamed that it was not just that, and their screams raised the alarm in the whole house. Then the sphere told the boy that he had finally strayed far from common sense. Hearing this, the guy told them to limit themselves to 50 repetitions. Everyone was shocked by John's words, and he realized that he had gone too far. Jessica agreed to do 5 reps and said she would try. Once the girl completed her training, she gained an understanding of how to control mana. John then planned to improve her accuracy by repeating this training over and over again. After some time, John, Sarah, and Catherine descended into the dungeon of almost the highest rank. Jessica sheepishly said that she couldn't wait to start working together. Catherine admitted that she was nervous because she saw how hard Jessica's workout was yesterday. John said he didn't have a good understanding of how to teach skills, but he was willing to try. When Sarah picked up the phone, John reminded her of the agreement. The girl replied that she was joking and was ready to take responsibility for the training. She then asked Catherine to tell her everything about her skill. Catherine explained that her skill was called Cupid's Magic Bow. It also allows her to impose various effects on bows and arrows. She can also make her arrows fly further or turn in a circle. Sarah asked if Catherine had used this skill in other situations. The girl replied that yes, and she added that if she finds new abilities and ways to use her skill, she will be able to defeat higher-ranking monsters. John offered to demonstrate all this in practice so that Catherine would understand it faster. Sarah decided to demonstrate her ability by defeating one of the centaurs. The girl quickly moved towards the enemy and began to use the pattern dancer. She said that this skill was originally a support to strengthen comrades, but by slightly changing the method of application, Sarah was able to fight on her own. She decided to use the boost on the centaur's hind hooves. Then he will not be able to balance the speed of his hind hooves with his front hooves. But to Catherine's surprise, the centaur fell, and John was surprised that the girl could use her skill on a separate part of the body. Sarah continued to say that after this, she would use an offensive buff on herself. It is after this that she can calmly tear her enemy to pieces and land without spending much energy. Looking at the girl with fear, she said that the fight with the centaur was over. Coming closer, she began to say that it all looked something like this, and asked Catherine if she understood. Sarah repeated that she took her skill and found a way to use it to attack. With a smile on her face, the girl asked Catherine again if everything had become clear to her. The girl simply replied that it was amazing, but she didn't understand how to use it as an example. Then Sarah said that she thought she could do something like that in no time. John said that he watched Sarah with the eye of wisdom, and then he also said that thanks to her he understood something. When Sarah asked him what exactly he realized, the guy replied that the skills were not tied to her level in any way, and the more she practiced them, the stronger she became. Catherine realized that it all depended on training and asked if she was really capable of something like that. I thought that if the girl was faithful, then the item should help Catherine become even stronger. After that, John repeated that her skill could become stronger regardless of her level. Catherine said she found it hard to believe and asked him if he was sure about it. The guy then asked if Sarah felt that the effect of her skill had become stronger. The girl replied that everything was exactly like that. It seemed to her that it was connected with the increase in her level or the increase in her characteristics. Then John said that he thought things were completely different. After that, the guy explained that they can develop their skills in the same way they increase their stats. Then Catherine asked if the guy meant that skills had their own level. John just said that the whole point is that the skills are very similar to magic. And then he added that skills really do work exactly the same as characteristics. When I think about it, I realize that it's not quite like that, but it makes it easier to grasp the concept. At this point, Catherine asks why the assessors don't show skill levels. John replies that stats are similar to levels, but they are different from each other. He adds that it may require a different device to display the level. At this point, Sarah says that such a device does not exist and asks if John is sure of his theory. John replies that he is 100% sure, and perhaps this device has not yet been invented in this world. Sarah says it would be great if the guy could do it. After this, John tells them to level up Catherine's skill and move on. Catherine asks how exactly the guy plans to do this. John replies that if skills have levels, they should also have experience points. Using new methods should give more experience than the usual ways of using her skill. After this, Sarah understands why John asked her this question. The guy tells them to remember what he told them. Catherine replies that it all sounds confusing, but she will try. Now, while defending this dungeon, they need to find ways to level up their skills. After a while, John sits and reads the information in the system, trying to understand what it all means. The guy created this system in his past life, so he doesn't understand why the status evaluator is here. After this, the guy sees the skills evaluator, which surprises him. The sphere says that perhaps it is because in his past life, John created both of these things. John asks in surprise if he really created these things. The guy realizes that he doesn't remember anything, and is surprised that he created them during a period he knows nothing about. John still doesn't understand why he learned about skills in his past life. Unfortunately, all his thoughts are useless, because he cannot understand what he was thinking about then. Sphere says that perhaps he shouldn't worry about it. Hearing this, John begins to think that the time limit is approaching, and now he must focus on clearing the crystal mines. The next morning, John introduces Catherine to the appraiser. The girl is surprised that the guy created this overnight, and the sphere says that it is all thanks to her. At this point, John suggests measuring Catherine's skill level. After the measurement, everyone is surprised that the skill actually appeared. However, Catherine's skill level turns out to be quite low, although her rank is quite high. John explains that their rank is calculated from all ranks, so her skill rank is actually quite high. Catherine says she feels uneasy, even thinking about going into a nearly high-ranking dungeon. John says that it's okay and the skill doesn't matter, because he'll get stronger anyway if she fully masters it. The guy also says that he feels like Catherine's skill has special potential, which confuses the girl. Then she looks away and says that if the guy thinks so, it makes her feel better. After this, John says that since they have confirmed her skill level, they need to go to the guild hall to train. The girl asks what kind of hall this is. She thinks they'll be heading into a dungeon, and John says that if they're going to level up her skill, this training hall would be better suited for the task. Catherine says she has a bad feeling about this for some reason. When they are in the training room, they ask the guy with scared faces what they are going to do today. John says with a confident look that the two of them will fight him. The girls are surprised and don't understand how they can cope with the guy. After that, the guy added that this is the fastest and easiest way to make them stronger. Jessica asked how they would fight him since he was so strong. Then John said that they would fight together against him alone. The guy also said that Catherine should focus on leveling up her skill, and Jessica needs to get used to using magic. John also said that by fighting together they would be able to improve their teamwork. Catherine said it all sounded logical, but she didn't understand how John would fight both of them at once. John then asked Jessica if she remembered the phrase he had recently taught her. The girl said that of course she remembered, and she should let the mana flow throughout her body. Then John said that it was called verbal magic, and he added that if they fail, he has a backup plan, so they shouldn't worry. Then Catherine took the bow in her hands and asked if the guy knew that she could get hurt. Then John said that if they actually managed to hurt him, he would buy them coffee. The girl finally shouted that she would need coffee with an extra portion of milk and sugar. Now the fight began. John deftly dodged all the arrows. The guy thought that the girl had a unique ability to turn arrows into water. John certainly saw that Cupid's magical bow lived up to its name. But for the girl to feel successful, the guy would let her hit him. After a few dodges, Catherine began to deal new damage. At this time, Jessica tried to concentrate her energy and attack the enemy. John was surprised that the girl was able to cover it with water for better electrical conductivity, and he said that if the arrows didn't hit him, it didn't matter at all. Catherine screamed that the guys couldn't dodge in the air at all, and John praised the girl for changing the trajectory of the arrows. At that moment, Catherine was surprised that the guy was able to predict her actions. Jessica began to speak so that a crimson flame would emerge from her energy and burn everything to the ground. At that moment, a huge explosion rushed straight towards John. The guy realized that the girl was doing great too. She got it right on the first try. Then the guy stopped the blow and absorbed it. Catherine wondered what magic really was. Finally, John said that the girls had done an amazing job with the plan, and he added that they even gave him goosebumps. Catherine was angry that the guy didn't even break a sweat. Suddenly, Jessica asked the guy if he could use magic too. When the guy said that it was, she asked why he made her use it that time. John was confused by her question and decided to remain silent. And then he decided to clarify that he really couldn't use magic then. Jessica then said she just felt a little uneasy about how easily he handled it. Catherine praised the girl for her courage. At this point, John said he wanted them to come up with new ways to attack him. And then he asked if they understood everything, to which the girls firmly answered yes. After the battle, John noted that the girls had done a great job for the first day, and he was pleasantly surprised that they had done much better than he could have imagined. Catherine was confused. They had attacked the enemy so many times, but not a single blow had even touched him. John stated that he would make them at least as strong as he was. Jessica couldn't believe it, but the guy understood that people often become stronger without even noticing the process. Suddenly, an alarmed Michael burst in with bad news. John looked at his friend anxiously and began to wait for an explanation. The boys started talking about Frank, and John asked what had happened to him. It turned out that Frank had entered the crystal mines and had not returned yet. A few days before this incident, the company went on holiday to the Blue Sea. During the summer holidays, Kitty wanted to go on a trip and persuaded her brother to go with her to the tropical islands. Jessica walked next to John and thanked him for inviting her to join the trip. John replied that he should thank her because it was much more fun together. At that moment, a sphere appeared from the bag and noticed that they were not alone here. It was also present. John shrugged, and the fairy added that his job was to give detailed explanations. Jessica, observing their interaction, noted that they get along very well with each other. At this moment, John noticed a strange expression on his sister's face and asked what had happened. Kitty asked her brother if he had anything to say about seeing them in their bathing suits. John, looking away in embarrassment, replied that the bathing suits suited them very well. The little sister agreed, but something was still bothering her. Suddenly, her gaze brightened. She remembered something important. The girl began to worry about where Sarah and Catherine were now. Jessica noted that they were walking for too long and should have changed by now. Suddenly, they saw Sarah trying to pull Catherine out, assuring her that everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. The girl was clearly embarrassed that she was wearing a swimsuit. She looked awkwardly at the ground. When Jessica and Kitty saw Catherine in a bathing suit, they started screaming with delight, realizing how well the outfit suited her. Sarah reassured Catherine that everything was exactly as she said, but the girl was still ashamed. Sarah expressed surprise at her shyness and smiled. Catherine turned to John, asking if the swimsuit really suited her. The guy replied that, in his opinion, it suited her very well. Catherine was surprised at how calm John looked. The girls started to joke that the guy should have blushed when he saw them in bathing suits, although that would have been even worse. Sarah announced that they were there and suggested that they all go swimming. Kitty asked her brother what he would be doing during this time. John said he would just guard their things and they could go have fun. The little sister happily thanked her brother and went swimming. At this time, the sphere noticed that no one could have thought that the guy would travel with only girls. John explained that he had not planned this, and had simply invited those with whom Kitty had already become friends. Sphere continued that, in her opinion, this is simply the guy's character, because she understands how much he loves his little sister. When John closed his eyes, the fairy began to wonder if the boy really didn't think he was weird. She also thought that if she remembered his past life, it all made sense. John opened one eye and suggested that the sphere go for a swim. The fairy replied that such childish amusements did not interest her, and she would prefer to elegantly enjoy sunbathing. John thought that he wasn't interested in that either, and closed his eyes. Suddenly, he noticed a man who was kneeling and doing something. After this, the man stood up, holding a wallet in his hands. When people approached one of the bags, they were surprised that their bag was empty. John realized that the man had stolen their things and began to get up. He asked the sphere to look after their things. The fairy agreed to take it upon herself. John followed the man and started yelling at him to turn around. The whole crowd looked at the guy, and he demanded that the man return what he had stolen. The thief, looking worried, replied that he needed to be caught first. The thief added that, unfortunately, he had the skill of a runner. John replied that since the man had the skill, he too would not hold back. Unexpectedly for the thief, the guy jumped right at him. Within seconds, John had the man down on the ground and immobilized him. After that, the guy took the wallet and said that he was still able to catch it. Everyone around began to applaud, admiring this spectacle. A couple who lost their wallet decided to return to the place where they left it. However, when they arrived, their wallet was still in place, and the man was perplexed. He was sure that they had checked everything. John was lying down at that moment and listening to their conversation. Sarah came up to him and complimented him on his great performance, although that was to be expected. She also joked that she could film it all, like last time. When John asked him to stop, the girl just waved it off, saying it was a joke. Sarah said the girls were playing beach volleyball and came to invite the guy to join in while she looked after things. The girl also explained her arrival by saying that she decided to take a little rest, and added that John's little sister clearly wants him to play with them. With a smile on her face, Sarah added that she was saying this because she was very kind. Upon seeing her brother, Kitty immediately announced that he would be on her team, and Jessica and Catherine would be on the other. One of the girls confidently stated that they really can win at beach volleyball. John smiled and said, okay, he would give in to them. The guy understood that they came here for their little sister, but he liked this kind of summer. Meanwhile, there was a man in the Adventurers Guild. He reported that the high-ranking dungeons had led everyone to a dead end, and they had lost contact with a clan of the same high rank that had recently entered the mine. In response to this news, they decided to raise the crystal mine's danger level from high to super high. The man knew that it would be a big problem if the demons ever got out of such a large dungeon, so he asked someone to take on this task. A super high-class adventurer named Ryan said he had no problem with it. Ryan understood that he was allowed to explore large dungeons alone. There were only 9 super high-class adventurers in the country, and there were no exams to promote to that level. All adventurers of this class were the best in the country, capable of surpassing each other. Some of the dungeon rules set by the guild did not apply to them, and they could freely go through all the dungeons alone. Ryan announced that the cleanup would begin tomorrow and asked if the men had any questions. The man replied that there was no problem and thanked the guy. Ryan expressed his joy at this and looked at the man one last time. As Ryan walked down the elevator, he thought about how he had received a call from the master asking him to attack a super high-class dungeon. The guy understood that his schedule was a bit tight, and because of this, the dungeon would have to be cleared quickly. At this time, Sarah entered the conference room and thanked everyone for waiting. Michael began to apologize for calling everyone so unexpectedly. The boy explained that the clan he used to be a part of lost contact with everyone during the attack on the Crystal Mines dungeon. Sarah was surprised to hear that the boy had once been a member of this clan. She added that she had heard a lot of bad things about the Red Dragon. Of course, most of these rumors were about the leader, not the clan itself. John watched their dialogue and thought that the girl was indeed right. Michael started to tell that Frank was really a very bad person, and no one could do anything about it. That's why the guy wanted to ask everyone for help. The boy felt very sad that he was so selfish. After this, Michael asked if they could help him and go save the Red Dragon clan. At this point, Sarah asked if everyone would have to go to a dangerous place to help a terrible man. The boy admitted that it was all damn selfish. He was always treated badly in the clan, and the leader constantly pestered him. However, if he could help, he would. So now he is turning to his team for help. Then Sarah said that they all could be in danger too. Michael replied that his strategy was minimal, and he only wanted to save the Red Dragon. One girl looked at Jessica and Catherine and asked what their opinion was. Then they replied that they wanted to go to the dungeon, and that was their goal. But they were afraid to go there with their current abilities. John began to reason that in order to get into the crystal mine, they needed at least 5 people. But it was too dangerous to take 2 people with their current strength. Moreover, even if they help the market, there is a chance that it will not reciprocate. Michael only said that he thought it was natural for a man to refuse because his life was at risk, and he himself thought that since no one agreed, he would go alone. At this point, John asked Michael if he really wanted to save Frank. Michael was adamant that if it was possible, then he really wanted it. He started to tell me that Frank was a nice guy at first. His skills were not very strong, so people laughed at him when he was a new adventurer. However, Frank continued to train his skills and his body, and soon became stronger. As a result, the man stopped believing in others, looked down on those around him, and sought conflict. Knowing his past, Michael felt some sympathy for him. John said he understood the boy's feelings perfectly, and then he offered his help, surprising all his clanmates. Sarah asked Michael what he was going to do if he didn't have enough men to enter the dungeon. John asked if they really just needed to come in, leaving Sarah confused. The guy decided to enter the dungeon by brute force in front of the guards. The girl laughed and said that he was offering really interesting ideas. If John had broken the rules of the dungeon, he would have been punished. But the girl decided to help the Red Dragon. Michael, hearing this, turned to the guy and thanked him with all his heart. At this point, Sarah began to think about helping Michael too. She added that the place was dangerous and she would regret it if she let them both die. The girls from the clans said that they were sorry they couldn't help, because their current abilities would only slow them down. John at this point told them not to worry and just keep training well. They found themselves next to a super high-class dungeon crystal mine. John announced that he was going to use invisibility magic on everyone, which would make them unrecognizable to others. Sarah was surprised that the guy could do this, and Michael just said that this was to be expected from him. John began to explain that when they used invisibility, they would be invisible to each other, so he ordered them to head to the dungeon gates on their own. After these words, the guy began to use invisibility on the guys. This surprised everyone very much, because they had not seen each other. As John headed towards the entrance, he overheard the men talking about how the crystal mines were quite a complex dungeon. They were talking about the rumors that the dungeon's danger level had been raised to super high class. John began to think that he might even be able to get to him this time, but it wouldn't be easy. At this point, the guards began to discuss what happened to the guys from the Red Dragon clan. One of them said they might already be dead. They started discussing that they would then get what they deserved, and it would be quite unusual to see them dead. At that moment, John thought that even if Frank was a bad guy, there was no point in saying bad things about him. At that moment, one of the guards almost fell and said that it felt like someone was pushing him. After some time, the guys made their way into the dungeon unnoticed and began to thank John. Then the guy replied that they were just getting started. The dungeon in the crystal mine is large, and the Red Dragon train is very difficult. John also said that the difficulty level has been changed to super high, making it even more dangerous. However, this is the second time they have tried the Red Dragon, so they will not go where they looked last time. After this, John said that they needed to check these places first, and Sarah agreed with him. Michael also said that there were few signs of demons there, so they could safely go deeper into the dungeon. John clarified that the Red Dragon had already defeated the demons, so there weren't many of them. And after they saw one of them, the guy realized that there were still a few left. When Michael saw the crystal deer, he became very worried because this demon was very fast. The deer began to quickly approach the boys. At that moment, John decided to fight him himself, which greatly surprised the boy. The guy ordered Sarah and Michael to watch the perimeter. John reasoned that if he defeated the demons alone, he would gain all the experience he needed. He thought it was useful that he had cleared the hidden dungeons of almost high level, because thanks to this, he was able to defeat the deer in one hit. The coordination demon activates the magic power contained within the coordination demon and circulates throughout the body at high speed. Physical abilities are greatly increased compared to the coordination demon. That's why John's level was rising sharply. After the guy finished dealing with the deer, he calmly looked at the guys and asked if they could continue. Michael was amazed at the boy's strength, and firmly replied that, of course, they could continue. He understood that John was just as high-class an adventurer as they were, but this was a whole new level. Sarah, at that moment, thought that he was much stronger than she imagined. At that moment, she shouted that she couldn't wait for the guy to become famous. At this time, the paparazzi asked one of the guys if he was going to challenge the attack in the dungeon. Ryan walked and thought about where these people could have gotten this information. After that, he told them that the dungeon cores and high-difficulty ones must be destroyed as soon as possible. When asked about the guy's job, Ryan replied that he planned to use the free time in his schedule to attack dungeons. It was shown on TV, and Sphere was watching it with Kitty at that moment. The fairy said that the future super high-level adventurer probably received a lot of attention from the press, unlike John. At that moment, Kitty said that in fact her brother and that guy were very similar in some way. The Sphere only said that recently the girl began to speak in a somewhat friendly manner. And then she began to explain that John and Ryan were classmates in the past and played together. Hearing this, the fairy was shocked and began to scream in surprise. The girl began to wonder what would happen if the guy found out that her brother was an adventurer. She realized that Ryan would be surprised. At this time, John and the guys arrived in a safe area of the dungeon, where the demons could not reach them. Michael understood that from this moment on, the demons became exceptionally strong. John began to think that the boy was very experienced in dungeons, and it was very surprising that he was able to remember such a route with only one experience. Sarah began to say that the structure of the dungeon was different from the others, and the atmosphere was different. The demons are so powerful that facing two or more at once is quite dangerous. Michael realized that this was where Frank had gone, since it was more likely. Suddenly, the boy shouted out that he had developed a strategy, and Sarah immediately asked about it. Michael's skill was manipulating smoke, and he decided to find Frank and the others that way. It's basically a support skill that causes allies to carry smoke with supporting effects and buffs allies. However, this time the smoke spreads throughout the dungeon. Like a radar, it will cover a large area and detect adventurers. Michael said it took a lot of energy, but luckily John killed all the demons along the way himself. They also suggested that using such skills in a large dungeon might be reckless. However, Michael absolutely had to find Frank, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to save him. As the smoke began to envelop the dungeon, John said that the speed of the smoke was very high, and at this rate, they would quickly find Frank. He also said that the speed depends on how far their clan has been able to advance. Michael continued to search for Frank with all his might, and thought that he was not the type to die in a place like this. The boy remembered asking him if he was going to become a super high-class adventurer. The man answered him that he was not interested in titles and honors. However, if he had this title, then others would begin to bow to him. Frank knew that he would, of course, like all of this for any reason. Michael then asked how the man was going to level up. The man replied that he was going to beat the living daylights out of the other adventurers and show them that he was the best. The kid asked in surprise if the man wanted to become the strongest. Frank pulled back a little and said he wasn't saying he wanted that at all. Frank, kneeling and surrounded by smoke, told Michael that it looked a lot like him. The boy immediately thought that this was the very reason he was rooting for the man behind his back. At that moment, Sarah ran out to him and started shouting at Michael that he was running out of mana. Then John came up to the boy and told him to drink this elixir to restore his energy. Seeing the bottle, Sarah asked in bewilderment where the guy got it from. Then John said that he was showing them this personal remedy for the first time, which amazed the guys even more. Michael awkwardly thanked the guy and asked if he really relied on the boy so much. At this point, John said that they needed to do everything they could to find Frank and the others. Then, with complete confidence, Michael confirmed his words. At that very second, the boy shouted that he had found Frank's squad. After this, Michael pointed in one direction and told everyone to head there. However, their main problem was the demons that appeared along the way. Then John said to leave it to him and added that he would go for the smoke alone. At that moment, Sarah said that the guy was doing a really cool thing. However, Michael, although he thanked her for the offer, still asked to go with him. John at this point said that he did not want to take him, so that he would not be used as bait in case of retreat. Then Michael shouted that he was asking to be taken with them because of his selfishness, and did not want everyone to die. Hearing this, John agreed, but clarified that the boy would not be used as bait in any case. Michael smiled and told the boy that he was very kind, however. After this, he also added that he promises to support the guy and help in everything. Then Michael jumped on John's back and they prepared to run. In the end, Sarah only said that she hoped that the boys would return from there alive. Preparing to run, John said that they would definitely return. And now they were running, and Michael was amazed at how fast the guy was. Suddenly, they saw a terrifying monster and realized that it was stronger than any demon they had ever encountered. Michael told John that they could not defeat him, and added that the boy had no choice but to avoid the battle at all costs or run away. Then John told the boy to hold on tighter, and then with confidence in his eyes, he said that he was absolutely serious. Michael confusedly agreed with the guy and grabbed him tighter. John began to reason that the monster was much stronger than the crystal they had just fought. He realized that if he saved his strength, it would drain him. At this point, Michael started screaming that the monster was getting closer and closer. Then John took out his sword and dealt with the beast in one move. The boy began to ask in bewilderment what had just happened and how it all happened so quickly. John simply said that he had simply become much more serious about the operation. Michael was surprised by these words, and the boy realized that the guy never shows his full power. John only said that he only showed 30% of his strength. This surprised the boy even more and made him think. Michael decided to ask if the guy was really exceeding all expectations. At this point, John began to reason that even though he said he wasn't fighting at full strength, he actually couldn't have fought at full strength. And all because if you use all your strength, the recoil will be too strong, and the guy won't be able to move. At that moment, the boys saw that the smoke was clearing and began to examine the area. Suddenly, Michael started shouting that he saw a figure and pointed his finger at it. However, of those who were standing, there was only one, and everyone assumed that it was Frank. Michael realized that the rest of the clan were unconscious, and suggested that they split up and go to help. Hearing this, John agreed, and quickly headed towards the people. Michael immediately ran to Frank and started asking how he was feeling. At that moment, Frank turned to John with all his fury, and began to attack and shout at the boy to be careful. Michael started yelling that now was not the time to fight, but Frank kept yelling that he would kill him. John then realized that Frank had lost his mind and was unable to speak normally. The guy realized that the man had lost his mind, and his magical power had increased significantly. No one could understand what had happened, and Michael sat there unable to even look up. He asked John to step back and not attack Frank. However, the guy said that he had victory over him and was ready for a fight. Then Michael said that he would defeat him himself and looked forward with confidence. John did not listen to the boy and began to attack the enemy from behind. After the attack, the guy immediately began to reason that the man usually faints. But now he has changed a lot. After Frank got to his feet, John realized that his attacks weren't working at all. After this, the man went upstairs and very quickly began to attack the guy, which surprised him. From this blow, Michael flew to the side in horror, screaming at what had happened. John saw that Frank's attack had created a big hole, and realized that he had become stronger. After this, it became obvious that the man's skill was the gravity wave. The guy didn't understand that if they were sucked into this hole, the fight would immediately end, because the chance of escaping from it was minimal. John understood perfectly well and could easily compare this hole to the lair of an antlion. At that moment, Frank landed on the ground and said that he was going to kill the guy. After that, he asked the man if he thought he was a predator. The guy also added that he is ready to fight him head-on and win this fight. Michael at that moment thought that although Frank was one of the best adventurers, John was no slouch either. However, the man's strength was now frankly incredible, which frightened the boy very much. Before the fight, he wished John not to die and to win the duel. As soon as the fight started, Frank immediately flew at the guy. John knew he would be drawn into the attack, and with the man's gravity skills, he wouldn't be able to dodge it. After that, clenching his fists tighter, the guy prepared for this attack with fury in his eyes. After the blow, Frank got back on his feet and said that this was the kind of fight he had been looking for all his life. What surprised him was that he never thought he would see the guy in full force in battle. And then, with a mad scream, he began to say again that he would kill the guy. John only replied that the man was a fine warrior to have any self-preservation left in such circumstances. And then, also moving towards the enemy, he said that he would deal with him. Michael, watching the fight, was very impressed by the strength of both men. Even from a distance, he could feel the earth shaking. Frank continued to shout that he had never seen such a battle, and did not know that the guy was so strong. Then John asked if the man had returned again. Then the man started shouting that he only cared about winning, and not about what the guy had been saying all this time. Then Michael shouted that now was not the time for such talk, and looked furiously at the man. Then Frank turned to the boy and said that he would do whatever he wanted, and at that moment a scarlet beam pierced him through and through. Seeing all this, the boy froze in shock and did not understand what had happened. John immediately began to think about what kind of magic this was. At that moment, someone's voice was heard saying that the man was very difficult to handle. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a silhouette appeared, saying that he didn't think Frank would be able to break. When John saw him, he immediately realized that it was a demon speaking. The monster then began to say that it was rare for a demon to develop the ability to speak, so he was not surprised that the boy was shocked. At this point, Michael asked why he stabbed Frank in the heart. The demon replied that he had begun to lose control in front of the man, and so it was time to get rid of him. Hearing this, the boy was furious and began to shout that he did not dare do such a thing to a man. He also started apologizing to John for the fact that they came all this way to save him, and it all ended like this. At this point, the demon said that the boy was wasting his time mooing, and after attacking him just like a man, he asked him to be quiet for a bit. As John approached the boy in fear, the demon told him not to worry, because he was not dead yet. Then the boy turned to him and said that he would have to quickly defeat the demon and carry the boy down. The monster merely agreed with these words, but said that it seemed unlikely. John realized that the demon was far superior to him in abilities, but this did not cancel the need to defeat the monster in order to save Michael. It was difficult to surpass the demon mage in strength, and the guy understood this. The monster targeted John, declaring that it would end him quickly. Then John decided to use the magical Eye of Wisdom against him. After the blow, the demon noted that the guy was different from ordinary people. Having prepared a new attack, the monster asked how John would cope with it. Using the Eye of Wisdom, the boy successfully repelled all attacks. He was surprised how the demon automatically applied defense, even when receiving physical blows. The monster attacked again, complaining about interference. John realized that close combat was not the demon's weakness. However, he began to understand his opponent's fighting style. Realizing this, the guy prepared for new attacks. The demon noticed John's special eye and thought about it. Surrounding the guy with attacks, the monster asked how he would cope. The demon claimed that attacks from all sides would make defense impossible. John watched the magical strikes with alarm. As he retreated, the demon declared that man could not be his opponent. John emerged from the smoke, declaring that he had repelled the attack. The monster was shocked that the guy survived. John explained that he neutralized the energy by causing it to cancel each other out. He added that this is just a theory that requires many steps. The demon asked how John managed to do this. The guy replied that he was simply putting theory into practice. The monster asked in bewilderment how a man could do such a thing. In a rage, the demon attacked again, screaming about human weakness. John, confident in his abilities, said that he had seen something similar. With fury in his eyes, he attacked the heavenly demon with his sword. The sword was used without chanting to suppress the demon's power. John decided to put all the magic he could into the blow. The demon's arms were torn off, but he continued to deny defeat. The monster insisted that human magic was too weak. John agreed that most people thought so, but his body is special. It does not consume magic when used. Therefore, he could endlessly pour power into his attacks. The demon, in shock, tried to convince himself that this was impossible. Seeing John's blue magic, the monster realized that he had lost. John received a notification about a level increase. Finally, the guy noted that the demon was stronger, but it wasn't about magic. After defeating the boss, John headed to Michael. The boy received a serious chest wound with severe bleeding. In addition to physical injuries, the magical organ was damaged. John realized that delay could lead to serious consequences. Using magic, he began to connect the torn organs and stop the bleeding. First, I reduced the power of the fireball to stop the bleeding. Then he gave Michael a restoration potion to enhance regeneration. All that remained was to bandage the magical organs. After completing the treatment, John thought that Michael would be okay, but Sarah's voice interrupted his thoughts. She was amazed how the boy with a fatal wound was healed in an instant. Seeing her, John asked why Sarah was here. The girl replied that she was worried about him, assuming that he had defeated the enemies on the way. The guy, closing his eyes, called her brave in a calm voice. Then he asked to keep an eye on the approaching demons. Sarah hurried off to complete the task, promising that he could rely on her. As John approached Frank, he discovered that he had stopped breathing. Closing his eyes, the guy said that he regretted that he had not killed this man. Looking at the rest of the Red Dragon, he noticed that they were running low on magic. But it wasn't so bad, because the rest would do them good. As John walked forward, Sarah asked where he was going. He replied that he had to destroy the core of the dungeon. When asked about the dungeon boss, the guy calmly said that he had already defeated him. When Sarah pointed out that he had no choice, John asked what she meant. The girl replied that she was looking forward to his future exploits. The guy thought, not understanding, because he had already said that he would not become famous. But it didn't matter, because now they needed to destroy the core. Approaching the core, John did not immediately understand what it was. At that moment, the system informed him of a new item. Deciding to check it later, he first focused on destroying the core. People outside screamed that the dungeon core had been destroyed and the gates were closing. They couldn't believe that the Red Dragon had taken over this dungeon. The appearance of John, who was not a member of the Red Dragon, left everyone baffled. In a calm voice, he said that all the guild members were exhausted and needed treatment. Afterwards, Mike and the others were taken to the hospital and survived. However, the guy was unable to capture the crystal mine, which was his goal. Breaking the rules of the dungeon led to new problems. Sarah thought that they couldn't be blamed, since they saved the guild. She countered that if other adventurers invaded for rescue, it could lead to secondary damage. Sarah noted that boys should sympathize with girls in such situations. She handed the guy the phone and asked him to look at this. Looking at his phone, John saw how shocked everyone was by his action. Sarah added that he was lucky his name was not made public. Asked how he felt, John replied that he didn't care. Suddenly the door opened and a silhouette greeted them, noticing how long it had been since they had seen each other. John and Sarah greeted him back, calling the gentleman by name. The man was glad that they remembered him and expressed a desire to talk. John replied that he was also looking forward to talking. The man thought about how quickly the boy had risen in class. He decided that he would definitely find out what John was really hiding. The guy was thinking that the gentleman needed to be convinced of his mediocrity. However, John was already in the spotlight. He understood that if his abilities were revealed, his reputation would rise even higher. John realized that if this happened, his sister would not be able to live as before. The likelihood that she would be harassed also increased. The man asked how they got into the dungeon, since they weren't on camera. The man insisted that the only way to enter the dungeon was through the gate, and demanded to know how John had managed to do this. The guy replied that he used his friend's skill, which allowed him to become invisible. When the man asked if this friend was an adventurer, John calmly replied that he was not. Since the rules of the dungeon only applied to adventurers, they could escape punishment by claiming that an outsider had helped them. Hearing this, the man asked why they went into the dungeon. Sarah started to tell, and John thought that the girl could easily give them away, but she understood what he was trying to achieve. As a former idol, Sarah has proven to be a skilled liar. After the story, the man stood up from his chair and thanked for his time. John bowed and apologized for breaking the dungeon rules. The man smiled and awkwardly noted that they had a noble goal. As a representative of the guild, he couldn't blame them for their bravery. However, if they break the rules, they will be punished. Sarah replied with a smile that new challenges were good. John also thanked the gentleman with a slight grin. He added that this is all he can do to thank them for their time. As they parted, the man reflected that he had been unable to find evidence of John's strength. But the guy was clearly hiding something and the man was worried about what exactly. Looking out the window, he noted with a smile that John was a new star who had suddenly appeared. He also added that the number of aspiring adventurers who fail will grow. Outside, Sarah, tired, praised the guy for his excellent work. When she picked up her phone, she saw a lot of comments and became upset. John explained that he had mixed feelings about not being able to save one person. Sarah replied that death was the main factor in their work, and he had to come to terms with it. John said he understood this, but was worried about Michael's feelings. The girl looking down agreed with him. Suddenly, she asked the guy to turn to her. When he turned around, the girl began to stroke his head, telling him that he had tried well. John asked her, confused, what she was doing. Sarah remarked that her petting should make him happy. John closed his eyes and agreed that maybe she was right. Sarah waved her hand, saying that she was going home, and the guy offered to give her a ride. The girl replied that as a high-class adventurer, she could get there herself. Later, John returned home and told his sister about this. Kitty greeted her brother with a smile and said that dinner was ready. John smiled and agreed to have dinner. The sphere flew up to the guy and was surprised that he returned safe and sound. She started asking how the task went. John replied that he hadn't checked yet, and they decided to do it now. Seeing that the task was completed, they were glad that the boy was now safe. The sphere began to praise him for successfully completed tasks. Kitty said that there were many happy events today, and she had prepared a sumptuous dinner in honor of her brother. Sphere noticed that she helped prepare all the dishes with her. Kitty urged everyone to hurry so that the food wouldn't get cold. Everyone was already sitting at the table and wishing each other bon appetit. John, looking out the window, thought about the dungeon. He didn't think anyone would be able to invade him since the request was sent specifically to him. This made him wonder who could have done this. John noted that he has enough skill points, but he can't get more magic at the end of the tree. This meant that he would not be able to achieve the skills he had in his past life. Then the sphere said that the boy was able to save his sister, and that was enough. Seeing her, John was surprised, not understanding where she suddenly appeared from. The fairy began to explain that the reason they couldn't progress further in the skill tree was because he hadn't upgraded his skills. Hearing this, John decided to ask again what it meant. The sphere began to say that the legacy he left behind in his past life was too great. In other words, his forbidden servant will be released step by step. John wondered when he first met the faith. It added the ability to exchange items, saying it was an upgrade or something. The guy realized that if there are additional skill points, they can be updated again. Sphere clarified that last time was the first update, and now an item will be needed for the next one. John couldn't understand this system at all. And then the fairy began to say that these problems needed to be told to the guy from the past life. Then, closing his eyes, John began to ask for forgiveness. Because if you think about it, he had set all this up. The sphere said that you can get a rare item in the dungeon. Then John remembered the item he had recently received. and the fairy immediately began telling the boy to give her the item. After seeing it, she was convinced that it was indeed the right item and offered to update it right away. After the update, the sphere started saying that everything was now perfect. At this point, John said that obviously the upgrade couldn't be done with the powers of the sphere alone. Then, turning to him, they began to read together the information that the system gave out. The system was asking for permission to begin liberation tests, which surprised them greatly. The sphere said that it knew nothing about it at all, which left John even more confused. However, the guy understood that this was a very dangerous message. The system was created in his past life, so the guy's feelings were correct. The fairy also began to say that nothing good would come of all this, but John said that he did not think so. He understood perfectly well that they should not choose dangerous paths. However, it was in his blood, just like a magician. John decided that if he chose this path, there was a chance that he could surpass his past life self. Sphere said with only a little awkwardness that she was starting to talk like a guy. And immediately after a positive answer to the system's question, the guy found himself in an incomprehensible place. The sphere began to suggest that this was John's spirit world from a past life. Then, looking closely, the guy realized that it really looked a lot like him. At that moment, out of nowhere, a huge monster flew towards him. Seeing it, the sphere began to say that it knew what it was. Besides the ability upgrade and the forbidden limiter, the liberation trials have another meaning. This demon that has arrived now is the same demon that John followed in his past life. It was a test of the minister's release, like a challenge to the beast. John said he didn't remember the details, but if this was a test, then he had to fight and win. Then the sphere said that, although the monster was still small in stature, one should not lose vigilance. Knowing that he was facing a formidable opponent, John also decided that they could handle it. And so the fight began. The monster rushed to attack, and John deftly dodged. He understood that everything had to be set up by him in his past life, and all this was designed to surpass the abilities of his past life. That's why John had to take on all these feelings himself. The guy finally realized that now the real tests were beginning. While fighting the monster, he realized that the only effective attack was the Heavenly Demon Sword. To use this attack, you need to cast a lot of magic spells, and this is a lot of physical strain on the body. In order to ensure a reliable hit, the boy had to perfectly exploit the Holy Dragon's weakness. At that moment, the sphere loudly warned John about the approaching monster. As soon as the new attack began, the fairy began to ask what it was. John explained that it was a holy attack, which was one of the monster's signature abilities. The sphere noticed that it was impossible to avoid all the rays, and began to advise the guy not to rush with explanations. John agreed, but added that it was a unique attack that required a special approach. He dodged the first blow, and the sphere praised him for it. Holy Rain has the ability to track magical reactions. That's why John left a magical mark on the ground before dodging. If you do this quickly and repeatedly, you can avoid all the rays of the Holy Rain. In addition, John knew that after each shot, the monster had a small pause, which could be used as a weakness to win. After winning the battle, the sphere happily reported that he had managed to defeat the monster. John noticed that his opponent knew his abilities and capabilities very well. Now John could easily summon this monster in case of danger. After defeating him, the guy immediately decided to return home. At this point, the sphere reported that John had released the skill tree and suggested checking it out. Seeing that the tree had expanded, he was very surprised. He saw new magical abilities he could gain with extra skill points. The sphere asked what good magic he had found. John replied that the test had been very fruitful and that he now had more opportunities. The next day, the guy decided to visit Michael, who still had not regained consciousness. John began to wonder if the boy had really been on the verge of death. At that moment, the man they had spoken to earlier approached him and said that he had been waiting for him. John turned and asked why the gentleman was there. The man said with a smile that he wanted to discuss something and asked to go with him. When John followed him, the man thanked him for his quick agreement. Hearing this, the guy asked what he needed to do. The man explained that they wanted to measure John's abilities as a talentless person. However, this cannot be done with the help of devices, so they want him to have a training battle with a certain person. When they arrived, John asked what this place was. The man explained that this was a special room for heavy loads. John realized that the man wanted to test him, since he had already passed the test for promotion to a high level. After putting all the facts together, John decided that this was probably a test for promotion to the super high class. At that moment, a guy came out to them and apologized for the wait. Seeing him, John became wary, recognizing this man. He was surprised and said mockingly that it was John who had conquered the crystal mine. John replied that it was rude to consider him as an opponent and to meet him after so many years. Simon replied that he was looking forward to it even more. He was glad that his opponent would be John, and he would be able to show seriousness. John noticed that the difference in ability between high and super high class was huge. Simon countered that this was not the case, especially in his case. John thought that he was probably overestimating him, so instead of being serious, he decided to go all out. Simon stated that he was a super high-class adventurer and could not lose. Hearing this, John said with a grin that he knew what he was doing. At this moment, the man was watching the screens carefully. He thought they were just seeing how far John could go against one of the 9 adventurers. He knew it wasn't a given, but he decided the match had to start. Simon thought that if John won, he would immediately be promoted to a super high-class adventurer. So he decided to see how things would develop first. Simon began his attack by asking if John could afford that much. John dodged the attack, thinking it was out of his league. However, he understood that he could handle this fight. After repelling the attack, Simon said that he would then increase his power. John noticed that his opponent still had a lot of strength, which would sooner or later run out. Simon replied that John would win if he acted on instinct. Therefore, when starting a new attack, he suggested moving to close combat. At that moment, John remembered that thanks to the expanded skill tree, he now had a second level of demon ability. This level allows you to analyze and obtain information about visible objects. So John easily analyzed all of Simon's movements and decided to continue in the same spirit. He also realized that if he didn't have the homing effect, then this fire could be avoided. John realized that he had improved his skills since taking the high-level exam. The man watching the screen was amazed, realizing that John was hiding his abilities. He mused that even if they were still in the observation stage, he was still frightened by a strange feeling. Simon thought that a super high-class fighter should be the best, but with John, he didn't feel that at all. He felt uneasy, as if he were dealing with some unimaginable creature. Simon also realized that John was the man who conquered the crystal mine, and the one he once admired. Their fight continued, and their swords clashed side by side. At that moment, it dawned on John. He thought it was the second skill. The guy knew perfectly well that there should be one skill per person. Simon said with a grin that, as expected from John, things would not be easy. The guy never thought he would have to give it his all. Flying to the side, John began to get to his feet. After he stood up, he said that with these 2 skills, there was no gap between them. Hearing this, Simon only suggested starting a real fight. The guy thought that John's strength was inexplicable, because with only talent, he couldn't be that good. That's why Simon decided he would have to wait to find out all the guy's secrets. And then, stretching out his hand for the next attack, he resolutely thought that he only needed victory. After he started the attack, John started seeing things from another world. One of them was once his thing from a past life. John realized that this thing here seemed to be a relic. Simon, taking this item, began to say that he wanted a fair duel, and therefore to explain what kind of mythical sword it was. The guy said that this sword, when combined with skills, grows exponentially. After that, Simon also said to make John proud. Until now, only the super high class had used this sword. In other words, these are only those who were the best of the best. After the attack began, John immediately noticed the speed of the guy's movements. The man was still amazed that this now looked like a super high-class fight. He understood that John should be promoted to this class. And all because the sword, which gets heavier with each blow and enhances fire magic, is perfect for him. John reasoned that this sword was as good as the one in the previous world. And he was also angry that all this was causing a lot of trouble. After John dodged the attack, Simon immediately appeared from behind and began to say that he would not let him leave just like that. After these words, the guys were thrown back with all their might. Simon began to say that he had surpassed all his previous enemies. He also added that, no matter how much he wanted to, he would have to show one thing. Hearing this, John realized that he would have to fight seriously. With the magic he gained from upgrading the forbidden limit, he should be able to win. At that moment, Simon noticed a tremor in his hands and did not understand why he was nervous. At that moment, he noticed John rise to his feet and did not understand what had happened. John had absolutely no idea what his opponent was planning. At that moment, all the surveillance cameras in the room suddenly broke, causing the man to panic. He realized that he no longer knew what would happen next. At this point, John began to tell his opponent that he would show him his real punch. However, he doesn't want anyone to know how good he really is. Hearing this, his opponent asked why John did not want this. John explained that he didn't want to become too famous and cause problems for his sister. His opponent took these words with understanding and smiled slightly, but he also added that he believed John thought he had already won. With fury in his eyes, Simon decided to show John his strongest blow. They began to attack each other again, deciding to give it their all. John knew perfectly well that Simon's blow would be strong for anyone, but he was only determined to win, and therefore was ready for anything. And in the blink of an eye, Simon was already lying on the ground, not understanding what had happened. John confidently declared that he had apparently won. Simon asked, confused, why the boy hid such strength. He replied that he didn't want to hide it, he just became stronger. Simon realized that such a John was not his rival at all. At that moment, a man burst into the room and began asking what had happened. He was surprised that the ceiling was broken, because they used building materials with a special coating. John and Simon exchanged glances. Simon nodded to John, showing that he understood what was expected of him. John explained to the man that during their fight, their mutual attacks hit the ceiling, which is why it broke. He also clarified that the damage was mostly caused by Simon's attack and apologized. The man said that everything was fine then and asked what to do with the game. Simon looked down and said it was still unclear. The man thought that if the ceiling was destroyed, the area around the facility might be at risk, and therefore they could not continue. However, he said that they have a reasonable assessment of their abilities, so there will be no problems. He added that he didn't think he and John would fight on equal terms. Simon thought that they had not fought on equal terms, since he had actually lost. At this point, John asked why he was being tested. The man replied that the guild should know the abilities of high-ranking adventurers. He also said that there were doubts about his abilities, so he was given this opportunity. Simon said that, simply put, it was a test to get promoted to the super high class. John merely replied that he suspected it was so. At this point, the man asked why the boy was disappointed, since he had passed the test. He was very happy that the 10th super high class adventurer had appeared. Suddenly, John asked if he could refuse the promotion to this level. He explained that he decided that he had more advantages in remaining a high-class adventurer than being promoted to a super high class. He also said that he doesn't want to stand out too much for personal reasons. The man could not believe these words and looked down. However, the guild couldn't force him to get promoted, and so if he wanted to stay at his level, that would be it. However, according to the guild's internal information, he had many merits, so a super high rank was guaranteed for the guy. John, hearing this, said that until it leaked out, he would not ask for it. Then the man thanked him and asked if the guy was sure of his words. He added that it was a great honor to be promoted to the super high class, and the guy would certainly make history. John only said that he was confident, despite all this, and refused. As Simon left the room, he looked after him and thought that the guy was a very strange person. When they came out, the boy said that it was very much like old John, and his actions had not changed. And then he added with a smile that the guy himself hadn't changed at all. Hearing this, John said that despite this, Simon had changed significantly and had become unattainable. Then the guy replied that John had been able to achieve much greater heights than he had. They were both glad to meet each other again and decided to talk next time. Simon also added that he would not tell anyone about the match, so John should not worry. The boy understood that John was determined not to become famous for the sake of his sister. However, in a world where you need to search or adventure, the guy's strength cannot be hidden. He saved his sister and prevented a life-threatening situation. John understood that in the future, he did not need to be an adventurer. However, he cannot immediately stop being one, because he has become more attached to people than he expected. For their sake, the guy had to continue being an adventurer. Suddenly, a guy came up to John and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, which surprised him. The guy continued to say that he didn't expect to meet John here, and he smiled. Confused, John also replied that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Then a guy named Felix said that John took care of him when he was the Minotaur. Hub said he showed himself to be quite pathetic. John had a bad first impression of them right away, although they turned out to be good people. At that moment, Felix approached him and said that he would make a special effort to teach him to live the smart life of an adventurer. Then John replied that since this guy was here, he would probably agree to this training. At that moment, an announcement began that demons had come out of the gate and that the adventure hotel nearby needed to stop them immediately. Felix immediately said that the announcement came just in time and he should definitely join. Each adventuring party receives a reward for participating in the battle. So it was one of the smartest ways to make money. After all these words, Felix said that they needed to hit the road, since John understood everything. The guy thought that fortunately, the demons were not that strong, and the fight would soon end. When they arrived, Felix also pointed out that they were lucky that there were so many people here. John asked why it was good that there were so many people here. Felix replied that it was easier to kill demons this way, although the number of demons killed by one person also affected the reward. However, he added that the reward for participation is greater than for defeat. Hub said it was a reasonable amount considering the work involved was life-threatening. John thought that adventurers had many different ways, and such conversations could be interesting. At that moment, Felix, looking confidently forward, said that the moment of truth had arrived. The demons appeared and began to run furiously towards the people. Jan started to say that they looked quite cruel and most likely belonged to almost the high class. Felix, hearing this, realized that this time it would be more difficult. The four of them would have to deal with one of them. Telling John that he was very confident in his sword skills and that he couldn't wait to see him in action, Felix entered the fight. John simply said that he would do his best and looked ahead with excitement. The high-class license was originally just a qualification to be summoned to the crystal mines. They cleared the danger zone in a couple of minutes. Jan started saying that they were in danger. At this moment, John helped Felix and deflected the monster's attack. The guy just praised the newcomer and the fight continued. Felix thanked John again for his help and said that he could handle the rest himself. Flying under the monster, Felix decided to discover its weak point. At this point, Jan continued to fan the fire. After finding the weak point, Felix hit it, and Hub started saying that he had succeeded. At that moment they saw that Felix had the demon pinned down, and Ian thought that he should have delayed the shot a little. Then John helped Felix again and asked if everything was okay. After this, Felix said that the guys should keep a closer eye on him and asked Jan to make sure that he was up to his job as a tank. Then Hub said that, in any case, they had killed one of the demons, and now they could simply watch the fight in safety. John, listening to their conversations, thought that since the demons were not very strong, everything should end well. The other adventurers breathed a sigh of relief after a while, as they were almost done fighting. At that moment, a mutant appeared behind them, which scared them very much. Everyone thought that the monsters were gone, but at that very moment a mutant appeared who decided to ruin everything. Felix, seeing the Diamond Wolf, realized that they would not be able to deal with a high-class demon. Everyone started screaming in fear that it was time for them to run away. John thought that if they ran away now, not only the adventurers would suffer, but ordinary people as well. The guy realized that although his actions would be noticeable, it would be more correct this way. At that moment, a girl appeared out of nowhere and attacked the mutant. Everyone was surprised that her powers surpassed those of a god. Felix, on the contrary, looked with displeasure and said that everything was happening as usual. Hearing this, John asked if the guy knew this girl. He explained that this was the super high-class adventurer Karen. Hearing this, John realized that this was one of those people Simon was. Suddenly, he noticed her looking at him and asked why she was looking at him like that. Then the girl began to move away, which greatly confused the guy, because he could not understand what this meant. The guys at that moment were happy that thanks to the appearance of the mutant, the reward for participation had doubled. It was precisely because the mutant was killed instantly that they were very lucky. John, however, understood that thanks to the forbidden restriction, he no longer had to worry about money. At this point, Felix asked the new guy if he wanted to have a drink with them. John thanked the guys and said that this time he would refuse, because his sister was waiting for him at home. And then the guy also explained that he lives with his younger sister and has to cook dinner for her. Everyone unanimously praised the guy and said that he was a good brother. John, once again thanking the guys, thought that they were, after all, surprisingly good people. Right before entering the apartment, John felt a considerable magical power in the house, comparable to a super high class. Feeling this, the guy realized that she had guests and assumed that it was Simon. Opening the door, his little sister met him and, greeting her brother, said that he had guests. When John asked if it was Simon, the girl replied that it was not. That same Karen appeared in front of him and apologized for disturbing him. John realized that this was the same adventuress they had met. Kitty decided to warn her brother that he had a lot of pretty girlfriends, but this was not a very good idea. John started saying that his sister had gotten it all wrong and he had never met her before. Hearing this, the girl looked at Karen in surprise and asked if it was true. Then the girl apologized and said that she lied because she wanted to talk to the guy. Then the little sister only said that her brother was truly irresistible. After these words, John came closer to his sister and said that he needed to talk to the girl alone, and asked his sister to go into another room. Kitty, dissatisfied, left and slammed the door behind her so loudly that the noise echoed throughout the entire apartment. John began asking Karen how she knew where he lived. He understood perfectly well that guilds do not give out personal information so easily. Then Karen replied that she was curious because he was the only one who dared to confront the Diamond Wolf. So she checked the adventurer database, and seeing that the guy was not weak, she became interested. After her story, John asked again if that was the only reason she came to him. John realized that if he thought about it, there were many suspicious points in his biography. At that moment, without any embarrassment, Karen asked who he really was. John replied that he was simply a high-ranking adventurer. Karen noted that if he had power, then he should set a good example for others. Hearing this, the guy thought that the girl clearly had a heightened sense of justice. However, he decided to simply agree and say that next time he would do the same. After these words, Karen opened the door and once again apologized for disturbing her. When the girl left, Kitty flew up to John and asked what the hell that was. Kitty added that this girl seemed very strange to her. At this moment, John noticed that there was something under the chair and decided to look. His sister got ahead of him and saw that it was a guild card, and realized that she had never seen such a color. John immediately realized that Karen had dropped the card and decided to go and give it to her. When he went outside, he realized that the girl was already far away, and he was surprised how she managed to leave in such a short time. Using his power, the guy moved to Karen and saw that she was in some alley. He approached her and said that she had forgotten her guild card, and asked her not to lose such valuable things again. At that moment, a man came out from around the corner and asked why the guy was bothering people. John then turned to Karen and asked if he had disturbed them, to which she shook her head. The man started shouting and saying that they were going to tie each other up. Then John angrily asked why this had to happen. The man with an irritated voice began to say that he needed to prove his strength in order to advance to the super high class. Karen noticed that there are many selfish adventurers who are overly confident in their abilities. Then the man became even more angry and, taking out his weapon, began to say that they should test his pride. Then John, with a little awkwardness, told the man to calm down. It wasn't worth it. The man began to shout with even greater rage, demanding that the boy get out of the way. John replied that he could not do this because blood was flowing from his head. The man jumped back from the blow and flew past the guy. At that moment, Karen attacked him with all her might. Turning to him, she said with a blank look, "You've been outplayed." There was no emotion on her face as she asked the man if he knew what selfishness was, then added that she advised him to leave. As he ran away, he shouted that he would remember them and take revenge someday. After this, Karen approached John and said that he was clearly not an ordinary person. The girl explained that his evasive maneuver was at too high a level. All his reflexes and kinetic vision were not up to the level he had set himself. Karen noted that this was a glimpse of a skill that could not be acquired by skill alone. John thought about it. The girl seemed to guess about his abilities. She had excellent analytical skills. The guy replied in a calm voice that she was overestimating him. Hearing this, Karen took out her sword and declared that she wanted to fight him. John, standing opposite her, refused. At this moment, the sword was already at the guy's throat. But this did not make him move. The girl asked in surprise why he wasn't moving. Then John apologized and said that everything happened so fast that he couldn't move. As Karen helped him up, she realized she had made a mistake. She reasoned that even if the guy didn't have time to react, he should have at least been upset. The girl understood that his calmness was clearly abnormal. At this point, John started saying that he wasn't as cool as she thought he was. Turning around, he said that he thought they were finished, and it was time for him to go home. Then Karen asked how he managed to catch up with her so quickly. John calmly replied that speed was all he had, and that was how he had reached such a high level. The girl calmly replied that he was clearly not the only one. When their eyes met, she added that she was also very fast. John said he was honored because he didn't think he would be praised by a super high-class adventurer. And then he said he had to go make dinner and apologized. Karen, narrowing her eyes, replied that they would see each other soon. John started to walk away and said goodbye to the girl while she continued to stand in place. The guy didn't realize that they had attracted the attention of an unpleasant character. After some time, he returned home and told his sister about this. The apartment smelled of meat and potatoes, which surprised the guy. At that moment, Kitty came out to him and said that dinner would soon be ready, and that today she would cook instead of her busy brother. John agreed with a smile and thanked his little sister. At that moment, the sphere flew up to the guy and noticed that he looked very happy. The guy replied that his little sister cooks for him, and he can't be unhappy. Then the sphere called him a weakling, and said that he stubbornly refused to admit it. At this point, Kitty interrupted their conversation, asking them to hurry up before the food got cold. John noticed that the sphere had already connected to the network. The fairy began to say that recently the number of gates has been rapidly increasing. John realized that this was why the number of demons emerging from the gate had increased. Sphere noticed that the more gates there are, the more places John can train. And that's a good trend. The guy advised his sister not to live near the gate. After all, you never know when you might be attacked. Then the little sister replied that at her age, killing monsters was easy as pie, and smiled. John sternly told the girl not to even think about fighting. With a little sadness, the little girl replied that she understood him, although she was offended by her brother. She insisted that she was actually quite strong. John replied with a smile that, of course, she was not weak because she was his sister. While they were laughing and discussing this, the sphere sat and stared at them. She realized that John seemed to have overlooked one thing, but she immediately thought that it was most likely for the good of his sister. A week after the attack on the crystal mine, John and his friends decided to visit Michael. By this time, he had already come to his senses, and they could talk calmly. When Michael heard about Frank's death, his face darkened with sadness for a moment. However, the boy soon forced himself to smile so as not to show his disappointment. John realized that Michael was not going to blame himself for Frank's death, although if the guy had been a little stronger, he could have protected him. After the appointment, John walked with his little sister and said that he thought Michael would be discharged soon. This made the girl very happy, after which she asked if her brother was going to continue being an adventurer. Then John replied that he couldn't give it up yet, because he needed to strengthen the clan members. Kitty started screaming that her brother had promised her to leave because of the adventurers. Hearing this, John said that they just needed to wait a little, because if the clan members became stronger, he could quietly leave this matter. John also said that having become stronger, he was able to save his beloved sister. Kitty heard all this and said that now everything was clear to her, after which the guy asked not to tell the girls about it. After this, John also said that if she kept quiet, the guy would buy her everything she wanted. At this time, two guys found a gate that was not under the control of the Adventurers Guild. They realized that as long as no one else tried, they could keep all the items for themselves. They talked about how lucky they were and how great their workday had been. The boys reasoned that they couldn't know what might be in the dungeon, but they could say with certainty that they shouldn't try to kill the bosses. Running straight to the gate, they shouted that this was a great gold mine. When they entered the dungeon, They realized that it was of low rank and that they would not earn anything here. The guys decided that it would be better to report this to the guild and receive a reward. When they turned around to go back, a black silhouette appeared behind them. Wandering a little further, it became obvious that something terrible was lurking in this seemingly harmless dungeon. After some time, the girl, looking at her tablet, said that in their days a lot of dungeons appear. All the news was saying that these dungeons were low-ranking dungeons. The girl realized that she could now easily recommend him when registering as an adventurer. At this time, Catherine was in a middle-class dungeon called the Snake Cave. She attacked monsters with arrows laced with paralyzing poison. After another attack, the snake was defeated, and the girl said that fighting with them was even a little boring. At that moment, Jessica shouted at her that she was very good, and then asked her to leave the rest to her. Having trained in magic, Jessica was able to calmly summon a fireball that completely burned the snake. The girls began to support each other and say that they both deserved attention. At that moment, John approached them and said that he didn't expect that the two of them would be able to conquer a mid-level dungeon on their own. Jessica said it was all thanks to the special training from the guy, and now they feel much stronger. Then they moved back and thought that something was wrong in the office. In front of them stood John, to whom the gentleman was addressing himself. The guy sat down and asked him what kind of request awaited him this time. The man handed over an envelope and said that it was a request to search the dungeon. While taking out the papers, he also asked if John could look at these documents. The man also clarified that it was a popular dungeon among adventurers in their day. He began to explain that this difficulty level was slightly below average, but it was originally a low-rank dungeon. John was very surprised and asked what happened, why the rank rose so quickly, to which the man replied that this dungeon was very strange. He said that the more you try, the more you discover, and no one has found the dungeon boss or the core yet. John thought that the dungeon in question was regenerating automatically. And then the man added that the guild couldn't leave the dungeon unattended without being able to indicate the exact level of danger it was at. That's why they would like to ask a high-ranking adventurer to conduct research. When the man said that they would be able to determine the danger level if they found the boss and the core, John asked why they couldn't just destroy them once they found them. The man then began to explain that there were many resources in the dungeon, and so they would like to leave them undamaged if possible. While sipping his tea, John took in all the information and then said that he would fulfill their request. Then the man looked happily at the guy and began to thank him warmly. The man said he would be grateful if the boy could complete the research by the end of this month. As he was leaving, the guy realized that he could have easily refused. However, he knew that he owed some debt to his master. John also realized that compared to his past life, he had become quite soft. Suddenly, Karen appeared next to him and started calling the guy. Seeing her, John panicked and started asking what the girl was doing there. At this time, the people standing nearby saw their dialogue and began to be surprised that they were talking. These looks gave John a rather bad feeling. At this moment, Karen, also looking at the guy, said that she saw him in the guild and decided to chat. Then the people around were even more surprised, because they couldn't believe that the famous adventurer was talking to some unknown guy. Because of these looks, the guy decided to change places with Karen first. He never imagined that there would be anything more complicated than a request for an investigation. Sometime later, they were sitting in the same establishment, and John asked what happened in the end. Then Karen asked if the guy knew about a dungeon called the Enchanted Forest. John replied that he had heard that this dungeon was currently at the peak of popularity. Karen then said that it seemed that none of the information received from the adventurers was true. There were many different demons whose locations were even completely random. After this story, the girl asked the guy if it seemed strange. John replied that it was indeed strange, but the danger level of the dungeon was almost average. Then Karen said that the damage from this dungeon already exceeded this level, which surprised the guy. Of the adventurers who returned from the dungeon, 15 suffered from mental disorders. Katrina noted that 2 months after the discovery of the dungeon, this is a very large number. John then asked if the dungeon could be closed so that no more people would be hurt. Then Catherine said that it was impossible. They still don't know what happened to those who returned to the dungeon. John said that he understood everything, but asked how the girl knew all this information. The girl replied that her father is a researcher and receives information from various sources. After this, Karen revealed that after all she had heard, she would like to ask John for a favor. John immediately thought that he would have to fulfill another request, and asked what was the matter. Then she said that she wanted them to unite and conquer the Enchanted Forest. John closed his eyes, thinking that he knew it. He had been asked to explore this dungeon, so it was obvious. After that, he apologized for having too much to do lately and not being able to create a group. Karen said without further ado that it was sad, but she understood. Then John said he was really sorry and asked if she could suggest the idea to someone else. After that, the girl put the money on the table and said that if nothing worked out, it was time for her to go. As she left, she added that she would leave the money for the tea on the table. Watching the girl, John knew that he would be fine because he was used to fighting alone. However, because of his words, He felt a not very pleasant feeling in his head. In the evening, the guy was already at home and asked his sister if she liked the dinner he had prepared. The girl replied that her brother always cooks better, and added that the dinner was very tasty. While washing the dishes, John was pleased to hear that the girl liked it. At this point, Kitty noticed that something was wrong and asked her brother if everything was okay. John replied that something was wrong with his mood, when suddenly a sphere flew towards him. She began to tell Kitty that John had never looked so sad. Then the little sister flew up to her brother and said that she thought the guy looked bad. Then John thanked the girl for taking care of him. Although in reality, he thought that his condition had worsened due to Karen's refusal. He was used to making difficult decisions, but lately, it had not been easy for him. After these words, John got dressed and said that he needed to go for a walk. The guy understood that he simply wanted to protect Karen from danger and therefore went alone. John was determined that if so many people had already died there, he would destroy the core of the dungeon. As he walked, thinking about Karen's consent, he suddenly heard screams. The man called for help from high-ranking adventurers. John calmly walked up to him and asked what was going on. He began to tell that a high-class adventurer was fighting in the dungeon to save people. Hearing this, John realized that the girl had already taken on this dungeon. He calmly said that he would help, since he himself was a high-class adventurer. The man started shouting that John couldn't handle it alone, because the dungeon was truly terrible. He added that the girl, although a super adventurer, only gives them time to escape from the boss. John was shocked that a mid-level dungeon could be so dangerous. The man continued to shout that everything in this dungeon was an illusion. He said it was one of the scariest places, and you could tell from his face how worried he was. After these words, John rushed to the girl and mentally asked her for forgiveness. He thought that he would soon come to her aid, and she only needed to wait a little. Entering the dungeon, John immediately felt a high concentration of magic. He realized that this dungeon couldn't be of average level. He also felt that Karen's magic was becoming weaker. While he was thinking that he needed to hurry, two silhouettes appeared behind him. At that very moment, a monster attacked him, opening its mouth wide. John quickly dealt with the monster, saying that he did not have time to deal with such creatures. After that, he ran again, shouting to Karen that he would come soon. At this time, the girl thought that the enchanted forest was safer than she assumed. But given the number of casualties, the atmosphere was very tense. Suddenly, she heard the cries of adventurers from afar, and heading towards them, hoped to make it in time. The guy sat there, not understanding what kind of monster was in front of him, because he had destroyed 3 of them in one fell swoop. The demon had a dialogue with the guy, explaining that the dungeon was a scary place, and if people came here unprepared, they would regret it. Then, preparing for a new attack, he said that the boy's role in this was over. Suddenly, Karen stepped between the demon and the adventurer, deflecting the attack. Then the monster thoughtfully said that the girl was way ahead of schedule. Karen ordered the guy to take the wounded and run, and she would deal with the monster. The demon, starting a new attack, asked the guy if he was thinking of letting him go. The girl deflected the blow again, thinking that the people were now safe. The demon noted that the girl had good speed and even had a chance to escape from him. Karen remained silent, but in her head she thought that the smart demon would be a problem if she fought alone. However, it didn't matter to her, because if someone was in trouble, she considered it her duty to save them. Karen knew that these actions were her duty, since she had such power. The demon began to say that he felt very sorry for the girl, because today was her last day. Karen didn't understand what he was getting at, because the fight hadn't started yet. And then the demon replied that she had fallen into his trap. The girl confidently said that she didn't think so, and prepared for battle. At the same second, she rushed at the monster with speed, but he easily dodged the attack. Upon landing, Karen realized that something was wrong. She was finding it hard to breathe. Then the demon said that this place was contaminated with magical gas that weakened people. The girl, attacking the monster again, shouted at him not to relax until he defeated her. Smiling, the demon said in a calm voice that it was unfortunate. His body became much stronger thanks to the magic it absorbed from the adventurers. Then, falling to her knees, Karen realized that she alone could not defeat the monster. The girl understood that she should run, but she could not rise from her knees. At that moment, the demon grabbed her head and began to absorb Karen's energy. Absorbing it, the monster said with a grin that now he would have some of her magic. He took away all her strength, and the girl seemed to turn into an empty vessel. At that moment, a bright light caused the demon to be distracted. He looked like a huge flame. The demon turned and began to ask who was standing there. As the fire began to dissipate, everything became immediately obvious. John practically came out of the fire and began to blame himself for being late. After that, the guy raised his hand and confidently told Karen that he would save her. John realized that a hallucinogenic spell had been cast on the entire dungeon, and that the entire space was contaminated with a magical gas that had a relaxing effect. The boy realized that he needed to master magic to destroy the monster. After that, he immediately began to use the power of the Red Lotus Fireball. At this moment, the demon was surprised that the guy could see him, because he himself had never seen anything like this before. A duel ensued between them, and the guy tried to dodge all attacks. Approaching the demon, John attacked it with such force that Karen flew out of the monster's hands. The guy immediately caught the flying girl so that she wouldn't fall to the ground. Laying her down next to a fallen tree, John asked if Karen was okay. The girl replied that she was fine, but she had no strength at all. John then explained that the demon was sucking the magic out of her body, and until it was restored, she would not be able to move. After that, looking at the demon, the guy said that he would take care of the rest, and the girl needed to rest. Then Karen, scared, began to say that the guy could not defeat the demon alone. Then John said that he couldn't leave such a good person like Karen, and he added that he was simply doing his duty as an adventurer and was strong enough to defeat the monster. At that moment, the demon flew up above the ground and, laughing, told the guy that he was talking funny. However, unfortunately, the monster was not strong for this, and asked the adventurers if they knew about the existence of mutants. The demon began to explain that demons rarely mutate and evolve into a new race. The boss added that he had come up with a way to provoke their mutation. The monster stated that it could do this by taking human magic and storing it in their bodies. Pointing at Karen, he said that her magical power had fulfilled the necessary conditions. This frightened the girl greatly, and fear was clearly visible in her eyes. John began to reason that it was now clear that this was all a mutation. Due to Karen's power, the mutation became much more powerful than before. Seeing the monster seemingly being reborn, Karen couldn't believe her eyes. He began to say that he understood perfectly well that he had surpassed what adventurers call the super high class. Then John said that people have always defied common sense. The demon, spinning to attack, only said that he would wait with impatience. At that moment, John realized that the monster was moving very quickly, and he would not be able to keep track of all its movements. The guy dodges the demon's attacks in a matter of seconds. Using all his strength, John also begins to attack the monster. The guy didn't expect to be so amazed by physical strength alone. At this moment, the demon asked what was the matter because the guy had neither legs nor arms. Then John realized that the demon was very carried away by his power. However, it was precisely because of this that the guy had a chance to match him in strength. With confidence in his eyes, John resolutely invited the demon to play with magic. At this time, the monster walked towards the guy and asked what was the matter, because it seemed to him that John was too scared to talk. The guy, while in the system, reasoned that while the demon was showing off his power, he would spend skills to resist his might. John chose gravity magic, which stops the enemy, but only for a split second. The guy understood that at first glance, magic was not very useful. At this point, the demon said that he was tired of standing around doing nothing, and suggested that the guy listen to screams instead of words. At that moment, John used the null object, which effectively froze time for a split second. The guy began to approach the demon for a new attack. John understood that in an instant, the monster would reduce its strength and counterattack. Watching the fight, Karen couldn't believe her eyes. It was amazing. When John hit the demon, he couldn't understand what happened. The monster was shocked that John was able to touch it and began to attack. The guy continued to strike one after another. Looking at the demon with a haughty look, he said that he was most likely screaming. Rising from his knees, the monster began to say that they would still see who would win in the end. The demon thought that the guy's skills were related to offensive magic, but he could do strange things. He realized that, most likely, the monster had already guessed everything and knew about all his skills. The demon continued to say that he was amazed by the guy's skill in combat, but for him, it was not such a big problem. The monster believed that skill was useless in the face of overwhelming force. John, listening to all this, could not understand when their fight would end. At that moment, the demon, with renewed vigor, began to shout at the guy to try to fight again. Dodging the demon's attack, the boy was surprised that he didn't even flinch. The demon attacked with even greater fury and could not understand what was wrong with the guy. At that moment, John was unable to dodge the blow, and the attack landed right on his arm. Seeing John's condition, Karen looked at him worriedly, but she couldn't even move. The guy understood that the speed and strength of the monster had increased, and now it was difficult to choose the right time. Karen started telling the guy to stop this fight. She begged him with all her might to run away and leave her, to which John replied that the girl should not worry. The guy started to retreat, and then Karen added that the guy was very strong. However, this terrible demon was like a monster that could no longer stop. John began to think that the girl was right, and the difference in strength was huge, but he did not want to leave her. He had 90 skill points left, and he decided to think about how to use them to win. John knew there had to be something that could change the situation. This dungeon creature was very different from the boss he fought. The monster resembled the one the boy had already encountered in the Forbidden Limiter. John decided to take his chance and began to activate the system. By clicking on agree, he found himself in his mind. At that moment, something next to him said that it was glad to meet him, which greatly surprised him. Stepping back a little, John saw a bright silhouette, but he couldn't understand what it was. After some thought, the boy realized that this was the world of the dungeon's mind. The glowing ball began to say that he had a proposal. He asked if John wanted to use the power from his past life again. Then the guy asked in surprise if this ball knew about his past life. Sharik replied that John simply didn't realize it. He also said that the limiter has a deep connection with the dungeon. John finally asked what kind of ball it was. The glowing sphere explained that it was the dungeon itself, and existed to communicate with John. The guy was surprised, because it looked like there was an administrator in the forbidden limiter. John was amazed by what was happening around him, but he understood that this entity must be a higher being. The guy couldn't decide whether he should accept the offer that was made to him earlier. However, with the skills from his past life, he could quickly defeat the boss and destroy the dungeon core. Then the sphere began to say that it did not care if the core was destroyed, because it did not interfere with John in such trifles. After that, she decided to explain everything as it is. The sphere said that John would be defeated and die at the hands of the monster if things continued like this. She also knew that this was a bad idea, so she suggested the following. It is for this battle that she will restore the power from his past life. However, in return, the guy will have to conquer 4 dungeons that will appear in 3 months. John realized that this could be compared to the emergency quests they had gone through before. Then the sphere began to say that it was impossible to compare, since the bosses of all 4 dungeons were called gods. The guy realized that the point was that if he did not fulfill these conditions, he would die anyway. Then the sphere said that this was only a warning, and of course, both parts of the agreement must be fulfilled. Finally, the sphere said that John was very weak now, and asked him to gather strength and try to catch up with his former self at least a little. John realized that this dungeon mind had its own plans, because it explained everything too simply. However, John was more angry than ever at himself for getting into this situation. The boys were stronger than him, and even if he had been able to save Karen, he himself would have died. Despite everything, John was proud of his abilities. He thought that with his current skills, he could defeat any enemy. The upset guy said that he was no longer the shadow of the great magician of loneliness. After this, with confidence in his eyes, the guy said that he gratefully accepted the offer from the sphere. She then said that the 4 gods were terrifyingly strong, and asked if the current John could really win. Then the guy replied that he would gather his strength so as not to lose. After these words, the sphere said goodbye to the reincarnated great magician. John just wondered if the sphere understood what he would turn into. And then he said with a smile that in any case, it wasn't that important. After some time, the demon asked him in shock what was happening. John had clearly changed. The wounds had healed, which greatly surprised the monster. Then the guy said that it wasn't just his appearance that had changed. At this moment, the demon began to shout menacingly that the guy still did not understand the difference in strength. The monster got tired of seeing John's sarcastic face, so he decided to deal with him. At that moment, Karen, closing her eyes, began to shout at the guy that he needed to be careful. As the demon's hand approached John, the monster froze in place and could not understand what was happening. The guy, calmly holding back the monster's blow, asked what happened and why he didn't attack further. The demon asked in bewilderment what all this meant. At that moment, John looked at the demon with fury and used magic to create an explosion. The demon couldn't understand what was happening, and had a hard time believing that this was the same person who was here a moment ago. It seemed completely impossible to him. The monster screamed with all his might that he could not lose and tried to resist. Then John said that the demon was really strong, and to be honest, he wouldn't have been able to win before. The guy also noted that this way he would at least make his task easier. The demon began to beg John to let him go while there was still a chance. The guy replied that he was not naive enough to feel sorry for him. Using magic, John began to cast the final spells while the demon hoped that he would not die after the mutation. The monster thought that if it weren't for John, he could rule alongside the people. At this point, John completed his spell and asking for forgiveness, said that this was the end. The guy realized that he had become a force to be reckoned with, so he decided that he had to regain his former power. After this, John returned to his normal form and began asking Karen if she was okay. The girl replied that everything was fine and asked what it was. She was surprised that the guy possessed such overwhelming power. Karen had never seen anything like this before, so she decided to ask directly. John explained that this power only manifests itself under certain conditions, and that he will no longer have this opportunity. The girl noticed that the guy was just as strong before, if not stronger, and suggested that the guild promote him to a super high class. John then said that he intended to turn down the promotion for certain reasons. Karen closed her eyes and calmly replied that she understood everything. The girl decided that since the guy had explained everything, she wouldn't ask too many questions. After this, John suggested breaking the core of the dungeon and leaving here. The girl began to get up, but suddenly realized that she could not stay on her feet. Then the guy offered to carry her on his back if she wanted. Embarrassed, Karen thanked the guy and agreed to take him up on his offer. While John carried her on his back, the girl thought about how this was the first time someone was helping her. Then Karen asked John why he came. The guy replied that after he declined her invitation, he felt ashamed. Then John decided to go through the dungeon before Karen did. However, it turned out that the girl was ahead of him. This surprised her a little, And then John said that in any case he was glad that he had made it in time. Embarrassed, Karen thanked the guy. John, flushed, said there was nothing to thank him for, and they moved on. At that moment, Karen looked at the guy and asked if she could be his girlfriend. This surprised John greatly, and then Karen asked him if he already had a girlfriend, to which he replied that he did not. Then the girl said that she really wanted to become his girlfriend. The guy said with an awkward look on his face that it was too unexpected, and then he suggested that if she wanted they could be friends, or something like that. John thought to himself that Karen was indeed very strange. When they reached the core of the dungeon, the girl asked if John would release him. She started saying that an item that was rarely obtainable in high-difficulty dungeons was releasing skills. When John asked how Karen knew this, she replied that only a limited number of people knew about it, but the information was available at a super high level. At that moment, John realized that if he became super high class, he would be able to get more information. The boy suggested that perhaps his friend's second skill was obtained through the Grimoire of Liberation. At this point, the guys outside the dungeon were saying that they had a good team. They were glad that even a super high-class adventurer came to support them. As John walked towards the gate, he heard two people talking, saying that a high-class adventurer had already entered the gate. The guy realized that if Karen fought, everyone here would die. At that moment, everything began to shine with a bright light, and people realized that the gates were broken and the core of the dungeon was destroyed. After a while, the silhouette of John appeared through the smoke, carrying Karen on his shoulders. Everyone was shocked that he was carrying a girl on his back. John's friend immediately ran up to them and began to say that he understood the reason for their condition. Then John asked to discuss everything later, as he was very tired and wanted to give the girl a rest. Those around still could not understand who this guy was. John, however, was thinking about how he was once again in the spotlight, but there was no point in worrying about that now, and he decided to just move on. When they arrived, John asked Karen if this was really her house. He was surprised at how nice the house looked, and then the girl explained that her father was a researcher. John asked in surprise if she had heard his thoughts. Karen merely replied that it was clear from his face and turned away. Then she gripped the railing and asked if John really wanted to be just a friend. The guy answered in a confident voice that yes, of course. The embarrassed girl invited him to come in and spend time together. John said that he had a lot of things to do now, and their meeting would have to be postponed, and then asked if she minded. Karen replied with a smile that everything was fine, and they would just meet later. John waved back, saying that they would see each other soon. At that moment, the girl realized that she had smiled, and this surprised her. After some time, John sat on his couch and thought that he had been too self-confident. He believed that if he mastered magic, he would be able to deal with a demon of that level. However, this was a big mistake, and his pride almost destroyed him. The guy realized that he had to return to his previous state. At that moment, a sphere flew up to him and asked why he had come so late, adding that his little sister had already gone to bed. With his eyes burning, John answered the sphere that he had to become stronger. The fairy was surprised and said that she had not heard such words from him for a long time. John replied that he couldn't protect what he had if he remained so weak. That's why he decided to become the strongest again. After that, turning to the sphere, the guy asked if she would help him with this. The fairy happily replied that John had finally come to his senses, hinting that he would, of course, help. The fairy said with enthusiasm that she had been waiting for this for a very long time. Without further hesitation, the sphere once again confirmed that it would help the guy in everything, to which John thanked it. The next day, the boy asked his little sister if she would mind if he became famous. Then Kitty, a little embarrassed, said that she would only be glad of this. While the girl was talking about how she would be able to brag about this to her friends, the sphere clarified that John was the only one who was worried about his little sister. After the girl's answer, the guy thanked her and said that he could now act calmly. However, just in case, the guy decided that it would be better for them to move. Then the little sister jumped up and down happily and said that she was looking forward to her new home. They decided that next time they would decide together what it would look like. Finally, Kitty said that she was already leaving for school and smiled. The sphere then decided that they should get down to business right away. And now, in a moment, John was flying, the atmosphere asking where they were going. The guy replied that in order to become stronger, they needed a base, and so they went to a desert island. The sphere began to ask if it was possible to use it if it did not belong to the guy. John replied that no one would ever know about it, while the sphere was furiously trying to convince that anything was possible. When they were among a bunch of small islands, the guy clarified that he needed to find an island with a minimum difference in altitude. The sphere then suggested one of the islands, to which John replied that it was overgrown with trees, but it seemed that there really weren't such big differences there. They decided to fly there after all and headed straight to the island. When they were already on this island, the sphere asked what they would do now. John said it was very obvious that they would be populating an uninhabited island. The sphere began to ponder where to begin when it comes to pioneers. John said that the first thing they needed was a place to craft the items needed to complete the dungeon. Then the sphere clarified that after this they needed a place to hide from the wind and rain, and suggested building a simple house. John said they would decide all this after they explored the island. There was a lot of flat land on it, but it was overgrown with trees and the area would have to be cleared. At that moment, the sphere shouted to John that it had found a good place. John approached the fairy and was surprised. There was a cave there, and there were no problems building objects for creation here. At that moment he heard some strange sounds and began to listen. Suddenly the sphere screamed that there were a lot of snakes in the cave. They all started attacking John, opening their mouths as wide as they could. Suddenly they stopped and started running away. Then John said that most likely they felt that they were in danger. The guy felt sorry for the snakes, but they would have to make do with this. Now John is left with only the entrance and the interior furnishings. Then he called the lion and ordered him to cut down trees and bring them to the entrance of the cave. Sphere, seeing the lion, said that he no longer looked as regal as he did when they first met. Then John said that they should talk another time, but for now continue to do business. After some time, the sphere handed the items to John and said that all these things belonged to him in a past life. After a hard day's work, John decided to see what his lion had done. Surprisingly, all the thickets were cleared, and the lion did a great job. John praised his beast and said that he was very capable. The guy understood that thanks to him they would soon have an entrance. And so again, after some time, the base was completely ready. And how easy it was amazed the guy. Then the sphere asked what they would do now. John replied that the only way to become stronger was to gain skill points and master magic. Suddenly the sphere's expression changed and the guy noticed it and asked what was wrong with it. The sphere started screaming that the guy had come all the way to the desert island to build a base. If he wanted to level up, then why didn't he just challenge the dungeon in Tokyo? Then John said that they would explore this base to level up. Suddenly the sphere noticed the magic stone, which surprised it greatly. John replied that all these dungeons are not that difficult, and to become stronger, you need to defeat stronger enemies. That's why he used magic stones, which he continued to collect even after his little sister's recovery. At this moment, the demon's voice began to wonder what kind of power was hidden within John. The demon was also glad that he had left his main body as a backup. However, now he will have to start all over again. At that moment, he attacked one of the people as if a regular sheet was flying at the guy. Taking all the energy, the demon said that he would soon become as strong again. He also added that this time he will really rule over everyone. At this time, John continued to talk about how he saved up magic stones even after his sister's recovery. Sphere immediately said with a smile on her face that she understood why the guy needed this place. After that, she suggested that the guy immediately start creating. At first, they decided to use the magic furnace to remove impurities from the magic stone. This way they will get high magical frequency ingots. They will do the same with all the magic stones they have. It takes one magic stone to make one ingot, and overall it doesn't take that long. The outer shell is made of magic stones, and the power plant is made of ingots. The higher the power plant's stats, the better, and the higher the level of magic stones. Sphere was talking about how hard work it was, and how time-consuming it was. And then John said that was why he wanted to give her the job. Then the fairy began to scream that she did not want to work, to which John replied that he thought that she would help him become stronger. Then the sphere said that she didn't think that she would be assigned such a task. In addition, there was no internet on this island, which was very disappointing for the sector. John replied that she was too mired in modern technology. Then the sphere decided that since John had decided to become stronger, then it, as the administrator of the Forbidden Limiter, should make its contribution. The guy also said that he would leave the lion to help the sphere lift the magic stones. At that moment, the fairy immediately became cheerful, realizing that the lion would stay with her. Finally, John said that he would ask her to create bars from medium to super high grade. When the sphere asked what the guy would do during this time, he replied that there were not enough magic stones. That's why he decided to return to the city and collect them. As an adventurer of his level, John could enter mid-level dungeons alone. He wanted to collect enough magic stones, so it would be more convenient for him to go alone than to go through this test with someone else. As he passed the tests, he received more and more mid-level magic stones. John was surprised that he had collected them so quickly, and realized that the adventurers had just escaped. At that moment, the guy was being watched by a worried young man who said that he was in a dangerous situation. The guy didn't understand how John had dealt with a bunch of monsters on his own. He had never seen such super high-class creatures before, and therefore could not understand who John was. The young man began to reason that it was necessary to set a trap. And I also thought that John could ruin everything. The young man decided to escape from the dungeon when he left, when suddenly a voice was heard. Turning around, John was already standing right behind him, asking if he had gathered the demons. The guy said that he felt someone else's presence, and did not expect that there were villains hiding here. In underground conditions, it is possible to commit murder under the guise of an accident, and such crimes are not uncommon. Then the young man said that even though John had found him, he still couldn't catch him. John immediately realized that this was a skill that completely erased presence. This skill was better than his invisibility, but the guy had a trump card for this case. John simply decided to use the wise demon eye. Thanks to him, the guy was very clearly visible, and therefore John could not miss him. After some time, John had already thrown the young man to the ground. The boy couldn't understand how John was able to see him. At this moment, John was only thinking about what to do with the captured villain. After some time, the man thanked John for catching the villain who was responsible for the recent spate of accidents. Then the man added that the other day they helped him with the enchanted forest, and therefore it can be said that John is their hope. Afterwards, he asked if John had conquered the dungeon alone and noted his dedication to the job. Then the man said he had to go and said goodbye. John was thinking at that moment that, given the circumstances, he should accept the promotion. But it wasn't time yet, at least until he found them a new home and ensured his little sister's safety. John closed his eyes and thought that they still had a lot of work to do. However, for now, he decided to go to another dungeon again. After some time, John was already studying the results of clearing the dungeon using the system. With so many dungeon clears, one dungeon a day is not enough. It is better to go to several. John decided that he would do this early tomorrow morning, but for now he returned home to his sister. Kitty, as soon as her brother arrived, began to say that she could not find the sphere. Then John dryly replied that he had left her on a desert island. Suddenly, the sphere jumped out of nowhere and was surprised to see its little sister. This surprised the guy very much, and then the sphere explained that it could appear on the doorstep of his house in an instant. John replied that he didn't expect that and was very impressed with her skills. A couple of hours later, John was thinking about the man giving him a list of 5 problematic dungeons that needed to be dealt with. The first on the list was a high-class dungeon that had no monsters, but seemed to be attacked by demons. This was the most convenient dungeon for John. Before entering this dungeon, he was stopped and told that he could not enter there alone. John then held out his visiting permit and informed the man that he could enter. Then the guards immediately asked for forgiveness, but warned that the dungeon was full of strong opponents. After thanking them, John headed towards the dungeon gates. The guy thought that if there were a lot of strong opponents there, then he really needed to be on his guard. At this time, the security could not understand how the guy got permission to visit the training ground of 100 battles. They couldn't figure out who he was because he wasn't even a super high-class fighter. At this time, John saw in the dungeon the place where the immortal knights were training. At that moment, these knights noticed the guy and became wary. John realized that they had a magic circle with the effect of immortality, which is why they did not die. The guy decided that if he destroyed these magic circles, victory would be his. After the blow, he realized that the magic circle's defense was also impenetrable, and added that he would need the heavenly demon sword. John knew that knights were tough opponents, and this was a tough dungeon indeed. The guy dared to suggest that it was still too difficult for one person. John decided to call upon one of the pact followers who had been freed the previous night. The limiter's skill tree became even wider, and the boy could level up along with the beast. Now the original strategy for this dungeon might have been to avoid fighting the knights and destroy the core. However, John decided that he would not go that route. He ordered the beast to aim at the magic circle on the armor, because they must destroy all the knights. After he saw the beast in action, he immediately realized that he was serious. After that, with confidence in his eyes, John calmly said that it was time for them to begin the attack. This beast was an imperial horned beast, and its power had yet to be revealed. However, he was strong and fast, surpassing even the speed of lightning through multiple evolutions. And so they began to kill the knight one by one, and John praised the beast for his excellent work. The guy understood perfectly well that he also had to become better. At that moment, a knight appeared behind him, but John immediately noticed him and decided to sort things out. Within a couple of seconds, the knight was defeated, and John was standing right above him. He decided that he needed to quickly deal with all the knights. After some time, they, together with the beast, finished off the enemies. In the end, they had 40 mid-rank magic stones, which was a good result. After this, John told the beast that it was time for them to move on. There were still 2 levels to go. And so, after some time, John had only 1 opponent left. The guy told the beast that he could handle it himself and thanked him for his help. John realized that he had less combat experience than in his previous life. However, he should be able to quickly deal with one enemy on his own. The boy became wary and realized that the knight was, of course, strong. But he understood that this was not even a high rank. That's why John, using magic, said that now it was his turn. In an instant, the knight was struck and split in half. Looking at the next level, the guy realized that there was still 1 enemy left. At this time, one guy was talking about how a high-ranking adventurer saved a super high-ranking adventurer. Pointing to Karen, he asked if she had been rescued that day. Then the girl, angry, decided to keep silent. The guy kept saying he'd never heard of John and asked how strong he was. Karen replied that he was stronger than this guy at least. Then Sam laughed and said it was quite funny. He understood that the girl fell in love with the guy because he saved her, like some kind of prince. Then he stood up and said that she had nothing to answer him. As she left, she added that if Sam had called her here to ask such questions, then she was leaving. At this point, the guy asked the girl if she would be offended if he tried to kill John. Karen immediately turned to Sam with fury in her eyes and said that then she would kill him first. Then Sam said it was just a joke between friends. After that, he added that they were finished and told Karen to leave. The girl only said goodbye, that if the guy tried to do something to John, she would kill him. Sam, left alone with his thoughts, began to reason that the girl usually did not show such interest in other people. It turned out that he got bored when the dungeons stopped being even slightly challenging. That's why Sam decided he wanted to play with John a little. At this time, John finally completed the last level. It all looked complicated, but the guy wasn't afraid. John was determined to defeat all enemies. At this time, his friend was at another photo shoot. When he went out for some fresh air, Sam started saying that the guy looked great on camera as always. When he saw the guy, he said that he didn't expect to meet him here. Sam said he just wanted to talk about John. The guy didn't really react, saying that now everything was clear to him. John became so famous that Sam began to hunt him. Then the guy said that he was apparently very happy that his friend had become a target. The guy replied that he simply knew better than anyone how strong John was. Hearing this, Sam asked if he meant to say that he was not a threat to him. The guy replied that he would neither confirm nor deny it. Sam really liked this, and this information turned him on. At that moment, the guy said that if Sam suddenly targeted John, he should be more careful. After all, this could seriously hurt Sam's pride. From these words, the balls of the two adventurers collided with each other. At this point, Sam asked the guy if he felt like he was underestimating him. The guy replied that if he was going to fight him, he wouldn't give him a single chance. Then Sam said that he didn't need any trouble yet. He also added that he was just messing with the guy. As he left, Sam said that his interlocutor, as usual, was very strange. The guy was pleased that the information about John was becoming more and more interesting. At that moment, John had the feeling that he was witnessing a change of era, and so the guy finally finished dealing with all the enemies. He had accumulated 100 mid-rank magic stones. John was glad that he could now create a golem. Now all that was left was to destroy the core of the dungeon, which is what he decided to do. The security outside was shocked that the guy had defeated everyone single-handedly and apologized for his rudeness. John just said that everything was fine, and there was no need to worry. At that moment, Sam appeared right in front of John. He immediately began asking who or what he had come to see. Seeing him, John asked in surprise who he was then. Sam then replied that he was a super high-ranking adventurer, which surprised the guards. Because the guard interrupted the conversation, Sam became angry and turned sharply towards him. The security was shocked and did not understand that this was a very dangerous person. John then asked if super high-ranking adventurers were allowed to break the guild rules. Then Sam replied that such adventurers are equal to representatives of the authorities, and while he works, the law does not dictate. Hearing this, John asked what he wanted from him. Sam started saying that he heard the guy was damn good and just wanted to meet him. John looked cautious and asked if Sam really just wanted to get to know each other. Then Sam said with a crazy smile that nothing could really be hidden from the guy. John began to say that people like Sam were not simple and straightforward. He also added that no matter what Sam wanted, he was still very irritable. Hearing this, Sam asked if John would agree to a duel. The guy replied that there was nothing complicated about it, but if he lost, he would stop interfering. Sam agreed to the terms, but clarified that the guy had made a mistake about something. Even if the guy wins, there will still be nothing connecting them. And all because John is destined to die at the hands of Sam. As soon as the attack began, John immediately saw the amazing power of a super high rank. Sam continued to advance on John, yelling at him that he was losing his grip. The guy asked him not to disappoint him even more by wasting time on the fight. Then John said that he was not ready to die yet either. After that, he began a circular activation and went on the attack. Seeing this, Sam, without a drop of fear, simply said that everything was going according to plan. They closed in and began to attack simultaneously, fending off the blows. The difference in strength was obvious, but John did not give up. Sam noted the guy's good skills. He added that, unfortunately, he would have to use his best abilities. After another attack, Sam screamed in rage that something was wrong with John. The guards were horrified to see Master Sam winning using his most powerful skills. John took all the blows with fortitude. Then Sam shouted that if the guy didn't do anything, he would lose. At that moment, John began to attack with his sword. After this attack, Sam was convinced of his suspicions. He absorbed and accumulated magical power, and the gap in power between them became critical. But when it came to managing magical power, John was like a fish in water. By controlling the released magical power, the boy created a trap for the magic that Sam absorbed, thereby damaging him. John didn't understand how he could fight Sam on equal terms. The adventurer himself began to shout at John, asking what he had done. The guy calmly asked what exactly Sam was asking about. Then Sam started saying that his opponent was no match for him, and that he was too weak. He shouted with all his fury for John not to get carried away. He was pleased that the guy didn't disappoint him, but it was time to end the fight. At that moment, Sam began to perform the dance of the endless blade, and many blows flew towards John at once. The guards couldn't believe their eyes. This was inhuman technology. John realized that all these blows had the ability to absorb magic. He realized that it was impossible to create a destructive magical emission for each of these strikes. At that moment, Sam declared that he was sure that the boy would not survive this blow. At that moment, Karen ran up to them and started yelling at Sam what he was doing. The guy started saying that the girl was a little late, and it was too late to do anything. At that moment, John told Karen that he was okay. He also added that it was dangerous, and asked her to stay away and just watch. The girl, although worried, remained where she was. Then Sam said that maybe if they worked together, they could handle it. At this point, John declared that he was tired of listening to Sam's words, and it was time to show the difference in skills. Sam agreed with a grin and returned to the fight. He thought that killing guys like that was the most exciting thing to do. And now he was hanging over John and shouting that he had lost. At that moment, something happened that no one expected. Sam fell to his knees. There was a huge wound gaping in his body, and he didn't understand how it appeared. Then John began to say that in this world there is no such thing as infinity, and therefore any gap can be used for attack. Looking at Sam, he said menacingly that it was all over. The guards were still in shock that John was able to defeat a super high-ranking adventurer. At that moment, Karen ran up to John and started asking if he was okay. She immediately began to use the Starlight Blessing to heal him. John did not elaborate on whether this was restoration magic. Karen explained that she was using the skill to heal him. After healing, John placed his hand on the girl's head and asked for forgiveness for making her worry. Suddenly, they started calling him and he apologized, saying that he had to answer. It was his sister on the other end of the line, asking if he had forgotten his plans for today. John realized that he had completely forgotten about his birthday. He told his sister that he remembered everything and would buy food soon. After this, he told Karen that he urgently needed to leave. The girl, having overheard part of the conversation, asked if he was going to the party. John confirmed, and then Karen asked if she could go with him. A little confused, the guy said he didn't know, and then decided to clarify. In the end, everyone told him that they were not against Karen coming. The girl was happy about this, although she didn't show it. Then John told her to go, and they headed towards the house, leaving the guards alone. The men were perplexed that they just up and left. In the end, they decided to take Sam to the medical center. After some time, he and John reached the house. Kitty greeted them joyfully and at the same time scolded them for being late. John said that he could not forget about such an event, but his sister did not believe him. At this point, Karen apologized for disturbing her. Seeing her, the little sister exclaimed that she was right. This was the same girl who had already visited them. Karen immediately began to apologize, and then Kitty said that her brother would always be happy to look after her. The girl noted that John has a very good little sister. After that, she carefully asked if the guy had any complaints. When they went into the other room, they began introducing Karen to everyone. The girl closed her eyes and bowing slightly said that she was glad to meet him. The girls immediately began to admire her and say that it was a great honor for them to meet her. Jessica even asked permission to shake hands and awkwardly reached out to her. When Karen allowed him to shake her hand, the girl was very happy. At that moment, Karen noticed Michael and asked if he was surprised that the former member of the Red Dragon. After that, she clarified that she knows most of the adventurers and therefore was able to name this information. Jessica said it could be called a phenomenal memory. At this point, Catherine asked if she could ask the girl one question. Having received permission, she asked with a serious look what kind of relationship Karen had with John. The girl started to say that they were more than friends, but John immediately said that there was no point in using words that would cause confusion. Everyone was stunned by this information, and then John began to explain that they were just friends. After that, the guy decided to change the subject and asked where Sarah was now. Kitty said that the girl was unable to come due to urgent matters. After that, they decided to start the fun, and John announced that he had bought some different food. They began to congratulate Mr. Michael on his release from the hospital. At that moment, my sister announced that she was preparing their family's signature beef stew. The girls clapped their hands in surprise. Karen stood a little apart, but she enjoyed the general atmosphere of fun. Suddenly, she called out to John and he turned to face her. She started thanking the guy for bringing her here. John simply said that this was just the beginning of the party and suggested that everyone enjoy themselves. Meanwhile, a super high-class adventurer with the skill of crystallizing magic power was sitting in his office. Suddenly someone came in to see him, and the guy said with a smile that he was glad to see the girl. Sarah chuckled and said they would discuss Sam. When the door closed, the guy added that you could tell from the girl's face that everything went well. Kitty announced that the beef stew was ready. Catherine said she loved the dish, and Jessica confirmed that the beef was excellent. Michael also praised the taste and noted that Kitty was an excellent cook, to which she replied that she tried very hard. Everyone else enjoyed the food too. The guys were discussing how it had been a long time since they had dined with such a large group. At this time, Karen looked at John, and a slight awkwardness was noticeable on her face. This awkwardness soon turned into joy. Karen replied that it was actually a lot of fun. The guys were already getting ready to go home and thanked Karen and John for organizing it. Karen and John also enjoyed it, and while the guests thanked them, they wished everyone a safe journey. Everyone went home, discussing how much fun they had. Everyone was happy and satisfied with the evening. Mike and Catherine were curious about how Karen met John and Kitty. Karen began to tell him that she met him during the raid, and that was when they met. Jessica asked Karen if she thought John was a cool adventurer, to which Karen replied in the affirmative. Karen began to explain that John was much more skilled than the average adventurer, to which Catherine asked which of them was stronger in the end. Karen replied that John was stronger because he saved her, and everyone was surprised. Catherine thought for a moment and asked the boys to wait a bit. After that, looking at Karen, she decided that her thoughts had a place to be. Karen explained that the enemy was very strong. John defeated him, but the guys still doubted Karen's words. But Michael noted that this was quite in John's spirit. Everyone was shocked by what they heard. Jessica was amazed that the guy came to the girls' aid again. Catherine thought that John was only helping them. At that moment, John sneezed, and his sister asked him if he was cold, to which he replied that he was not. The guy thought that he had forgotten something. John and Sphere discussed that they had collected the required amount of high-ranking stones to create 2 golems. Sphere enthusiastically claimed that he could not have done it without their help. While John was thanking his friends, Sphere asked what the difference was between the 2 golems. Sphere asked how the guy managed to create such a high-quality product from such materials. Then John began to explain his method, and the fairy realized that she had no idea about the subject. She said that she would fight against the super high-class adventurers that they created to become stronger. The Sphere asked who the boy would fight first, and John replied that he would fight both at the same time. The fairy looked at the guy in surprise but remained silent. She then objected that there was no point in fighting 2 at once, since they could be killed one by one. John replied that, according to her own rules, they should accept any challenge, no matter how difficult it was. Sphere noted that the recommended level to defeat a super high class is over 1,000, and the guy has no idea how difficult it is to fight 2 at the same time. Frowning, she added that if he was not careful, he would die. John said that he understood her concerns perfectly well, and the Sphere only sighed, realizing that he would not listen to her. He added that it is more efficient to cope with 2 tasks at once than with 1. He also noted that fighting 2 opponents takes less time than fighting 1. The Sphere didn't immediately understand his idea, and then John offered to demonstrate. At this time, Kitty was sleeping peacefully in class. A classmate woke her up and told her that an adventurer had appeared who had defeated a super high class. The girl was very surprised because she had never heard such news. A classmate showed a video of the battle of the best adventurers. Kitty was shocked when she saw the recording. Her brother was there. Holding back her emotions, she called the fight amazing. She added that her brother is like a new star among adventurers. Meanwhile, other adventurers explored the Great Ogre's cave. They discussed tactics for defeating the boss, thinking through every detail. Suddenly, one of them rushed at the monster without listening to the rest of the plan. When the others shouted at him not to run out alone, the boy replied that everything was fine. After striking the boss, he declared that he was not afraid of these monsters. His comrades were shocked by his strength and could not understand where he got so much power from. A girl from their squad admired his strength and expressed her admiration. Everyone was amazed at his skill because he fought hand to hand, even though he had a sword. Suddenly, the warrior turned around and with a sharp movement pierced the girl's leg. Everyone froze in shock, unable to believe what was happening. One of the fighters, clutching his sword tighter, asked the traitor what he was doing. In response, the villain hit him with such force that he fell to his knees. The maddened traitor declared that he needed to find a stronger body. The frightened young man asked what he was talking about. The villain approached him, explaining that he required the body of a talented adventurer. Meanwhile, John activated the golems and prepared for battle. With confidence in his eyes, the young man suggested that the Sphere begin training. The fairy and the lion encouraged John, urging him to show all that he was capable of. Suddenly, one of the golems quickly attacked the young man, which surprised him quite a bit. The Sphere was amazed by his strength. If you don't take the fight seriously, you can die in the blink of an eye. Dodging all the blows, John told the Sphere that he would die only if the monster hit him accurately. However, the young man knew their pattern of behavior very well. Therefore, all he could do was to predict the golem's actions in order to win. Watching the fight, the Sphere could not understand what exactly the guy was planning. Suddenly, John appeared behind the golem and began performing a circular activation. The fairy instantly realized the young man's plan, and this inspired her. John patiently waited for the moment when the monster's armor would become vulnerable to blows. At that moment, he used a meteor bombardment strike, splitting the monster in half. When the system reported a level increase, the young man decided to end the fight. The Sphere noted with delight how gracefully John dealt with the monster. At that moment, the second golem picked up the core of the first and began to activate it. The Sphere instantly screamed that the golem was turning purple and it was an emergency. The fairy asked if they should stop working, to which John replied that it was impossible. He also added that the golem could not be turned off because it was out of order. The sphere immediately realized that they had no choice but to defeat him. John thought that the monster's power plant had been captured, and now this enemy had speed and strength. The guy also suggested that this golem might have already crossed the super high-class level. John decided to make this fight personal, and prepared for the fight. After this, the object began to shut down, and everything around turned gray. John immediately noticed that the golem's durability had increased significantly. At this point, he decided it was time to use a few tricks. Meanwhile, his sister's school was hosting an endurance race. Kitty overtook her classmates, and there was not a drop of fatigue on her face. One girl asked how she managed to run so fast, since this was the third time she had outrun everyone. Kitty replied that she had a lot of energy and smiled. This greatly surprised the classmate, because she knew that the girl had recently been in the hospital. At that moment, Kitty called the teacher to her. With a surprised face, she asked if the girl would like to join the track and field team, since her results were impressive at the national level. Kitty politely declined, explaining that she wanted to help with the chores. The teacher noted that her time was still impressive, and she could win the school championship. Then the girl said that her brother worked hard while she was in the hospital, and she wanted to thank him. The teacher admired the girl's kindness. She apologized for her offer and said that she was sure her brother would be pleased. At that moment, a portal opened next to them, and no one could understand what it meant. The teacher started shouting that a gate to the dungeon had appeared, and fear was visible in her eyes. She ordered everyone to return to the school building immediately. The children screamed in horror and ran in different directions. When the teacher saw the demons, she froze, not realizing how serious the situation was. At that moment, one of the girls fell, and a monster appeared right behind her. Seeing this, Kitty rushed to save her, while the teacher screamed in horror that it was dangerous. The girl jumped right on the monster's head and prevented him from attacking. Kitty started shouting at her classmates to run because she would hold them back. The girl ran away, asking for forgiveness for the inconvenience. Standing face to face with the monster, Kitty realized that it was much larger than her. She was scared, but she convinced herself that everything would be okay. She remembered that she had a disease that impaired her skills. This happened because her body couldn't cope with the new abilities. But now she has recovered. Now, she could calmly become an adventurer and activated her sword. Once activated, it instantly cut the monster in half. With this, she greatly surprised the rescued girl and the teacher. Her classmates' eyes glowed with admiration. Kitty said with a smile that she had dealt with the monster, and the system showed that her skill was called Death God. At this time, John was still fighting the golem and realized that it was stronger than him. The guy realized that in order to win, he had to take a risk. Instead of camouflaging himself completely, he concentrated the camouflage on only a small part of his body. If the monster attacks, it will take fatal damage. However, John decided that this was a test of his endurance. The sphere began to say that the guy was acting recklessly again. John replied that this golem's blow was no problem for him. After that, he finished the fight with the monster with a blank look. Sphere couldn't find the words to describe her surprise. She knew that in his past life, John had mastered magic alone and was known as a great sorcerer of solitude. The fairy understood perfectly well what strong emotions had driven him to this extreme. John just enjoyed every fight and everything that happened to him. At that moment, the guy realized that the monster wanted to destroy him and the entire island. The sphere began to scream that John must stop him at any cost, because this cannot be done. John merely replied that he would have done it without her command, and rushed towards the monster. After defeating the monster, the sphere praised the guy, saying that he was a great guy, and now he and the lion are his protection. John agreed with a smile that this was wonderful. Then the system appeared in front of him, and the guy realized that in this battle, he had raised his level to 150. The sphere asked if he got this level for defeating 2 golems. After reading the information, John realized that he had to learn new magic. Sphere noted that magic is of course good, but how will they level up now? John replied that they had some interesting new magic that would help with this. The fairy became interested in what kind of magic was being discussed and asked to tell her more. John explained that with its help, he would be able to travel to the spirit realm, where the souls of powerful demons live. Hearing this, the sphere asked him if he was sure that such a thing existed in this world. John replied that there had been many cases of extrasensory phenomena observed in this world. That's why he's confident he can try at any time. At that moment, he received a call, and when he picked up the phone, he realized that it was his sister. A frightened girl on the phone said she was in trouble. She asked if he could come to school now, as it was difficult to explain. John calmly replied that he would be there soon and hung up. Entering the school grounds, he thought that judging by the tone, this was clearly not a relapse of the disease. Seeing the break room, he realized that his sister was most likely there. Entering the office, he saw the teacher, who said that they had been seeing each other a lot lately. The teacher thanked him for taking time out of his busy schedule to visit his sister. John asked what happened to Kitty. The teacher said that a gate to the dungeon appeared on the training ground. This surprised John, but the teacher continued to tell that Kitty defeated the monster single-handedly. The man emphasized that the girl's strength, according to eyewitnesses, was enough to instantly defeat the monster. John looked at his sister seriously and asked her about what happened. He knew perfectly well that she had no skills. John thought that full recovery from the disease meant her adaptation. The sister began to apologize to John for not telling him about this earlier. John also noted that the girl used her power to protect the students from demons. Kitty was glad that her brother was proud of her and thanked him. John asked if the gate that had appeared posed a danger. The man replied that the dungeon was only of an average level. John was surprised, and the man added that, although it was not obvious, he himself was a former adventurer. However, the man immediately said that it didn't matter. He continued to say that the girl's abilities were greater than those of an ordinary adventurer. He was surprised that the girl passed the exam and said that he did not think it was right to force her to take it again. Kitty exclaimed that she could handle it and wanted to become an adventurer to help others. She added that she doesn't want to be left out when all her friends are adventurers. John put his hand on his face and took a slow breath. He realized he had no choice and agreed to allow his sister to participate. He said that he would be her partner in the exam to obtain the title. Kitty was surprised, not imagining that she would be fighting with her brother. There was fear in her eyes, and John didn't understand why she was afraid. He began to explain that fighting adventurers like Frank was dangerous. After some time, they decided to proceed and go to the place where the rank exam was being held. And now John was standing opposite his sister and confidently saying that it was time to start the exam. John explained to Kitty that if she wanted to become a real adventurer, she needed to fully develop her abilities. He also stressed that one would have to fight for the title of adventurer. In the observer room, they were discussing that Kitty possessed the demon god skill, which no one had seen before. They noted that rarely does anyone have such abilities, and the girl is John's sister. The man with glasses said that he had high hopes for Kitty. John told his sister to start when she was ready. After these words, Kitty loudly announced her readiness and activated the power of demons. In a matter of seconds, the girl was next to her brother, which greatly surprised him. When Kitty began her attack, John realized that her power was much greater than he had imagined. Their fight lasted for some time, and in the end, John told his sister that she was able to dodge his serious blow. Kitty, upset, replied that she had asked her brother to take it easy. The observer was shocked by how the girl revealed her abilities. John noted with a smile that he had forgotten how strong his sister was. He wondered whether he should talk about her greatest fear. After a moment's hesitation, John told Kitty that they would now find out her limit. After a while, the girl screamed that she was at her limit, and it was clear from her face how hard the fight was. John knew he couldn't let things end this way. Kitty, with a tired face, said that she would give it her all and not give up. John was surprised that she still had strength. He shouted at her to give it her all, and the space around them turned red. The girl used the devil sword, and a stream of magic rushed towards John. Having repelled the attack, the guy noted that her technique was excellent. Seeing John dodge it easily, Kitty said in surprise that it was amazing. Then John replied that he could say the same about his sister. He couldn't believe that the girl had just awakened her abilities. Kitty, coming to her senses, said that she very much hoped that she had lived up to her brother's expectations. Then John, holding Kitty, told her to regain her strength, since the exam was now over. The girl looked at her brother with a smile and thanked him. At that moment, a man appeared and began clapping, thanking both of them for their work. He also added that the girl's abilities surprised him, and John agreed that he was surprised too. The man said that he decided to contact the guild to consider Kitty's rank. Since the girl had not yet achieved any achievements as an adventurer, it was difficult for the man to make a decision on his own. Hearing this, John asked his sister if she minded, and the girl replied that she agreed and just wanted to go home to rest. Hearing this, the boy told the man that Kitty's answer was positive and they would go on vacation. The man thanked Kitty again for her efforts, which embarrassed the girl. As they began to leave, the man noted that with her awakening abilities and low status, her abilities were impressive. He couldn't wait to see how his duet with John developed. When they got home, his sister started saying she was tired, and John agreed that fighting was tiring. After that, the guy said that he would do the housework himself and let his sister rest. At this time, the sphere appeared and began to ask what tasks they needed to complete. John began to talk about Kitty's awakening abilities, to which the fairy replied that she had known about it for a long time. She added that she didn't say anything about it because she was interested in seeing his reaction. Sphere also noted that the girl can now help John, and that's great. The fairy suggested using a skill measuring device to test Kitty's abilities. John thought for a moment and agreed that he was interested in measuring the girl's abilities. Approaching the device, they decided to find out what skills their little sister had. After the measurement, Kitty couldn't contain her joy. The device showed a super high rank, which was incredibly wonderful. John explained that this was quite natural, since her abilities were just beginning to unfold. The sphere suggested that now that Kitty had settled in, she would be able to seek out adventures of the highest level. John thought that with such potential, his sister would hardly give up the path of an adventurer. With diligent training, she can become a skilled fighter, capable of defeating any formidable opponent. Meanwhile, the monster was happy that he had finally acquired the body of a high-ranking adventurer. His natural strength was gradually restored, and he could now develop his existing skills. He thought that he could become even more powerful than before and rule the whole world. At this time, a group of guys were torturing the poor dog by throwing stones at it. They laughed as they watched the dog try to escape, amazed at his resilience. A monster in the body of a high-ranking adventurer witnessed this scene. He immediately thought that the laws of the strongest also apply in human society. The monster then said that he was just about to test the strength of the body he was in. With a mad smile, the demon began to say that he would show the boys how weak they were. When the guys saw the demon, they couldn't figure out who it was. The demon in the boy's body began to say that he thought he would enjoy spending time the same way they did. The guys just laughed and didn't take his words seriously. At that moment, the demon approached one of them and said that he wanted to try. In a matter of seconds, he slammed the guy into the wall with all his might. Seeing this, the others started running, shouting that they did not understand who it was. Then the demon brought them back, and one of them began to beg for mercy. The guys began to ask for forgiveness, assuring that they would not do it again. But the demon, stretching out his hand to them, declared that their words were meaningless. They had done nothing wrong. The look on one of the guys' faces became completely blank. The demon dealt with them, leaving no trace of them. Having acquired new skills, he was surprised at how interesting they turned out to be. Squatting down to pet the dog, he said that even the least intelligent creatures are capable of feeling gratitude. Standing up, he added that he had healed her wounds and left. The dog felt protected and decided to follow the stranger. The demon thought it was a great idea to swear allegiance to him as the future ruler of the world. Looking at the city at night, he invited the dog to go with him. At this time, Kitty asked her brother if she could take a day off from school and go to the dungeon. John explained that she had to attend school as a senior. He clarified that one can only go down into the dungeon on weekends. While the girl was eating, John added that her rank was still unknown, so she would not be able to go into the dungeon. Looking at his watch, John noted that his sister seemed to be late. Realizing this, Kitty ran out the door, shouting that she was leaving. The sphere flew up to John and noticed that he was being overprotective of his sister. John replied that Kitty had more important things to do than train in the dungeon. Besides, he must be strong enough to protect her. After these words, John stood up from the table and told the sphere that he had finished his meal. After some time, John began to train his invisibility and soon achieved success. The sphere was delighted to see that the boy had become translucent and realized that he was a spirit. John asked how the fairy saw his spirit, to which the sphere replied that he was special. Then the sphere asked how he would get into the spirit world. John was surprised that the fairy did not know this, and said that she was mistaken in thinking that their knowledge was equal. He began to explain that the spirit world was between heaven and the world of the living, and if he could get there, everything would be fine. Sphere asked again if she had understood correctly that he was on the border of two worlds. John confirmed this, and suddenly a powerful magical reaction occurred. Right in front of them, the gates to the spirit world opened, which surprised the guy very much. When he entered inside, he immediately thought that the souls of many demons lived here. John wondered if this could be considered a dungeon if they were behind a gate. The sphere replied that there was no dungeon core here. Hearing this, John asked how to know if it was here, to which the sphere confidently replied that it knew what it was talking about. The guy only noticed that earlier the sphere had said that it didn't know everything. The fairy began to take offense, but John added that she always helps him when needed. To himself, he noted that the sphere was quite simple. At that moment, the fairy pointed to an interesting place and said that there were many unusual things there. A demon's soul hovered in front of the tombstone. The sphere noticed that the strength of demons probably depended on the size of their soul. John said that this meant that the demon spirits would not surround them, and the fight would be one-on-one. Sphere added that for John, who wants to defeat a strong enemy, this is a big plus. In the end, they decided to first test their powers by touching one of the great souls. A reaper appeared in front of them, and John immediately realized that it was a spirit. Looking at the monster again, the guy was glad that the fight would be worthy. With a confident look and a calm voice, he declared that this spirit was finished. Watching this, the sphere thought that John was becoming stronger at an incredible speed. She decided that perhaps he would soon surpass his past self. Having finished with the monster, the guy said that next time he would choose a bigger soul. The sphere began to incite John to defeat all the super high-ranked demons and increase his level. At this time, the adventurer, coming out of the shower, noticed that she had received a message. Taking the phone in her hands, she realized that it was an order to assemble. The first thing the girl thought was that perhaps a super high-class dungeon had appeared. After some time, the counting of the adventurers who had arrived began, and the results surprised the man. He began to thank everyone for responding to such an urgent call. One of them said it was no problem because he had just finished training. Another countered that serious responsibility should not be expected from high-class competitors, noting the absence of others. They began to discuss that those who were not performing their duties should be demoted. The youngest adventurer sat and said that she just wanted to get home as soon as possible. One of the men suggested that she leave if she did not consider herself worthy of her rank. At this point, the leader who had gathered them asked them to get down to business immediately. He reported that he had managed to determine the location of a super high-ranking dungeon in advance. He also noted that the method of accumulating magical power this time is unprecedented. One of the adventurers suggested that the dungeon boss was much stronger than the moon leopard eclipse. He thought to himself that initially only 2 people could have handled this, but other adventurers helped them win. The leader began to say that if such a monster were released, it would cause enormous damage. He asked if those present would help him defeat him. When asked about the location, the man replied that it was the Sea of Trees. At this time, John found a new big soul and began to pull his hand towards it. He immediately thought that he would have enough opponents. A formidable enemy appeared right in front of him, and John realized that he had not wasted his skill points in vain. With a small grin, he decided to begin the fight. At that moment, a sphere flew up to him and said that the enemy looked very strong. She added that there was no point in saying stupid things, because her strength was not measured by the level of the monster. John replied that now was not the time for talking, as the fight had already begun. He began to dodge the monster's first attacks. John immediately realized that the monster could kill him with one blow. He also noted that the monster moves freely in the shadows, making its actions predictable. Suddenly, a storm of darkness appeared out of nowhere, leaving John stumped. He realized that the monster had created conditions in his favor. John said with confidence that he would have to give it his all. John explained that the monster combines cyclical activity and cruelty to further enhance its physical abilities. It is obvious that in the dark he moves with greater speed, outpacing any attack. Suddenly, several shadows appeared in front of him, and John was surprised, not knowing that the monster was capable of such a thing. He began using the technique of flickering light to illuminate everything around him. At this time, John's friend stopped the adventurer and asked her to step aside. When the girl asked what happened, the guy replied that it was about the next boss. Hearing this, she confidently said that it didn't matter, because she would just complete her mission. Then the boy said that the moon leopard was an opponent that the 2 of them could defeat. After that, he asked her if she thought John could defeat him on his own. The girl answered without hesitation that she could, and there was confidence in her voice. The guy asked again if she was really confident in John's powers. Having received an affirmative answer, he agreed with her opinion with a smile. Meanwhile, John, fighting the monster, said that he did not intend to lose. After the victory, the system showed his new achievements, and John noted that this was a strong opponent. Because of him, he was unable to level up as quickly as he had hoped. At that moment, the fairy said that with such battles, one could raise the same number of levels. John agreed, adding that it was a great place to hunt without competition, and with high-ranking demons. The fairy wondered how many more people could compete with him. She exclaimed that John was getting stronger at an amazing rate. She was sure that he was no longer the same John that could be defeated by a super high-class adventurer. Then John said that his strength was now incomparably greater than before. Hearing this, the fairy decided not to relax and said that the current John is still far from the same as he was in his past life. At this time, one of the adventurers became upset, realizing that his technique was not refined enough. At that moment, John's friend came up to him and said that he needed to talk to him. The man turned around and asked what happened. The boy then explained that he wanted to ask a high-ranking adventurer to join him on a dungeon raid. Hearing this, the man replied that if he went with them, he would simply die. Then the guy objected that this is usually how it happens, but John is stronger than him. These words greatly surprised the man. He did not know how to react. The guy continued by saying that John could get a super high rank. However, he voluntarily remained on high. The man admitted that he found it hard to believe and simply asked for his name. The guy replied that he was sure that the Adventurers Guild would confirm John's abilities. The man grinned and said he wanted to see John's strength for himself. At this time, the guy returned home, where his sister met him. She reported that she had received notification of her rank. John was surprised that it came so quickly. At this point, the sphere invited Kitty to test its strength. When the girl opened the letter, she found out that she was of the same rank as John. The girl was delighted by this news, and John calmly continued drinking his drink. The sphere noticed that the guy looked happy and flew closer. Hearing this, he replied that he was glad, but was afraid that his little sister might be in danger. Kitty reassured him, saying that she would not do anything dangerous and asked him not to worry. Sphere thought John's words sounded like a challenge. Kitty confirmed that she would be extremely careful. Then John, with a smile on his face, said that he believed these words. At this time, the adventurer felt the guy's magical power and thought that he was facing an unusual person. He knocked on the door, John opened it, and the man asked if he had come to the right place. The guy answered and he said that his friend told him about him. The man continued that he had been told that John was no worse than a super high-class adventurer. John then asked if the man was a super high-class adventurer. He answered in the affirmative and added that strong partners were needed for a trip to the dungeon. The man asked if John would allow him to test his abilities. The guy thought, realizing that in front of him was one of the strongest adventurers he had ever met. After that, John asked where they wanted to test it. At that moment, Kitty came out and asked if everything was okay, to which the guy replied that she shouldn't worry. Then he said with a smile that he would be back for lunch. As they stood facing each other, John was surprised that the man was going to fight with his bare hands. He told John not to relax. John replied that if the man was unarmed, then so would he. The man warned that he would not be easy to deal with, as he was one of the strongest super high-ranking adventurers. Having prepared for the fight, John said that he would not relax. Seeing the guy's mood, the man noted his kind heart. After John was able to repel the first attack, the man was surprised that he did not have a weapon on him. After this, John asked if the man now recognized him. He replied that he became even more curious. Then John said that he was not going to stay there. He added that apparently the man still doesn't take him seriously. The man explained that this was necessary to test his abilities. Hearing this, John said that it was almost dinner time and he didn't want to be late. Then the man noted that he had not seen John in such an elevated mood for a long time. After that, he decided to show him one of his techniques. The man added that no one had ever managed to defeat him on the first try. Then John thought that he could not escape the gaze of the wise demon. The third level of release allowed him to use his abilities to the maximum and process visual information. At that moment, the man started shouting, asking if John could see his super speed. The guy just started to reason that if you strike at such speed, you can always find a way to retreat. After these words, John calmly fought off another attack from the man. The adventurer said he didn't expect the guy to be left without a single scratch. Then John explained that it was enough for him to see and predict all the actions. The man couldn't believe why John was even in such a high rank. He also realized that the guy's friend was absolutely right. People like John deserve to be at a super high rank. At this point, the guy asked what dungeon they were talking about. The man began to tell that in a week, a super high-class dungeon would appear in the Sea of Trees. High-class adventurers are called upon to defeat him, and they asked John to join them. Without further ado, the boy agreed, which made the man happy. Then he began to apologize for today's surprise, and said that he would contact John. After some time, John returned home and told his sister about this. Kitty, worried, asked if her brother was hurt and if he was all right. John apologized for making her worry and said that everything was fine. Then the sphere appeared and began to ask what the man had said about the dungeon, asking for details. John said that in a week they should go to a super high-rank dungeon. At this time, the adventurer thought that if this continued, they would not be able to win. She walked into the man's office and opened the door wide. This man turned out to be her father, whom she asked to tell her about the skills. The man responded menacingly that he had advised his daughter to give up her adventures because they were dangerous. Restka continued to beg her father to tell her about something important. The man turned around and couldn't understand where the girl got her stubbornness from. The girl began to say that her father devoted himself to research for her sake. Then the man simply pointed to the table where she could see the information she needed. He explained that it contained research that she wanted to know. The wildly happy adventurer thanked her father and said she would take a look. At this time, the adventurer with a bad reputation was still sitting in his favorite establishment. Hearing the noise, he turned around and asked who had decided to stop him from drinking. The demon in human form began to ask if he was a super high-class adventurer. The guy replied that he was in a bad mood and would not answer questions. With a menacing look, he said that if they came for business, then let them leave. Then the demon, with madness in his eyes, declared that he had come to kill the adventurer. Hearing this, the boy stood up and asked if the demon thought he would let it go. The demon replied that in battle he would immediately see which of them was weak. At this point, the guy got angry and started shouting that he would finish him off in 3 seconds. Dodging the quick attacks, the demon only increased the guy's anger. After that, he made a clear attack, saying that even among super high-ranking fighters, there was a difference in strength. Pouring wine over himself, the guy began to ask what other difference they were talking about. He then shouted that he had not yet shown his true strength. At that moment, the demon said that he hit the guy with all his strength, and he turned out to be stronger than he thought. The adventurer said that as soon as he killed the demon, he would look for information, because he wanted to know his name. Then the demon said that he could call him Hermes. The adventurer just laughed and said that he would definitely find out who he really was later. After a few minutes of fighting, the demon realized that the enemy was sucking magic out of his opponent. The adventurer said that he would beat the demon long and hard and would not let him leave. The demon just chuckled, saying he wasn't sure about that, and the fight continued. He felt that the skills of an adventurer were not suitable for the super high class. Then the guy began to concentrate his strength in his hands, and declared that the demon was very wrong. The demon, seeing this, shouted that this world is not ruled by technology. He knew that if they combined their skills, they could create something more powerful than a demon's body. After defeating the adventurer, he said that since he was really super high-ranked, we should use his power. Taking away some skills, the demon laughed, feeling the potential of these skills. Suddenly, the guy's phone rang, and the demon noticed it. After reading the message, he realized that the 4 super tall adventurers were leaving the city, and the forces would be dispersed. With a crazy smile, the demon said that this was great news. A week later, John was walking down the street when he came across another adventurer. The guy carefully asked what he wanted. The man replied that John had already become popular among adventurers, and everyone was waiting for him. This did not surprise John at all, and he accepted this information calmly. Suddenly, an adventuress appeared behind him and asked how long he had been waiting. John replied that he had heard about the difficulties of this dungeon, and so decided to help. The girl smiled and said that she was very glad that he was nearby. Then, with a smile on his face, John said that he would do everything in his power. The man was surprised that the girl could do more than just frown. After some time, John's friend said that they needed to board the helicopter when everyone was ready. At this time, the demon fed the dog and said that the long-awaited day had come. 4 super tall adventurers are attacking the dungeon, and 2 are outside. The demon understood that now only that same guy could stop him. However, he decided that he would be in perfect shape for the rematch. Having prepared for battle, the demon said that it was time to begin. He approached 2 guards who informed him that entering this dungeon alone required a high rank. When they asked to show the guild card, the demon immediately hit one of the girls. He asked if it was true that if he was not going to enter, he should not show anything. When the guard confirmed this, the demon kicked him and said that he had the right answer. He didn't think he could cause a stir on his own. That's why I decided it was time to create real chaos on the streets. Having activated the portal, the demon called upon his brothers to come out and help him. He told them that he had an important task and asked them to begin the real destruction. The demon was eager to see what would happen. Cries of demons appearing echoed throughout the streets, and evacuations began. At this time, Catherine, Kitty, and Jessica were glad that they had managed to finish their business in the middle-rank dungeon. Suddenly, they saw a demon and asked if he was an adventurer from the guild. As soon as he noticed Kitty, he froze in place, unable to move. Coming to his senses, he asked her if she had an older brother. The girl answered in the affirmative, and then the demon smiled sweetly. Then he decided to find out her brother's name, which confused the girl. A moment from the previous fight came back to him. And then the realization came that the demon had finally found John. At that moment, one of the guys approached the girls and said that they shouldn't have named the name, because the demon was acting suspiciously. As the demon reached for the girls, Kitty covered Catherine with her hand. She didn't understand what was happening and why there was such tension between them. At this point, the demon explained that he was looking for her brother and asked for forgiveness for the fact that she would have to go with him. The girls were confused and did not understand what was being discussed. Hearing this, the demon realized that he had no other choice. With a wild look, he declared that he would deal with them all. He assured them that it would all be over soon, but the girls continued to stand there in bewilderment. Kitty began to realize that this demon was quite strong and looked more terrifying than her brother. She realized that even if the 3 of them fought, they would not be able to win. Kitty realized that the demon was hunting her, which meant that he would first eliminate her friends. At that very second, she pounced on the guy with a sword in her hands. She shouted at the girls to come quickly for help. While the girls stood there in confusion, Kitty continued to shout that she would stop him. They started running away and asking Kitty for forgiveness for leaving her. The demon thought that if he let the girls go, there would be a greater chance that John would show up. Releasing the sword of one of the girls, he turned to her and asked how long she thought she could fight him. At that moment, Kitty shouted that she would not fight because the guy would not be able to win anyway. This greatly confused the demon, and he did not understand what the girl meant. Kitty explained that since the demon's real target was not her, he would not be able to harm her until he achieved his goal. Then the demon said that the girls would have to do what he said. Kitty shouted again that she completely agreed. The demon could not understand what was happening to her and what she was planning. He was confused by the fact that she agreed so quickly, and he wondered if it was because she trusted her brother. After these thoughts, the demon told the girls to follow him. At this time, a man from the helicopter said that there was a huge accumulation of magical energy. Another man argued that they needed to attack the dungeon as soon as possible. Suddenly, one of the adventurers shouted sharply that they needed to wait. He started shouting that there was a massive crush in the city, and the chaos was only getting worse. Hearing this, John began to worry about his sister. The adventurer said they needed to turn around to prevent further destruction. Then one of the men said that it was important to prevent chaos, but they had more important things to do. As soon as he voiced that it was a bad idea, everyone looked at him askance. The man began to explain that the dungeon was very unusual and that the magical power increased exponentially. He wanted to convey to them that if they turned back now to calm the city, other problems would arise here. In other words, the man said that they should have split up. They began to distribute 2 detachments, one of which would go to the city. One of the adventurers said that he was not at all against this idea. John, however, thought that his sister's safety should be his priority, and therefore he needed to go back. Then one of the men said that they needed to split into groups of 3 to better concentrate their forces on the squad attacking the dungeon. They decided that John would go back to the city with the adventuress. However, one of them was against it and wanted one of the guys to be swapped for John. He explained this by saying that every group needs a leader, and John's friend is needed for the response team. At this point, John shouted that he wanted to be on the response team and could not go into the dungeon. Then the man said that his offer was rejected because he had no right to do so. Hearing this, John said that he would then act himself. The adventurer began to say that he needed his help and asked him to stay. At that moment, the girl asked if the guy was worried about his sister. When John answered positively, the girl immediately said that she would protect her. John believed the girl, and she responded by saying that she would definitely take care of her. After that, saying that she was faster than a helicopter, she returned towards the city. After this, the man began to tell them to clear the dungeon and return to the city as soon as possible. John looked at the man with a little aggression, but agreed with him. At that moment, the man thought that he wanted to see what the guy was capable of.